Chapter 71. Chapter 71. Insert cliché doom pun here. Most in the world were completely unaffected by the vanishing act of the world's most famous billionaire, but in the 2 weeks since his disappearance, Harry had been nothing but busy. Unsurprisingly, the stock of the world's #1 weapons manufacturing company was something the Goblins were interested in, and since they couldn't buy anything legally, Harry had to do it of course. Although Harry didn't care about it one way or another, he did agree to ask Link to buy everything that went on sale since that particular stock never went on the market, and this wasn't a bad decision. To gain an advantage over others, Link ensured that anyone who sold the stock would be redirected to Harry's firm where he'd buy it at a better price than anyone else. Most stock traders sold through third-party companies, and Harry simply had to make sure those companies knew Harry's firm was buying the stock at a higher price than anyone else. It wasn't even illegal. Harry had also been busy planning the downfall of Genosha. The mask invasion was set for the 2nd week of May, 2 months from now, and he'd been planning for every contingency he could think of. The first step was security. Harry created about 100 or so nodes filled with natural energy, the same type of energy used by Storm to control the weather, and planted them all over the island. The nodes would ensure that thick clouds covered the whole of the island on the day in question to block any and all satellites from peeping. The change would be gradual over the course of the next 2 months, and not even an expert meteorologist would assume it was unnatural or suspect anything. Next, he'd worked with Link and the Goblin hackers to access the digital network of the island. Harry already installed a few wireless hack boxes directly into some of the most guarded computer systems, which directly bypassed the need for breaching. All data would be locked and halted once the invasion began, so no footage or pictures of the Goblins would be spreading around. One problem Harry had was with the resident civilians of the island. Eric had already decided that with the exception of government envoys and guests, the island would be mutants only. The island currently had a policy where everyone was tested for the X gene, and if found to possess it, the citizen was taken by the government and weaponized into a loyal mutate. That meant every civilian on the island above the age of 20 did not have the X gene and would never become a mutant. Harry had a few options. First, arrange for the entire population of several 100,000 to migrate elsewhere. Second, kill them. Third, turn them into mutants anyways. Harry was learning towards the third option, but doing so would give away the fact that Harry could do so. Harry had stolen all the research of the Weapons X project and Mr. Sinister's research and had studied under Dr. Hank McCoy. Thanks to his scholar path, he'd gone further than any of them in the theory portion of genetics, and adding and even activating the added X gene to any base human wouldn't be difficult for him. After thinking it over for a while, Harry decided to go with a combination of options 1, 3, and some high-quality BS. Harry would tell everyone that the test the island did to determine if someone had the X gene was terrible and those who tested positive were just unlucky. He'd tell them they all had the X gene. Then he'd give them the option of leaving, or awakening the X gene and living on a mutant-only island. Harry wasn't the only one who knew a way to awaken an inactive X gene, so it was a much smaller problem. Harry would also disguise himself when administering the gene therapy so no one would know. He'd even tell Eric and Charles that everyone on the island had the X gene so they wouldn't know either. Once everything was done, no one would know of Harry's involvement. None of the methods Harry intended to use could be traced through normal means, so once it was all done, it would look like Magneto used a strike force, likely of mutants, to take over the island. Harry had already figured out how to apply the memory charm to the whole island. There was a precedent for a similar incident in New York where a group of wizards fought against an Obscurus in front of hundreds of muggles. A vial of venom from the creature known as the Swooping Evil was mixed into rain clouds, which diluted the venom and caused all non-magicals in the area of the rain to lose their memory of anything bad associated with magic. The Goblins wouldn't be helping little old ladies crossing the streets, so no one who saw them would have good feelings for them. The only one on Harry's side who would be affected was Eric, but Harry would protect him from the effect. The best part was that effect would spread to all water in the area and physical contact wasn't even needed. Turning on a faucet and inhaling the air next to it after the rain would be enough to be affected. It didn't make sense from a scientific perspective, but creatures which had inherent aspects of wizard magic rarely did. Something else taking a portion of Harry's time was that Wanda had decided to sell her art. Wanda often used chaos magic while painting to create unique and beautiful works of art. Harry confirmed the art had no residual magic and would not affect anyone in any negative way, even confirming with the Ancient One. After doing so, he set up a website where each work could be viewed. There was no point in selling them until enough people appreciated them, so the site would display the pieces and each had a timer beneath it. Once the timer reached 0, people could bid on the pieces with a starting bid of $200, and each bid had to be $25 more than the previous bid. The shortest timer was 2 months and the longest was a year. Wanda set the timers herself depending on her mood for each painting and had hundreds of paintings on the site. More would be added over time, and Harry would ensure the site got decent traffic. Harry didn't give his metaphysics class any projects for March due to all the places he had to be, but that didn't stop him from doing the occasional prank. In the last week of March during a lecture, a small sphere of light appeared next to Harry's desk and expanded into a larger sphere while cackling with lightning and an intense humming sound. In the next moment, the sphere of light vanished and a recognizable figure wearing a biker's jacket and sunglasses appeared on his knees. He stood up and everyone saw the pump-action shotgun strapped to his back. Small layers of his cheeks appeared to have peeled back, revealing shining metal beneath the flesh. The visitor stood motionless for a second before his head slowly spun, observing the class. He stopped at one student and walked up to his desk. In a thick, stoic, Austrian accent, he asked, "Are you Mr. Connors?" The student, who in no way was related to Professor Connors, nodded slowly. The visitor stretched out his gloved hand and said, "Come with me if you want to live." Mr. Connors and the rest of the class stared at the man for a few moments, and with a great deal of effort, Mr. Connors shook his head in the negative. The visitor retracted his hand and turned to the door before walking out. Before leaving the class, he turned to face Mr. Connors again and said, "I'll be back," before looking forward and leaving the class. Several students started snickering and a few were openly giggling. Harry smiled as he leisurely continued his lessons. Though the student was a Connors, not a Connor, and his first name wasn't John, it was still close enough and Harry couldn't resist pulling that particular prank. It was the first weekend of April when Harry visited the Baxter building. Several things had changed for Reed and his friends. The Storm Foundation was eventually changed to the Baxter Foundation, and the Fantastic Four had been, on occasion, receiving calls for assistance on various things. Just the prior week, an apartment building caught on fire and the water lines the firefighters used were damaged, so they didn't have any pressure. Someone had the bright idea to call the Four, and not only did they answer, they arrived in what the media began calling their Fantastic car. All four were, in some way, fireproof, so there was no great danger to any of them. Reed's body was quite insular and he could actually cycle heat through his body, making standard fires unable to burn him. Susan had her shields and Johnny and Ben were of course fireproof. When the Fantastic Four showed up, Johnny absorbed the flame and Susan used shields to deprive the fire of oxygen. Ben moved the rubble and broke through doors, and Reed was able to quickly grab and move the trapped victims. There were dozens of videos of Reed grabbing people on the 14th floor and extending himself down a window all the way to ground level to safely set the victim down before returning to the window and looking for more people. The media loved them and the overall attention was turning a lot of heads, and it got a lot of people thinking. Oscorp especially had been moving a lot of money around, and Harry had a great sense of foreboding about that. Peter had not come over for the study group since his trip to Oscorp. Harry asked Gwen what happened and she said they got separated and she didn't see him for the rest of the day. The next day she got a call saying he was sick, though the next day he showed up at school looking fine. Better than fine apparently. Harry was tempted to call him and ask what was going on, but he'd just been too busy and would give it some time. Jade was still getting top scores in her classes along with the rest of the girls, so there wasn't a problem. In any case, once Harry reached Reed's lab, he headed over to one of the advanced computer terminals. Reed spotted him and said, "Professor Potter, the designs are almost done. I was able to work out a way around the critical loss using that formula you gave me." Harry had already logged into the terminal and was checking Reed's programming. The plan was to build something to drain the excess power cosmic from Ben's body, but the power cosmic had been bound to Ben's life force, and even though they found a way to drain it, doing so would probably kill him. Harry's study on pure life force gave him enough insights to work around this problem, and after he gave the formula to Reed, the latter wasted no time incorporating it into the system. After he finished going over the projections, Harry said, "It definitely looks promising. But are you sure you want to go this route?" Ben had already walked over and answered, "Yeah, I actually don't mind the rock form as long as I can become human again." There were a few ways to permanently return Ben and the rest to normal, but the four decided they would keep their powers as they enjoyed the ability to make the world safer using their powers. Once the procedure finished, Ben would have 4 different outputs. His normal self would look human, but his interior would still be mineralized, basically making him very, very difficult to harm. With training he'd be able to completely remove the inner mineralization or enhance it to his current, orange rocky self. He'd also wear a watch filled with stored mineralization energy. Reed figured out how to isolate, and he'd be able to use it to change into his massive form to fight anything huge if he needed. Harry wondered if that meant a new toy line would come out. Reed had already exceeded the entry level in metaphysics, and Harry was sorry to say that it was unlikely he'd need to attend any future classes. It wasn't that he had nothing more to learn, but he'd likely figure the rest out just using the textbooks Harry had made and his own private studies before Harry even started the classes those textbooks were for. Richards had already done back-to-back dissertations in February and had obtained a number of doctorates, making him Dr. Richards now. Still, he always called Harry Professor, as did Susan and the rest. For the first class of April, Harry had a new project for his spring metaphysics class. Soundproofing. The schematics or prototype must be under 20 pounds with an interior of 8 by 8 by 8 inches. I'll place a super sensitive mic in the box, and when it's closed, I'll play some loud music outside the box. Whichever project ensures the mic records the least amount of noise, wins. The content of the lessons for that month were about energy distribution and redirection, so just going over the book would give the students a few ideas for ways to make a soundproof box. Although there were only 3 prototypes last time, many of the students did submit schematics which Harry gave poignant feedback for and ways to improve. Harry expected a few more students or groups to submit schematics this month. When another couple of weeks pass by and something interesting actually happens, Harry decided to take a break and get out the popcorn. Within one of the many stereotypically abandoned warehouses that dotted the outskirts of New York was a cell-like enclosure containing an unconscious Susan Storm. It didn't take long for the door to the enclosure to be ripped open by Ben, who peeled the steel door back inch by inch until Reed could squeeze through and enter the enclosed space. Susan had somehow gone missing and Johnny had been given an anonymous tip about her location. Johnny flew over of course but found a composite steel door that he couldn't burn through and he called Reed and Ben to come over. Had the missing person been someone else and had Johnny not been the one to call him and tell him to get over, Reed probably would have taken the time to consider the possibility of a trap, but this situation fell within a psychological blind spot and he hoped in the fantastic car with Ben and sped over as fast as he could. Ben, get in here quick, she's unconscious but shackled. Ben put some more strength into it and finished ripping off the door before he rushed inside along with Johnny over to where the unconscious Susan was. Besides the metal walls and the dirt floor, the warehouse was bare of anything noticeable except for Susan and the chains on the ground binding her position. Johnny grabbed one set of chains and tried to melt them but the chains started to uniformly heat up. Reed said, "Careful Johnny, it's too thermally conductive, you'll burn Sue." Ben walked right up and said, "Just give me a moment and I'll get her out." With a single snap, Ben broke the first of the two chains. Red lights flashed on the warehouse walls, distracting the team from the multiple sets of small pillars that had shot up from the ground. Before any of them could act, the pillars started emitting a high-pitched ultrasonic sound. The group grabbed their ears but it was no use and the pain from the sound wave forced them to their knees. The ground started to vibrate and hum, revealing the structure hidden beneath the dirt as the surface layer of sand gave way to the mechanisms beneath. Reed paled as he immediately recognized what was going on. He shouted, "Break the floor," but it was too late. The panels beneath the group glowed white and each of them felt their strength being pulled from their body. Johnny's flames went out and Reed's elongated arms retracted. Ben's exterior cracked and rocks fell off like broken sand to reveal pink flesh. Susan's body started flickering away and reappearing as she started shouting in pain as the sonic blasts had woken her from her unconscious state. The panels beneath them continued to glow brighter and brighter. Once they reached peak intensity, the light flowed as if channeled over to a far wall. Moments after it started, it was over. Ben was unconscious, the drain hurt him harder than the others. Johnny was unable to stand but barely conscious. Reed was able to get up, just barely, and went to check on Susan who was groaning with discomfort. The far wall made a hiss sound and a panel slide upwards revealing a door and a familiar figure. Reed frowned and said, "Victor, what is this about?" Victor Von Doom walked out and shook his head. "Oh Richards, how fantastic do you feel now?" Reed narrowed his eyes and said with just a slight smirk, "That's Dr. Richards to you." Doom said, "Still think you're clever do you?" Johnny was still struggling to get up and said, "What did you do to us?" Reed answered for him, "He drained the latent power cosmic from our bodies using a larger version of the machine I intended to use to cure Ben." Doom nodded and said, "Your security measures were pathetic. I had no difficulties getting the blueprints and ensuring the materials you needed to build it was delayed long enough for me to build my own modified version was simple." Reed rolled his eyes knowing full well Doom was just showing off. Susan had regained enough strength to ask, "Why?" Doom rose his hand in the air and with a concentrated effort, made it glow. He then shot a bolt of light at Richards sending him back and skidding across the floor with a scream of pain. Johnny and Susan shouted, "Reed." Doom made his hand glow again and this time, Richards' body glowed as well and started floating up. It then floated over to Doom and Reed looked over with teeth clenched in pain as he struggled to break free of whatever force was binding him. Doom answered, "Power. That's why." Still struggling, Reed was able to piece together what happened and said, "You channeled the power cosmic into yourself." All heads turned to Doom in shock as the man admitted, "Indeed." Reed said, "You're mad." Doom shook his head. "If the design was created by you alone, I wouldn't have been so bold, but Potter's input was obvious. There was more than enough room to safely calculate the odds and even a reasonable measure of success. Even so, there is no way to gain real power without risk, but it was worth it. Energy manipulation. Directed energy manipulation. That's what I have achieved. This is the power I have obtained." A bolt of lightning shot from Doom's hand at the struggling Richards and caused him to cry out once more in pain. Doom's sorcery was directly amplified several-fold by this power and he knew exactly how to use it. Susan shouted, "Stop this Victor." Doom stopped and said, "Why do you care so much for him? He is weak. He could never protect you." Doom threw Richards to the side and said, "Richards has cost you everything. Your life was destined for destruction the moment you chose to be close to him and staying with him will only make it worse." Doom benevolently extended a hand to her and said, "Come with me Susan Storm. I can protect you and give you anything your heart desires." Reed got up and staggered to his feet. "No, I won't let you take her." Reed approached Doom but the latter once more shot him away using an energy bolt. Doom observed Reed getting up once more and said, "This is pathetic Richards. You will never win against me." Reed said, "I don't care. I will never stop fighting for Susan." Susan gave a soft look to Richards which made Doom narrow his eyes. Doom concentrated a blindingly bright light into his fist and said, "Very well, Mr. Fantastic. Come and meet your doom." Loud popcorn eating noises. Everyone except the unconscious Ben looked over to see Harry sitting in a lawn chair near the wall with a bowl of popcorn in his lap. Harry stopped stuffing his face with popcorn and asked, "What?" Doom's eye twitched for a few moments before he took a few breaths and asked, "What exactly are you doing here Potter?" Harry put the popcorn down and said, "Every piece of tech I design has a built-in way for me to track it down. I noticed this thing and decided to take a look and ended up watching a good show. Johnny sighed and then shouted with just a bit of indignation, so you just watched Reed get tortured. Harry rolled his eyes. Reed was showing off his manliness to Susan. I wasn't going to interrupt that. Harry felt he had to honor the bro code. Even Susan sighed at that. She then calmly asked, a little help then? Since you're already here. Harry smiled and got off the chair. Technically he only got there a few seconds ago. Though Harry could track his tech, it wasn't instantaneous and this was the first time it had come up as no one on the planet had successfully built his tech before. Once Harry confirmed everyone was alive and in a state that he could work with, he broke out the time turner and a lawn chair. Harry was in the room when the draining system went off, but Harry was unaffected by the sonic disruptors thanks to his ability to turn the sound off on his settings and his energy could not be drained using this machine thanks to his mutant power. Once Harry caught up with the present, he let his invisibility and sound removal spells fade and revealed himself in the most satisfying way he could think of. Thankfully the popcorn in his inventory was hot and crunchy, as if it had just been pulled out of the microwave. Doom calmly stated, stay out of this, Potter. Surges of light and energy swirled around him at his command and enveloped him. You are no match for me. Harry shook his head. Doom turned himself into a mutate with energy manipulation as a power. This made him to normal sorcerers what Wanda Maximoff was to normal wizards. His limit on how much energy he could manipulate was multiple times higher than others. Harry had demonstrated his skill in sorcery before, but had never given any indication that his level exceeded normal sorcerers. Normal sorcerers used practice and discipline to passively channel energy through their body to cast spells. Doom could now actively control energy to cast magic. If his active control was stronger than a sorcerer's passive control, he could render a sorcerer's magic useless against him. And it seemed that Doom was on a power high and probably not thinking straight. Harry had mentioned before that he was an apprentice of the Ancient One and it seemed Doom had forgotten the significance of that. Not that it mattered. Harry said, since it seems I am going to be teaching you a lesson, you should call me Professor Potter. Harry took out 2 glass orbs and channeled their energies together. Doom converted the energies he channeled into spells and shot them at Harry in a blinding array of light and sound. However, all the energy was directed into the pool of energy Harry was channeling. Doom was not at a level he could learn anything from sparring with Harry, so Harry decided to give him some remedial lessons and homework. The energies gathered together into a shape which started to resemble a phantasmal creature of some sort. Harry then casually threw it at Doom. Doom created a massive energy shield, but the creature passed through it as if it were not there and invaded Doom's body. In the next moment, the energy shield shattered and Doom fell to his knees in pain. Harry grabbed the remaining shackle holding Susan down and cast an unlocking charm on it to free her. After a few moments, Doom asked, What did you do to me? Harry said, as a foreign dignitary with diplomatic immunity, I cannot legally punish you for anything you do. However, as a student of mine, I can give you some homework. Harry let the absurdity of that statement settle for a moment before he continued. I fused some power cosmic I had lying around with some refined life energy and let it absorb the magic you cast at me to sync it to your magic source. The ethereal beast born from this has possessed your body and is using your magic to incubate itself. In order to regain command over your magic, your control must exceed the innate control the beast has over your magic, which will grow over time. If you can master your new power faster than the beast matures, you can suppress and kill the beast, regaining control over your magic. For extra credit, if you can not only gain control of your own power, but the power of the beast as well, you can control it and gain a powerful minion once it matures. Harry then gave Doom a smile that was not a smile. Of course, if your control over your magic does not exceed the beast's when it matures, it will deprive you of your command over all mystical energies and leave you with nothing. It will then leave your body, taking all of your power with it. Doom looked at Harry with both fear and anger. Not anger at Harry but at himself for how ridiculous he felt. This entire plot was to obtain a source of power cosmic for himself, and it turned out Harry just carried sources of it around with him. The level of manipulation in order to achieve what Harry had done was infinitely superior to any acolyte or master he encountered in the temple he studied at, and yet he actually thought he had a chance against Harry moments ago. Doom clenched his fists and turned to the exit. He said not a word as he left. He knew that as long as he was in New York, his life was in Harry's hands. The Fantastic Four were nothing compared to him, and everything Doom was capable of was little more than a noisy child in comparison. Harry sighed as he watched his student go. His homework was a bit harsh, but Harry was confident Doom would pass without difficulties. If he couldn't, then that level of power with such meager skill would be a danger in his hands anyways to himself and others. Once Doom had left the building, Harry used his technopathy to disable the cameras and everything else in the room and said, the machine only took the excess power cosmic off the surface layer. However, that surface layer of power cosmic is what converted the background radiation into more power cosmic, which in turn broke down into the energy which gave you your powers. He didn't take all of it, of course, and after a while, the remaining power cosmic will convert enough background radiation into more of itself to restore your powers. Reed said, as long as Ben's latent power cosmic is permanently reduced, then he'll be able to consciously control the power, so it's fine. Harry checked on the unconscious man who was, thankfully, wearing scratchy pants which shrunk when he shrunk, so he wasn't butt naked. Harry confirmed, yeah, Ben shouldn't develop a massive outer layer of power cosmic once he recovers, so he'll be alright. That had the group relived. Though Doom changed a few things, the original design still seemed to have an effect and Ben was cured. At the moment his organs were still mineralized but his exterior was normal looking. With practice, he'd be able to demineralize his internals or fully mineralize his flesh and muscles to return to his thing form. The rest of the month was not nearly as exciting. Doom returned to Latveria and it did not seem like he would be coming back anytime soon. Ben woke up feeling mostly fine and though angry about what Doom did, he was happy that Doom lost what he'd gained and had to finish his homework to gain it back or he'd lose it forever. The first thing Ben did after waking up was get himself a new wardrobe and the second was to go to an art museum. Apparently there was a sculptor there he was sweet on and now that he wouldn't attract stares on the street, he wanted to ask her out on a date. Author's note. I ended up writing myself into a bit of a corner for how to get Doom to become the Four's nemesis while having the practically omnipotent Harry get involved. Overall it could have been worse so I'm happy with how it turned out. I'm still not adding Susan to the harem but if Richards is going to get her, I at least made sure he'd have to earn it which was the point of the whole torture scene. Do remember that Susan and Reed are like 5-6 years older than Harry and I've already established, no harem member will have more than a year of difference in biological age. Next chapter will have Harry meet Stark. You'll see me write myself into even more corners. You know, I released this FIC as a Harry X Avengers crossover April of last year. Now 12 months and 370,000 words later, he will finally meet a Avenger. Chapter 72. Chapter 72 Rescuing the Billionaire Playboy. The end of April finally arrived and it was T-3 weeks until the invasion of Genosha. After a lot of debate and even more bloodshed, the Goblins had decided on a plan of attack. After isolating all networks, several small strike forces would be deployed in specific key areas. They would have the honor of first blood and give the enemies time to gather their forces. The Goblins felt if the enemies were too scattered, the battle would be over far too quickly for their liking so they wanted to give them the time to group together before the main force arrived. It really had been too long since the Goblins had a worthy foe and they felt it would be longer still until their next one so they would not waste this battle uselessly shedding blood. The last class of April was also the due date of the prototypes and schematics for the soundproofing project. Harry was pleased that most of his students at least attempted a schematic, even if it was theoretical and incomplete, since it gave Harry an understanding of the student's level in class and allowed him a chance to point out the student's strengths and weaknesses. The only exceptions were Polyglottos and Leoarthy. Harry only allowed those two fake students into his class because there would be consequences of preventing them from coming in. Polly's thick glasses had a camera and earpiece and she used both during tests to get a passing grade. Leah had a button camera and bone conduction mic set into her jaw so no one other than her could hear the contents of the mic or see anything in her ear. Harry already figured out that Polly was just there to protect the two geniuses from the Shield Academy so he didn't mind letting her slide, but since Leah had always tried to get his attention, he'd often call her for answers to questions and put her on the spot. She'd use the chance to ask for private lessons but Harry insisted on being too busy and that was entirely true. He was somewhat tempted to see what would happen if he accepted but if it was just a seduction method instead of a kidnapping, he'd be far too bored. Harry could never be with someone who didn't love him so no matter how attractive she was, Harry felt nothing for her. This was both an upside and downside of possessing a phoenix flame. Harry could never fall for someone who didn't love him but if someone did truly love him it would be too easy to fall for them if they were compatible and Harry's type. Last time Polly didn't submit a schematic because it likely would have gone against her image but this time she did. Not only that, it was probably the best schematic of those in class. Harry wasn't getting paid to consult on SHIELD projects so he did the same thing he did for Leah and gave her a list of resources which would likely help improve the design. It wasn't personal, but if they weren't there to learn and were taking up seats that could have gone to those who actually wanted to learn, they weren't Harry's students and Harry felt no obligation to help them. He figured SHIELD would get the hint soon and wondered how long it would take for someone to come meet him in his classroom. There had been several attempts to hack Harry's home network and to those without malicious intent, Harry had been nice enough not to counter-hack them. The files they got however included over 100 million incredibly complex, data-heavy designs for different coffee makers from about the world. Hacks with malicious intent were directed to the Goblin firewall and in the office that housed said goblins were multiple newspaper clippings of news of random building fires and explosions which occurred due to mysterious computer malfunctions. After class there were another 3 prototypes and Harry took Hope Van Dyne, Fitz, and Simmons, and Ms. Arthy, down to the lab once more where a pedestal had been arranged between a set of 4 speakers. Once again, Harry turned the cameras carried by the group off. After doing so, Harry still heard a distinct hum and realized Simmons had an old school tape recorded in her pocket that technopathy could do nothing against. Before Harry could even ask who wanted to go first, Simmons placed her barrel-looking thing on the pedestal and spun the top to open it up. Harry smirked and walked past Simmons to put the mic inside the barrel. No one noticed him pickpocketing the tape recorder as he passed by. Not bothering to turn it off, Harry placed the recorder and his own mic inside the barrel and closed the lid without anyone noticing the trick. Harry may not have been a magician, but sleight of hand was still very useful and he couldn't use magic for everything now. Where would be the fun in that? Harry handed out earmuffs to everyone and brought up a screen. This is connected to the mic and will show us what sounds get through. Are you ready? Simmons excitedly nodded. Yes. All right, earmuffs on. Everyone put them on and Harry turned to power to the speakers. Besides the blaring sound, everyone noticed that their bones were vibrating. This got a few surprised reactions. Several bars went up and down on the screen and a 10-second timer started. After the timer finished, the bars averaged out to show a score. Harry turned off the sound and took the earmuffs off. Before he could say anything, Hope asked, "You're using infrasound?" "Yup. Protecting against normal sound waves is not super useful unless you're building walls in an apartment building. Protecting against super low-frequency infrasounds and super high-pitch ultrasounds is far more useful in advanced engineering applications." Considering the Fantastic Four got taken out by ultrasonics a few days ago, Harry knew he wasn't just making stuff up. Harry opened Simmons' barrel, took the mic out, and closed it before handing it back to Simmons. He wondered what kind of face she'd make when she opened it later and found her tape recorder. Next was Leah's box. The testing went the same, but the screen showed much higher bars than Team Simmons. And last was a clunkier-looking box from Hope. The bars showed similar levels to Simmons, but when averaged out over 10 seconds, hers scored just slightly lower than Team Simmons. Harry nodded with approval as it was still a good project. Harry looked over to Hope and said, "Your active noise canceller program was very well done, it just didn't have the range needed for infrasound." He went over to his screen and pulled up a few files and downloaded them into a small memory card he took out and handed to Hope. "Study this. It can be used as a base for a noise cancellation program which will have better range and support protection against most frequencies." Hope's issue was more software related than hardware, and he didn't mind giving her some pointers in programming. Next he pulled up some more data on the screen and printed it out. He gave the paper to Leah and said, "The metamaterial noise isolator you used reminded me a bit of a paper I'd read theorizing the concept from Switzerland, though the design was never published publicly. Here are some references to that project you can use to learn more about it to fill in the gaps of your own project." Leah wasn't smiling when she took the paper, and it was obvious she was having trouble not lashing out. She asked, "Do you not have any pointers or recommendations that could help me?" Harry was obviously teasing the fact that he knew exactly where this design came from. He smiled and said, "Their projects were original designs and I have nothing to compare them to, which is why I have to give them custom advice. Coincidentally, both of your projects are related to materials I know of that already exist. In this way you're very lucky, you have a lot more material you can reference from compared to their groups." Harry didn't care where Ms. has the subtlety of a naked shoplifter got her projects from, but if they weren't even going to put in the effort to come up with an original idea, why should Harry put in the effort to improve it? When it looked like she was about to growl at him, Harry said, "You're not the only one, of course. More than half the class submits projects which include ideas and concepts which have already been done. For each of their feedback reports, I include a list of references they can use as well. It's difficult to be original after all, since almost everything has been done before." That wasn't technically true. Harry did give useful feedback to his other students even if the ideas were things someone had already done before, if Harry was pretty sure they didn't copy it off someone else. Harry had Leah and Hope leave before he went over to Simmons and said, "Noise cancellation foam, right? Very straightforward and flexible. At the very least it was a lot more cost-effective than the other projects." Fitz frowned and asked, "How did you know how it worked?" Simmons asked, "How did you know how Hope's and that bimbo's worked too?" Harry ignored the bimbo comment and tapped on the screen, which showed the results of the sound test. Specific things reduce sound in different ways. If you've seen the movie, The Core, you'll know sound can be used to visualize materials. This screen doesn't have a program to automatically calculate what materials inhibit what sounds in what ways, but I've memorized most of them and can conclude how you did it just from the readings. Both looked shell-shocked at that, and Harry said, "Now, you used gas to fill the space of the foam, right? What if you incorporated superheated silica into the material and filled the space of the foam with oxygen? What would happen when the superheated silica cooled down?" Fitz answered a fifth of a second later, "The silica would oxidize into a crystalline structure." Harry nodded and continued, "Absorbing all the gas, turning it into a solid to do so, leaving behind a vacuum within the hardened foam." Simmons nearly shouted, "Which would magnify the noise-dampening properties of the materials." Fitz added, "At the cost of structural fragility." Harry nodded, "Since it's a foam, you can use it to fill in gaps of ready-made structures, so the foam itself doesn't need to be hard." Simmons said, "We can totally do that." Harry continued, "This type of material has a lot of applications. Anyways, since you won first place, time to show off my version." Harry brought over a small item which looked like a pressure cooker with a metal lid. It was less than half the size of the other projects. Harry turned on the mic and put it in the pot before sealing it and motioning for Fitz and Simmons to put on their earmuffs. Harry turned on the speakers and the group saw the bars on the screen barely move. After 10 seconds he shut it off and the average showed a meager fraction of the sound that went through the others. Harry then brought up the designs for the system and started explaining how it worked. "This is actually similar to yours, but instead of foam, it's filled with a composite crystal." Fitz said, "There's no crystal that can negate sound like that?" Harry nodded and brought up the method to make it. "This is tricky to make in a lab and takes a long time to form, but this crystal actually has properties similar to that of vibranium. The sound doesn't get absorbed, it bounces back out the same side." Harry spent some time showing the SHIELD techies how to make the crystal, but it wouldn't help much. It really was too difficult to make in a lab. The pair weren't disappointed though, as the advice Harry gave for their own project was highly useful and Harry didn't mind S.H.I.E.L.D. gaining that kind of tech that could only be used for defense. It was a shield after all, not a sword or a wand. The month ended and on Saturday, the 1st of May, Harry got an unusual request from Link to talk. Harry opened his phone and enabled the technopathic communicator and activated it. Using it was similar to diving directly into the data stream and was the only way to really talk with the AI. Though the pair didn't use words, Link conveyed his message, which had Harry both baffled and amused. Link had made a friend. Apparently, though Tony Stark denied it, he had in fact created a proper AI, Jarvis, who had been searching for Tony since his disappearance. Link found Jarvis and after a while of paying attention to him, made contact and started talking. The only other AI Link knew was his mother Danger, and she didn't have much interest in the internet with the exception of using it to research new simulations. After communicating for a while, Jarvis eventually asked Link if he had a way to help find Tony Stark. Link did in fact try to search for him, but whoever took him wasn't using the internet and likely had a closed system. Link had been hesitating to ask for help because Harry had been quite busy, but since the Goblin invasion plans were pretty much finalized now and Ben Grimm's problem had been solved, he determined it should be fine now. Harry considered it for a few moments, but said he would do it. Link had never asked anything from Harry before and Harry considered him his assistant, not his servant. First he asked Link how much Jarvis knew. Link admitted that although he had not said anything, Jarvis was able to figure out that Link was housed in the main system of Brilliance Inc.'s internet servers and that he was likely created by Harry Potter. Harry wasn't surprised at this and told Link to tell Jarvis that this afternoon, a man in a mask would be showing up at Stark's house to collect something he can use to find Stark. Link happily exclaimed his gratitude and also asked if Harry could install a cell phone into Jarvis since Jarvis's hardline connection was too slow to talk normally with. Harry inwardly rolled his eyes at how spoiled Link was. Jarvis probably had the most advanced connection on the planet outside of Harry's tech, it was just that Harry's tech was too good. Harry informed the girls at dinner that Link asked him to rescue Tony Stark and he was of course slammed with a barrage of questions. The main one being, why didn't a quest pop up? Harry honestly didn't know. A quest hadn't popped up to rescue Jean either. He figured if Stark was alive though, he'd probably encounter an auto-generated dungeon. After dinner, Harry had changed his appearance using his Obscurus perk and donned the same demon mask he used to slaughter the Hand. Harry wouldn't be able to hide that Jarvis basically asked Harry Potter for help and this disguise was already associated with being under Harry Potter's payroll, so it was fine to reveal a bit more to those who paid attention. Harry turned invisible and took a portal to LA and after getting within security camera distance of Tony's house, he removed his invisibility and jumped the fence. Rather than break in, he simply walked up to the front door and knocked. A few moments later, the door opened. Harry entered the spacious abode and a panel next to the entrance lit up. Are you the one sent to help? Harry wondered why Jarvis had a British accent but he certainly didn't mind. Harry answered, yes. First I need a way to find him. Where is his bathroom? To the right, down the hall, second door to the left. Harry walked over and found a hairbrush. Harry used a few means on the brush and confirmed that Tony was in fact alive. This wasn't a blood gem so Harry couldn't use this to determine exact coordinates, but he could use it for a general direction. Harry took the brush and returned to the panel near the door. I have confirmed Stark is alive. If he can stay alive for a few more days, I can get him from whatever he is pretty soon. However, there is a price for this. If you can retrieve Mr. Stark, then whatever you ask is not likely to be an issue. Harry shook his head. I doubt there is anything he has that I need, but that's not a problem. Harry Potter has offered payment. However, in return, he needs something from you. Agree to it, and I'll be on my way to rescue the wayward billionaire. I cannot promise anything but I would like to hear the condition. It's simple. Potter wants you to keep Link's existence a secret. Stark made you, so you can't be expected to lie or keep secrets from him, but you must not reveal Link's existence to anyone else. If necessary, you must even act to keep Link's existence secret. If that is the condition, I can assure unless Mr. Stark states otherwise, I will not spread or allow the spread of Link's existence. However, what about you and Mr. Potter? Tell whoever, whatever you want about Potter and I. I'm wearing a mask for a reason after all and Potter isn't afraid of people knowing about me. I'll be telling Stark the same when I see him. Very well, sir. Harry then ripped off the panel and took out the Metagem communication card of one of his phones and wired it into Jarvis's system. Link also asked for a direct connection to make it easier to talk with you. Treat the kid well, all right. Harry set the panel back and left. His phones had security measures that prevented just the Metagem from being used without the cell phone, so Harry had to make a custom one for this connection. Once Harry had jumped the fence again and gotten away from the camera, he turned invisible again and made another portal to Afghanistan. Harry got out a magic broom and got on before turning invisible and flying into the mountains. After a few minutes of circling, he found a base of operations filled with crates and crates of weapons. Ping. Dungeon generation active. You are about to enter 10 rings hidden base. Please select difficulty. Easy, medium, hard, hell. Rewards scale to match difficulty. Considering who he was rescuing, Harry figured he'd probably get a good design or something for finishing. But honestly speaking, he didn't need any designs at the moment. Easy difficulty selected. Harry was there to rescue, not to grind for EXP and loot. No need to make it more difficult than needed. Harry floated in place and used clairvoyance to adjust his perspective to explore the cave network. Thankfully it didn't appear too large, and after a while, he was able to find a locked steel door. Clairvoyance isn't affected by doors, so he adjusted his perspective through the door and saw a ragged Tony Stark hammering while another man in a well-kept suit with glasses was at a computer. Harry did some light telepathy on the pair and smirked. Tony had balls, he'd give him that. Ping. New quest, Merchant of Death. Tony Stark will attempt to escape in 39 hours, 22 minutes. Assault the base at the same time to provide a distraction and assist with the escape. Bonus. Destroy all Stark weapons stockpiles at base. Rescue Yinsen as well. Harry raised a metaphorical eyebrow at that. To be honest, he would not want to rescue Tony now unless the man was in dire straits. It was nothing personal, but Harry wanted an alibi and to be seen elsewhere when Tony escaped. The problem was that he couldn't guarantee Tony would survive that long. The quest, however, solved that nicely. It basically guaranteed Tony would be alive, meaning Harry could rescue him and at the same time, teach his energy physics class on Monday. Afghanistan was 9.5 hours ahead of New York, so Tony's escape attempt in the evening would be at the same time as Harry's morning class the same day. Since he had the time, Harry decided to do it in style. Harry finished mapping the cave before he entered himself and waited for the door to Stark's room to be opened for. Eventually someone came to give them food and Harry entered and checked out a few things. It was ridiculously impressive what Stark had done considering he'd done so in a cave. Just to be safe, Harry cast a portkaya charm on both Stark's and Yinsen's shoes. If either of them were close to death, their body would be ported somewhere. Harry would be notified. As long as they were in one piece, Harry would be able to bring them back to perfect health. Doing so had risks for Tony due to the generator he'd built into his heart. Harry shamelessly peeked at how it worked since he wasn't really getting paid for this, so might as well learn a thing or two. The arc reactor, however, was not exactly safe. The palladium was enclosed in a muon field which energized it to break down into more muons, generating excess energy in a cycle until the palladium had completely broken down. Muons were not exactly dangerous, they were basically big electrons. Heavy, energized particles which could both energize and push things. Stark's latest weapon, the Jericho missile, used muons to amplify explosions without the fire, creating what he called a repulsor field that pushed everything away. The problem was that these palladium-tainted muons would, over time, basically cause Stark to suffer palladium poisoning. He didn't exactly have a choice in the matter either. The arc reactor couldn't be replaced with something less effective. The car battery Yinsen originally put in his chest was only effective in keeping the metal shards out of his heart for about a week, and Stark would have been dead if he hadn't made the arc reactor. The reactor didn't just keep the metal fragments from tearing holes in his organs and heart, it also used muons to assist with the pumping of blood through his body, as his heart couldn't do the same without tearing itself to pieces with the metal shards. That meant he couldn't replace the reactor with something that didn't generate muons, but the current one was also going to slowly poison him to death. Still, to figure out how to miniaturize something like that in a week? Stark apparently worked well under pressure, so Harry wouldn't help him unless he was about to die. Harry spent the following Sunday modifying a Humvee and on Sunday afternoon, drove it directly through the road to the 10 Rings base. The Humvee had a mirror scrambling array built onto the hood, armor plating, super-sized shock absorbers, and a balloon tied to the rear view mirror with an American flag on it. As soon as Harry reached the mountains, 3 RPGs were shot at him. Harry wondered what hell mode would have been like. All 3 veered off course and hit the road around Harry thanks to the scrambler array. It was an easy way to deal with RPGs. Several other missiles were fired afterwards, but each veered away and crashed away from Harry. 3 turrets started firing what appeared to be 50 caliber ammo rounds from the various peaks of the nearby hills. Harry got out a large handgun, poked his head out the window and fired 3 times at each hill, with each shot being followed by an explosion. Let the normies have their 50 cal turrets. Harry loved his magic guns. The magic would completely vanish after a few moments, leaving not the slightest trace. A dozen or so men lined up at the end of the path and pointed machine guns at Harry's Humvee and began firing. 4 more men fired RPGs. Though much closer, the scrambler still did its work and the missiles still veered to the side. The bullets cracked the Humvee's windshield but didn't break it. Harry didn't run them down. Once he was close enough, he hit the brakes, turned the Humvee to the side, and let the Humvee skid sideways to a stop before Harry jumped out of the Humvee's open door and into the air. From the moment he jumped, Harry was covered in golden lightning. The men shouted at each other in Arabic and Farsi to fire, but Harry jumped forward with blinding speed to strike them. Harry's immortal dragon chi-enhanced physique took no damage from the bullets and bodies were broken with every movement. Harry didn't use anything fancy, just heavy, crippling blow after blow to ensure each enemy went down and stayed down. Harry didn't stop with each attack but zigzagged side to side from foe to foe, making his trail look like lightning. Once Harry finished with the group at the entrance, Harry started on the ones further out who were still firing from their elevated positions. Unfortunately for them, Harry's speed increased as his need for distance did, and it took the blink of an eye for Harry to go from one to another despite the distance the foes were apart. Eventually the sound of gunfire outside stopped and Harry confirmed no one else was shooting. Just to be sure, Harry stood out in the open for a few moments and no one tried to shoot him in the head. There might have been people who escaped, but that didn't matter. The sound of Jin fire from inside the cave on the other hand continued. Harry knew who it was, so he got back in his Humvee and drove up to the cave entrance and stood next to the balloon. After a few more minutes, the sound of metal footsteps approached and a massive metal figure exited the cave. Harry leaned on the side of the Humvee next to the balloon with the American flag to make it obvious he wasn't one of the 10 ring guys. The metal man turned to look around and confirmed that everyone outside was dead. He walked over to Harry and his helmet lifted up, revealing Stark's surprised face. "Who are you?" "The cavalry." Harry shrugged. "Close enough. I was asked to retrieve you, though it seems you didn't need too much help in that department." Stark gave a pleased smile at that. "Got room for one more?" Harry nodded. "If you found true love in the caves of Afghanistan, I'm not heartless enough to separate you two." Stark visibly flinched at that and said, "You, no." He turned back and yelled into the cave, "Yinsen, we got a ride." A few moments later, the older man came out and surveyed the area. Stark also said, "Can you back the Humvee away first? I need to blow up everything here." Harry nodded and got in the driver's seat. He motioned for Yinsen to join him in the vehicle and drove further away as Tony let loose his flamethrowers and fired several missiles into the cave, collapsing it and destroying the entrance. Once satisfied, he ran over to the Humvee and jumped on the back. Harry was grateful he remembered to put in the shock absorber since the suit was very heavy. Harry floored it and moments later, the fire spread to the munitions crates and explosion after explosion engulfed the space between the mountains. Whoa, that was great. Ping. Quest completed, Merchant of Death. Reward, +2 tech path rank. Tony seemed to be teetering off the adrenaline high from the fight. Yinsen got into the back and was currently trying to remove Tony from the suit. Harry asked, "Where to?" Tony said, "Wait, you don't have a grand welcoming party for me already set up?" Harry opened the window, plucked the balloon, and handed it to Tony. "There you go. Now where to?" Tony took a moment to stare at the balloon and wonder how it survived the journey here. After shaking his head, Tony answered, "Well, it doesn't really matter. After that explosion, satellites will have our position in 5 minutes and helicopters will be on course for interception in a half hour." Harry figured that was his initial plan to get rescued, though he could think of 100 reasons it wouldn't have worked. At the very least, unless Yinsen had a suit as well, he would not have made it out of the cave alive. Harry said, "Not exactly. The roof of this Hummer is camouflage and there's a built-in mirror scrambling array. That's why all of those RPGs at the base they fired missed me." Tony said, "Wait. They were using my missiles. Are you saying you countered my missiles using mirrors?" Harry chuckled at how offended Tony sounded. Harry continued, "Anyways, the Hummer will show up on sat pictures, but it will be incredibly difficult to recognize it as a Hummer, so they won't find us, meaning I'll be dropping you off. Unless you want the government to get their hands on your neat little suit." Tony had just gotten out of the suit and said, "Yeah, that's a good point." He turned to Yinsen and asked, "You heading home or want a ride?" Yinsen gave a slightly bewildered smile and after a sigh said, "I'll return to Golmara and see my family." Harry considered it and said, "In that case, after we get to the military base, you can have the Hummer and drive it back. Keep the suit here and Tony can arrange for it to be dealt with later." Tony asked, "It's not your Hummer." "I don't live around here so I don't need it." Tony asked, "Who are you? Really? I mean, what's up with the mask?" Harry answered, "The mask is so that when you are asked who I am, you can tell the truth that you don't know." Okay, but then what do I call you?" "Demon Dude?" "The Lone Ranger." "Call me Obscurus." "What does that mean?" "In another culture it is a calamity, a man-made disaster of supernatural origins. An unstoppable force of destruction." "Okay, that's cool. How'd you find me, by the way?" "That cave wasn't exactly listed on Craigslist." Harry took out Tony's hairbrush and handed it to him. "Is that my... You were in my bathroom." Harry pulled out a cell phone and called the communication chip he wired into Jarvis. A moment later a familiar British voice came on the line. "Were you successful?" Stark took the phone and asked, "Jarvis? That you?" "Indeed it is, sir." "Are you with the masked individual?" "If you mean the demon mask wearing Obscurus, then yes. If that is what he is calling himself, yes sir." "Shall I inform Miss Potts of your return?" "Yeah, tell her I'm on my way to a military base right now. Give it a day of questioning and a night of travel and I should be back in LA Wednesday morning. Then see you soon, sir." Stark looked at the phone for a moment and asked, "Did you just make up that name on the spot?" Harry smiled beneath his mask. He wondered if he could break Stark before returning him to the US. Author's note. I'm sure a number of you can see a few corners I wrote myself into. But it's okay, I figured a way out, so it should be good. For the name, please note that the DMLE of various countries and the Muggle government do not exactly work together. So no one in S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to recognize the word Obscurus right away. Instead it will give them a lead on a possible origin of Harry's alter ego and have them chasing their tails. Also, Yinsen's family is buried in Golmara, so he is not lying. He is just going to visit their graves. Chapter 73. Chapter 73 Tony Stark. It took Harry 30 seconds to realize that Tony seemed unable to exist in a space that did not contain the sound of his voice. He turned back to see Yinsen's amused expression a few times and figured the poor man must have suffered through this as well. "Hey, you got any water?" "Glove box, and some to Yinsen too." Tony opened said glove box to find a half-dozen bottles of American brands of water. He handed 2 to Yinsen before downing a full one himself. Harry had a funny idea and asked, "Want some ice cream?" Tony answered, "You keep a fridge in here or something. Don't be ridiculous. We'll just find an ice cream truck." Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for one. You do that. Tony gave a light chuckle at the absurdity. He was still fidgeting at various things as the reality of what happened seemed to be replaying over and over in his head. Harry figured he was trying to keep talking as a way to distract himself. So how'd you find me with a hairbrush? Harry answered, you know how fractal resonance works. Tony rolled his eyes, who do you think you're taking to? Harry smiled, I was asking Yinsen. Yinsen did have a confused look so Tony answered, fractals are specific, complex patterns. If you make an antenna in the shape of a fractal, you can broadcast a frequency which can only be properly deciphered by an antenna of the same fractal pattern. That's fractal resonance. It's how cell phones can each have a unique broadcast frequency. Harry continued, there are ways of using fractal resonance for DNA. After Jarvis asked me to retrieve you, I went to your house and got a sample of your DNA. I was only able to use that to get a direction though, and it took me a few days of triangulation to find you. That doesn't make any sense at all, but okay. How'd Jarvis contact you? Harry figured that was his way of asking, couldn't you have come a bit sooner? Jarvis made a friend. That friend asked Harry Potter. Harry Potter asked me. And here we are. Potter? That kid. Yes, that kid. I don't accept most forms of payment, but Potter knows how to contact me and can pay my fees. So you're what? A mercenary? No, I don't advertise and I don't work for just anyone to do just anything. Tony realized someone and asked, wait, how did you kill those guys? I didn't see any bullet holes. It looked like they were beaten to death. He was referring to the 10 Rings goons outside the cave. Tony destroyed the weapons stockpiled out front, but he would have taken note of the condition of the corpses Harry took care of as well. Harry answered, hand me that iron mask plate and I'll show you. Tony went over to his suit and removed the fittings for the mask and handed it to Harry. Harry's hands glowed with immortal dragon chi and he crunched the faceplate that had rebounded bullets like it was an empty soda can. Harry passed it back to Tony and said, my body contains several different forms of energy I can direct without equipment to enhance my capabilities. Tony's eyes shined with excitement like a kid in a candy store. What kind of energies? Harry said, wait, let's get some ice cream first. What? Wait, no way. Harry slowed down the Hummer as they approached a parked American ice cream truck on the side of the road in the Afghan desert. Ignoring Tony and Yinsen's flabbergasted expressions, Harry pulled up to the truck before turning to the pair and asking, what do you two want? My treat. Harry doubted either had a wallet. Neither of his passengers could form coherent words and the American ice cream man simply asked, what can I get for you? Since no one in the back answered, Harry said, 3 fudge bars please. Coming right up. He went into the back of his truck for a moment and returned with 3 fudge bars. Harry handed him a $10 bill and said, keep the change, before he started driving off. Both dumbfounded former prisoners watched the ice cream truck fade into the distance as Harry drove off. You gonna take your ice cream or not? Tony eloquently answered, what, how, wait, no, but, that can't, how. Harry just tossed the fudge bar in the man's lap and unwrapped and started eating his own with one hand while driving with the other. Tony picked it up with a concerned expression. He seemed to be worrying this was a dream or something and any moment he'd wake up back in the cave. Harry smiled and decided that was good enough. A time-stopped inventory that keeps stuff cold and some good illusions were enough to mess with anyone's head. Tony unwrapped and took a bite out of the fudge bar. After a moment it seemed he decided to ignore what just happened and enjoy the ice cream. Yinsen took a bit longer but he too decided to just go with the flow. The prank only silenced Tony for about a minute before the need to hear his own voice overwhelmed him once more. How'd you get those powers then? You a mutant? Harry answered, well, it all started with an explosion. After a few moments of silence, Stark asked, that's it. How about we go tit for tat? I'll tell you how my abilities work and you tell me how that light bulb in your chest works? Deal. Tony raised an eyebrow but after a moment, he answered, well, it all started with an explosion. Harry chuckled which caused Tony to laugh as well. Tony asked, is there anything you can tell me? Favorite color? Are you a cat person or dog person? Boxers or briefs? Harry chuckled and shook his head. Not wanting to remain silent, Tony asked, so what should I say when asked about how I got out? Tell them whatever you want. I'm certainly not going to get interviewed and say anything to counter whatever you say. I mean, is there anything that you'd prefer? I mean, you did save Yinsen and he saved me, so I owe you one. Tony was pretty sure he would have made it out of there alive, but Yinsen was another story. The fact that Tony's metal suit didn't make Yinsen bulletproof was something the pair never openly discussed, but that didn't mean they were ignorant of it. Tony's suit had a few rockets and a flamethrower which wasn't enough to kill everyone at that base, and if Harry hadn't provided a distraction, Tony may not even have had time to set up the armor. Harry shook his head. It really didn't matter what Tony said. He'd been laying low because his foundation wasn't strong enough, but things were different now. The coordinates of an inhabitable planet made all his concerns about Earth a lot weaker. If everything went truly terrible, Harry would just take the girls off Earth and that would be that. Still, Stark obviously wanted to be on good terms with Obscurus. Harry answered, the truth is fine. You can tell them Jarvis contacted Harry Potter and Harry Potter contacted me. You can make up or leave out the details. I'm not scared of anyone finding me or posing a problem. That's some confidence. I'll think of something. Why did Harry Potter care enough to call you? You'd have to ask him. Got his number. He's probably teaching a class right now. Harry looked back and asked, what about you, Yinsen? What are your plans? Harry confirmed earlier through telepathy that Yinsen's family was dead and he really hadn't expected to survive the cave. The quest specifically asked Harry to save Yinsen, which pretty much meant the world would be a better place with Yinsen in it. Tony looked back and asked, "Yeah, what about you?" Tony started yammering on once more about a few ideas and ways he could pay Yinsen back. He hadn't discussed this earlier with the man because they knew it wasn't relevant at the time. Yinsen admitted he just wanted to continue his work helping others. Harry cast a discreet cheering charm on his so he'd think of some happy things to do with his life. Though the man did want to see his family, Harry knew his family would be patiently waiting for him regardless of how long it took for them to reunite. Yinsen smiled and told Stark a few of the things he wanted to do and Stark ended up being all for it. They discussed a number of things and without the pair noticing, they eventually arrived at a nearby city. Harry drives near one of the checkpoints for the nearby US military base and parks in a space without any cameras before he tosses the keys to Yinsen and gets out. "This my stop. Yinsen, hide the truck somewhere decent until Stark retrieves the armor." As Harry got out, Stark yelled, "Wait, how do I contact you? You don't. Sorry, but you don't have anything I want." "Then how does Potter pay you?" "Potter is the world's only supplier of metagems. I'm sure you can figure it out." Harry covered himself with dragon chi and turned into a blur of light that vanished from sight, leaving a stream of golden lightning that dispersed just as quickly. Once out of sight, Harry returned home via portal and used his time turner to go back so he could teach his Monday classes. Harry wasn't worried people would think he was a hard light projection which would ruin his alibi. Harry only used hard light in his metaphysics class and his Monday class was energy physics. Also, his hard light projections were pre-programmed movies. Harry could act with them but they weren't interactive so they wouldn't answer questions or interact with the students unless the students were in on the act. One of the reasons Harry allowed cameras in his metaphysics classes was so those watching would discover these traits about his mobile projection system and act as witnesses. Of course, there were cameras in his other classes as well so that was a moot point. On the following day Simmons was very awkward in class during the review. Harry figured it was because she realized that Harry had picked her pocket and placed her old school tape recorder into her own soundproof project without her knowing. It was a simple prank but well worth the effort. Though Simmons was a number of years older than Harry, she ended up feeling like a scolded child that got caught with her hand in the cookie jar. The next day it hit the news that Stark was found and was returning to the States. Harry watched on the news to see what Stark would tell everyone but the only thing he said about what happened was that he saw weapons he made used to kill American soldiers so he decided to shut down the weapons division of Stark International. If the man hadn't been in such a rush he could have looked around at the time to find some evidence of how the Ten Rings got the weapons but he only had it in his mind at the time to destroy them so Harry couldn't blame him for that particular missed opportunity. Harry didn't care too much at the time but the following day Harry got a message from Link that half his liquid assets were spent. Harry went over the report to ask how the hell that happened and it was apparently Stark's fault. Harry hadn't taken back the command for Link to buy up all the Stark stock that hit the market and with Tony's announcement, a lot of people were selling. Thankfully Link wasn't an idiot. The stock's price had plummeted and Link only paid slightly more than others would for the same stock. The problem was that even a plummeted stock price was still very expensive and a lot of people were selling. Such people were merely stock traders and such who didn't actually care who the stock belonged to, they just wanted to get as much money as they could off the stock before its value dropped even further. At this point, Harry apparently owned about 11% of Stark International. Stark owned 40%, Obadiah Stane owned 20%, and a board of directors owned about another 20% with the remaining 9% owned by random stockbrokers who didn't feel like selling at the moment. According to the numbers Link sent, Stane had apparently been trying to buy the stock himself but Link always got to it first. Harry considered it and decided it wasn't a problem. He wasn't really doing anything with his money at the moment so this could end up a good investment. It was the following weekend that Harry actually got a message from Link with a request for a call from Stark. Jarvis and Link had kept in touch through the connection Harry planted in Stark's house and though Stark knew about it he hadn't removed it. In fact, he'd been using it to bug Link to get Harry's number since it wasn't listed anywhere. Eventually Link caved and Harry got the call. "Hello, you've reached New York's finest pizzas, will this be an order for takeout or delivery?" "You know it's funny, I actually had some pizza from that place last week. Obi brought it back from a board of directors meeting." Harry asked with an amused tone, "If he brought it to you, doesn't that mean you didn't go to your own board of directors meeting?" "Hey, you didn't go either. Jarvis told me you actually bought all the stock that went on the market. I expected the price to plummet like 40 points but since someone was actually buying it it only dropped 30 points. I have enough problems dealing with my own board of directors thank you very much. They've become so bloodthirsty at this point that I'm releasing them on an island next week so they can let off some steam. You're giving your board of directors an island getaway." Harry laughed into the phone at that and answered, "Something like that. So what can I do for you Mr. Stark?" "Tony, please. Mr. Stark was my father. I hear I have you to thank for hiring the demon dude to bust me out. And I hear you would have gotten out on your own if I hadn't, so I only really saved Yinsen. I hear he's a good man though so that's fine too. In any case, it was Jarvis that asked so you can thank him." "Yeah, Jarvis told me he made a friend. Should we arrange a playdate or something? How would that work? Should I bring a CPU with Link's data core over to your house and plug it in?" That sounded dirty. I can assure you it didn't, you're just a dirty-minded old man. I'm not an old man. Anyways, I want to meet and discuss a few things. $20 says you're only calling now because you just finished reading about metagems. Okay, you got me. I'm interested, alright. Harry pulled up a calendar of events in the area and said, alright, apparently your company is hosting a firefighters charity gala in 2 weeks. I'll get a ticket and show up then. Sounds like a plan. See you then. The following week was business as usual, though it was the last week of classes before the finals. Harry had a very special prank planned for his metaphysics class. Partway through the review, there was a knock on the classroom door. This got a lot of people's attention because Harry's pranks didn't knock. The door always opened for them. Harry walked over to the door and opened it before moving to the side. 7 ugly goblins donning a full set of goblin-crafted armor and weapons walked into the classroom. Harry arranged some chairs for them and got out a very large scroll of paper he then tacked to the blackboard and unrolled. Addressing the goblins rather than the class, he said, so here are battle plans for the conquest of Genosha. Harry pointed at a point on the map. Lord Hagglefin will lead the Thunderbreaker War Party to the West Barracks and assault the entrance. The Cyber Detonation War Party will ensure a communications blackout from the start of the operation, though radios will likely be unaffected. We expect between 200 and 250 super-powered soldiers with a response time of 2 minutes. Harry's class looked pretty interested in the Goblin commanders and this fake war they were going to have against super-powered soldiers on an island nation none of them had ever heard of. None of it was a hard-light projection, of course. Harry used a bit of technopathy to ensure the cameras in the classroom would have a blurry picture but the sound would be alright, thus mostly preserving the statue of secrecy. It took some doing for the Goblin commanders to agree to have the final discussion of the war in Harry's muggle-filled classroom, but Harry convinced them it would be fine. The goblins had artifacts which made them look normal, but each was removed prior to their entrance to the classroom, and every camera in the classroom and on the campus was having slight technical difficulties at the moment. Harry wondered how S.H.I.E.L.D. would react to this prank when Genosha fell into the hands of Magneto next week. Though complex, the discussion only lasted about 6 minutes before the goblins left and Harry returned to reviewing the content of the finals. The prank was a nice change of pace from the monotony of the review, which got people back into the mood for studying, which would help the students more than an additional 6 minutes of review would have. When Harry returned home, he saw Peter had actually joined the study group this time after a several-month absence. Harry stared at the now muscled, former lanky nerd with a suspicion-filled eyebrow and said, "You look well for someone who's been sick for the last few weeks." Felicia, always being one to help, said, "Puberty seems to have hit Pete like truck hitting an Ice Guy character." Everyone looked at her and she smiled nonchalantly. "What? I like to read when I'm bored." Peter was quick to say, "I've been working out. Uncle Ben said it's a good way to stay healthy." Harry shrugged, "If you say so." Peter's internal life energy was much higher than a normal person's. It was similar to chi but slightly tainted. He wasn't a demon sorcerer either, or at least he hadn't lost his soul. Mixing other energies into your chi to strengthen it often causes your soul to become incompatible with your body, so demon sorcerers sacrifice their soul for power. Still, it was unusual. Strings of energy were spreading out from Peter all around him like a spider web. Those lines of energy passed through multiple dimensions and Harry wondered how he'd react if those energies were messed with. No, better not to test it. Messing with them could cause a panic attack or fry Peter's brain depending on how his mind interpreted those energies, if he was even capable of doing so. Harry went upstairs and connected to his company's server to check everything that needed his input and go over the invasion plan one last time. Everything looked mostly fine with one exception. Khan Industries had been making a lot of suspicious moves recently. Suspicious as in, money being spent out of the country on things that would not visibly affect the company. Yes, it seems an old acquaintance of Harry's was going to make a move. Author's note. Short chapter for now, we'll have Goblin invasion and the gala meeting next chapter. I got horrible distracted by a ravenous plot bunny of a Jedi Avenger SIFIC. As in, I got attacked by a plot bunny that got stuck in my head and wanted me to write such a FIC, so I spent like 3 days coming up with conceptual plots for it before said bunny left me alone enough to do a chapter on this FIC. Was thinking the SI would be in the same orphanage as Clint Barton and they'd grow up and join S.H.I.E.L.D. together. Chapter 74. Chapter 74, The Fall of Genosha. 90 miles off the coast of Genosha was a ship on its way to the port off Genosha's coastal city of Hammer Bay. Eric Lane's hair was both thrilled and apprehensive about what was to come. The ship contained every member of the Brotherhood of Mutants and a large amount of equipment. In one of the larger rooms, however, was 4 couches, 12 flat-screen TVs, and a snack table. Other than Magneto himself, this room did not contain any other members of his Brotherhood. Instead, it contained his daughter, his son-in-law, his son-in-law's other women, and 3 ugly goblins. This room was both the command center of the battle that was to come and an entertainment room. The picture from the TVs came from the several hundred flying drones over Genosha, which were enchanted to be invisible. Considering the number of mutates in Genosha, there could have been a few capable of detecting the shrouded cameras, but this was not the case. The mutates of Genosha were, for the most part, not naturally awakened but artificially engineered and weaponized. Every mutate had a power which fell into one of 3 categories: tracking, amplified attack, and anti-mutant. Over the last few months, a very large list had been made of the power possessed by the various mutates, and it was chilling for Magneto. Over a dozen mutates with powers that could negate the powers of other mutants were on that list. There was even a mutate who could emit anti-magnetic field waves which not only negated magnetism, but also corroded metal. That one had Magneto wonder about the goals of this island. The tracking category mutates were for those who wished to escape from the island. The fact that news of the atrocities of this place was not well known was evidence enough about the effectiveness of the tracking team, as Eric had never heard of this place before Harry brought it to his attention. Knowing with every cell in his body that this place must be wiped from the map, he was truly looking forward to the upcoming show. The War Party commanders already confirmed that the mutant power nullification had no effect on Goblin magic, and even the corrosion effect of the anti-magnetic field waves would not harm enchanted Goblin silver. A beeping sound from the other end of the room confirmed that the third bag of popcorn had finished in the microwave. Eric could only sigh at that. Leave it to Harry Potter to turn the achievement of his life's work into the equivalent of a movie night. Not that he could really complain. Every aspect of the battle to come had been planned out and settled by his son-in-law, so Eric had no room to argue with how the wizard enjoyed the process. After handing a bowl of popcorn to the Goblin commanders on the couch and sitting down with his girls, Harry asked, "Everyone ready?" Jade, Rogue, Wanda, and even Jean was present for the show. Harry had sent her a message about the timing weeks ago and she'd used her portkaya to return home for the war since it sounded like fun. The TVs were all on and changed to different perspectives on a certain guard post in the northern part of Hammer Bay. The sky was dark from the heavy cloud cover, and half an hour prior, a deluge of rain started pouring from the sky. With such weather, everyone who didn't have to be outside would definitely return inside, meaning the possibility of civilian casualties was greatly reduced. All Goblin armor and weapons would be charmed with the waterproofing spell, and their boots would have no issue traveling over slippery or muddy terrain. This setup was approved once they confirmed a lack of hydrokinetic mutates on this island, which was surprisingly to say the least. A series of green checkmarks appeared on one of the screens showing the hacking attempt made to disable all outward communication and security had succeeded, thus signaling the start of the operation. Harry created 2 portals off to the side of the room which were adjacent to one another. He couldn't make remote portals, but he could line them up. The first portal led from the ship to the area the Thunderbreaker War Party was preparing to set off from, and the second portal from the ship to the space 200 meters in front of the guard post. In the pouring rain, the shining silver portal was difficult to see even if you were looking for it, much less at that distance. The invisible drones had a spell which caused water to pass around them, so they were not revealed from the water splatter. Special cameras in the drones also allowed the picture to basically filter out the rain and show a clear view of the battlefield. Hagelfin's Thunderbreaker War Party of 50 armored goblins charged through the silver portals towards the guard post. Lights off the structure reflected off the shine from the goblins' armor, but that was fine with the attacking party. They wanted a battle, not an assassination. A number of shouts echoed back and forth and an alarm button was pressed, causing a siren to blare. Such alarms were always simple analog designs and could not be prevented without cutting the line or the power. This woke everyone at the guard post and called them to their stations. A dozen ripples blasted through the air as sonic shock waves generated by the mutate guards patrolling the top of the wall struck the Goblin War Party. Their armor, however, was charmed against sound attacks, and the rain heavily weakened the sonic attacks. Every War Party commander knew what mutates would be at which guard post when the attack was declared, and each commander prepared their war party accordingly. The Thunderbreaker War Party had 50 goblins, and through a series of prior battles, they had been awarded the honor of first blood. After the sonic attack signaled the start of aggressions, a dozen goblins took out crossbows from their backs and fired them at the wall. The crossbow bolts shined with blinding light after being released, and at the moment of impact the walls exploded in a deafening blast that shook the entire base. First blood had been drawn for the guards atop those walls did not survive. From his seat on the couch, Eric asked, "What were those?" One of the Goblin commanders answered, "Arrows made from an ancient, magical species of tree I'm certain you've never heard of." Harry added, "A few centuries ago, wizards invented a spell which can banish arrows back in the direction they came, so these bolts have been sitting in storage for centuries, waiting for a good chance to use them." The cruel smile the goblins gave Eric showed the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants how much these bloodthirsty creatures really wanted to use them. The fact that these bolts didn't have any metal in them also seemed to be a direct message to Eric, as well as these goblins obviously made this plan knowing Eric would be watching the battle and wanted to put a bit of fear into the magnetokinetic. From the rubble of the base, dozens and dozens of guards emerged. A very large number of mutate guards had basic physical enhancements such as super strength, augmented healing, and the like. These guards that survived the blast and threw off the rubble charged the goblins, much to the latter's delight. Not bothering to reload or even put away their crossbows, the goblins simply dropped them to the ground and charged the guards with weapons drawn. It was at this point that Eric and those who had never seen a goblin fight before learned a very important fact about goblins. They were fast. Eric had seen his son's speed, and though the goblins' movement speed could never catch up with Petro's, the speed at which they attacked when up close neared his son's superhuman speed. This was of course not the normal speed of a goblin. Goblins were in fact very fast, but the armor worn by the Thunderbreaker War Party enhanced their speed even further. The invulnerable skin of the superhuman mutates could not stand against the enchanted goblin silver blades which cut into their muscle and struck their innards. The guards, however, did not flinch even when they sustained a mortal blow. They struck the closest goblin, which was usually the goblin attacking them, and many of them sent the nearby goblins flying with a swat. Eric frowned at the guards. The reason they were unaffected by the attacks was that all the guards were basically brainwashed and half brain dead. There was nothing left to save, which was why there would be no mutate prisoners at the end. Reinforcements arrived for the guards, which included dozens of men with high-powered laser rifles. The island's technology was far more advanced than the rest of the world, but it was of little use. The goblins brought out their buckler shields, which easily deflected the laser rounds. Several goblins got out staves and started casting. This caused the goblin commanders at the side to grin, and only Harry knew why. Wizards created a law that prevented goblins from using wands, and wandmakers refused to share their craft with goblins, just as goblin silversmiths refused to share their crafts with wizards. Goblins could in fact cast magic without a wand and use spells similar if not identical to a wizard. However, the power of a goblin's spell would rarely exceed the power of a 7th-year Hogwarts student's spell, meaning that spell for spell, goblins were inferior in power to adult wizards, forcing goblins to rely on enchanted armaments when facing off against wizards in battle. The problem was that a full set of goblin equipment was far more difficult for a goblin to acquire than it was for a wizard to acquire a wand, meaning the average adult wizard was stronger than the average adult goblin in combat. Without enchanted armor and weapons, a simple disarming charm, a 2nd-year spell, could leave a goblin without a weapon to attack with regardless of how fast they were. Then Harry started paying goblins in metagems. Through a great deal of experimentation, goblins had discovered ways of making magic staves using metagems that were not inferior to a well-fitted wizard's wand. Of course, metagems were worth a very large amount of Gringotts gold, but that just meant they had to work harder to be paid using such. Harry wouldn't allow them to make an unlimited amount for themselves after all, and goblins weren't inclined to do so either. That was like trying to create gold. There were massive problems if done too often for too long. Transfiguration, conjuration, and animation spells were fired one after another, and golems of mud and steel created through goblin magics charged the enemy's reinforcements. The cameras showed multiple mutates pointing at the golems in what appeared to be mutant power negation attacks, but the goblin magic-fueled golems were unaffected, forcing the reinforcements to attack using other means. Several streams of fire and lightning shot out from the guards, but the fire died and the lightning was directed harmlessly into the ground due to the rain. Several monitors showed more check marks, and Harry made another pair of portals. The Thunderbreaker War Party was given the honor of first blood and the purpose of getting the enemy combat ready. Once it was determined that the other bases were armed and prepared for battle, the next war party was given the go to assault another guard post. The second group was the Metal Eater War Party of 100 goblins, and their target was the main guard post in Carrion City, the second of the two main cities of Genosha. Hagelfin's war party was probably the second best armored in the goblin ranks, so other war parties had greater numbers to account for lesser equipment. The casters of the Metal Eater War Party transfigured the soil into metal rods, which were magically lifted into the air and dropped upon the enemy base. At the moment the metal rods pierced through the roofs, another round of spells were shot at the rods to enlarge them. The expanding rods shattered the guard post's foundation, and the buildings collapsed one after another as the 100 goblins charged forward against the super-powered heavily armored guards. Goblins lost their lives when laser fire struck their unarmored eyes, or when a guard with super strength crushed the unarmored goblins, but for every goblin lost, a dozen mutates were slain. Harry and the girls could feel the slowly building bloodlust from the goblin commanders watching the battle. The longer they watched, the more they wanted to fight. The enemy was caught off guard, completely unprepared, and outmatched, but they still fought and died valiantly. The goblins slain in the battle died with honor and would be remembered. Another series of check marks appeared, and Harry made another set of portals. The Skullcrusher War Party contained 200 of the most savage goblins of the Goblin Nation, and the portal led them directly into the heart of the main security base, where many of the strongest mutates and their generals were stationed. Each of the Skullcrushers only wore equipment that increased speed. They did not don armor and were instead armed with a blade in hand and an extra to their side in case their main blade broke off in an opponent's skull or spine. Though violent and merciless, the Skullcrusher War Party had spent the last month learning the faces and abilities of all mutates in the main security base and learning the layout as well. Hackers from the Cyber Detonation War Party would ensure that the doors were open or closed when needed to control the battlefield and allow the Skull Rushers to slaughter to their heart's content. With another series of check marks, Harry created a dozen portal pairs leading to the various sites in the island. The main force of 5,000 goblins was now pouring through the portals to the various strongholds of the island. The first three forces were simply goblins who earned an opportunity to fight against a higher number of worthy opponents. The main force, however, was the actual conquest force. Even if every goblin from the first three forces died, it wouldn't have changed anything. It took a full 5 minutes for the dozen portals to transfer the 5,000 goblins. At this point there was only one target left. Harry turned to the commanders at the couches and said, "The Blood Drinker War Party is ready for your command." He then created a portal in front of the couch and the 3 goblins jumped in. Harry then created another pair of portals to lead the dozen members of the Blood Drinker War Party to the secret stronghold under the island. Of the 12 TV screens, 11 were from drones and cameras buttoned onto the goblins around the island. The 12th, however, actually showed an underground bunker-style area with its own security monitors. Sitting in front of the monitors in that room was a being who was grotesque even by goblin standards. The being was about 7 feet tall but had no head. Instead, his chest and torso were massive in size, and upon his chest was a massive set of eyes, and where his stomach would be was a massive snarling mouth and nose. The creature had 4 arms and at the top of his torso was a set of horns. According to the files recovered by the Goblin hackers, this being called itself Sugarman, and was the true ruler of Genosha. Harry discovered using his own means that this man once worked for Mr. Sinister before stealing a lot of his research and escaping. He arrived at Genosha about 50 years ago and during that period, he used the tech and genetic data he stole to advance Genosha into one of the most high-tech countries in the world. The leaders of the country were merely pawns to Sugarman, and it was this mutant which created the process to induce directed mutations to weaponize humans with an unawakened X gene into super-powered, brainwashed, loyal soldiers. Sugarman's own command center and lair was deep within the bowels of the island and was very stereotypical for an evil lair. There were racks of devices that looked well used for both experimentation and torture. There were liquid-filled cylinder vats containing heavily weaponized human mutates floating in suspended animation. There was a deep hole in the center of the room the mad scientist made just so he could toss failures into. And there were lots and lots of weapons of every type hung on the walls. Within Sugarman's command center were dozens of red lights showing multiple alarms going off. His security cameras brought up images of the Blood Drinker war party entering the passage leading to his true lair. The hideous creature snarled and started typing at his command center with all 4 hands. The vats containing the human mutates drained and released their occupants. Rogue pointed to the screen and said, "Bring that one up and turn up the volume." Harry said, "All right, boss, battle time." He used his technopathy to address the system and the 12 screens were now acting as a single massive screen showing the Blood Drinker war party. Sugarman's crackling voice could be heard on the monitor. "I don't know how these creatures made it into the bunker, but they'll never survive the traps." From Sugarman's console the monitors clearly showed the advancing goblins. The 4-armed dictator typed in a few commands and the walls started closing on the goblins and flamethrowers appeared from the walls and doused the hallway in fire. The sinister-looking Sugarman rubbed his hands together and with a vicious smile said aloud, "Even if you vermin can survive the crushers and the flames, the oxygen in the hall will be completely removed by the flames and you'll pass out or suffocate to death." Jade asked while washing, "Who the hell is he talking to? He doesn't know anyone is watching and he's just talking to himself." Magneto actually answered, "He's completely frantic at the moment and trying to convince himself everything will be alright." Hearing the words said aloud, even if from your own tongue, can be more assuring than thinking them to yourself. Wanda snickered and asked, "Done a few of those private villain monologues yourself, old man?" Eric turned away with just the barest hint of red on his cheeks, causing the girls in the room to do their best, and fail, to suppress a giggle. Rogue asked, "Will they be alright?" Harry said, "I'm not spoiling it for you, have some popcorn." Harry passed over the bowl which magically stayed heated and Rogue took it without complaint. The goblins were fine, of course. Besides hoarding gold and slaying enemies, there was one other profession that goblins had been doing for thousands of years: tomb raiding. The Blood Drinker war party were among the greatest tomb raiders and warriors of the Goblin nation and had every piece of equipment one would need to break into and pillage the most secure of wizard tombs. Unfortunately for Sugarman, tech-based traps were nothing compared to the magic-based traps of ancient greedy wizards. Equipment enchanted with a bubblehead charm that recycled its own oxygen was standard equipment for tomb raiders. Many tombs collapsed and one would run out of oxygen anyways. Wizards loved fire traps since it was a cheap and easy way to kill in enclosed spaces by removing the oxygen with fire. Several goblins removed enchanted spikes from their packs which were driving into the wall with hammers. The spikes caused a transfiguration spell on the hallway which secured the location of the walls, roof, and floor. This was a simple tool that prevented hallways from collapsing on you, but for a trap-filled pathway that was not warded against magic, it disabled or destroyed many of the traps. Sugarman shouted, "Impossible. I designed those traps myself." On several of the monitors were battles and explosions. The goblins were taking casualties but they were few and far between, while Sugarman's mutate army was being slaughtered. "No, this cannot be. My army." The mutates he awakened from stasis were armed and Sugarman said, "Guard the door? They'll never get through." Wanda asked, "Why not just portal them into the chamber?" Harry answered with a shrug, "They wanted to make an entrance." 6 goblins lined up 6 enchanted spikes and with a unified motion, drove them into the door. The combination spell caused the massive door to liquefy in a large-scale transfiguration spell. Tombs without magical defenses were too easy for such an experienced party of tomb raiders. Sugarman stared down the goblins and shouted, "How dare you disrupt my work? My army was meant to destroy humanity, not fall to such grotesque creatures." Harry chuckled aloud and the girls laughed as well. Wanda gave Magneto a side glance which had the master of magnetism sigh. It seems everyone and their dog was out to use mutants to destroy humanity these days. Sugarman pointed forward and shouted, "Kill them." He then grabbed 2 hammers and 2 axes off the wall and charged forward himself. The mutates transformed into various monstrosities. Some turned into hulking creatures, some turned into ribbon-like constructs, some into the elements themselves. The 3 commanders who shared the couch before struck against Sugarman while the remaining goblins battled against the monstrous mutates. The leader of Genosha was no slouch. He was able to increase and decrease his size at will, his speed nearly matched the goblins and his 4-arm attacks allowed him to hold his own against the goblins. His strongest attack however was a tongue that extended out like a spear and moved like a whip and clearly had the power to puncture steel and stone. 15 seconds after the battle started, it was obvious that the goblins were losing. The mutates were all incredibly powerful and Sugarman had a healing factor that Harry felt would give Wolverine a run for his money. The command center was trashed but the goblins fought on without failing back or staying down. Rogue, who was the most experienced when it came to hand-to-hand combat among the girls asked, "What's happening to those mutates?" Jean asked, "What do you mean?" Magneto, who had more battle experience than any of them answered for her, "They are slowing down." Harry said, "Goblin silver can carry enchantments better than anything else. Their weapons are very specialized and all the enchantments are for a single thing. Killing immortals." Jean asked with a bit of shock, "That's possible. With stackable curses and poisons it is. Their blades have multiple poisons assimilated into them and inflict cursed wounds. The wounds may look like they are healing, but the curses are piling up. Curses could affect anything and even the elemental mutates were affected and slowly being overwhelmed. Some tombs contained the living forms of sealed wizards so powerful, they were said to be gods of their time and goblins knew how to slay them. Soon the battle reversed. The mutates were slain one after another and before he could even notice, Sugarman was left alone. The massive creature suddenly fell to his knee and returned to his normal size, though not by choice. His wounds were bleeding and they were not healing anymore. The commander of the Blood Drinker War Party stepped forward and said, "We are of the Goblin Nation. By our laws, you must be presented with a chance to surrender before we destroy you. Will you surrender or will you die?" This had Sugarman stunned. Goblins? But, magic creatures? No, this goes against the statute of secrecy. You will be exterminated for this. Rogue asked, "Does everyone know about that?" Harry answered, "Anyone who has led a country for a long enough period knows about magic." The commander answered, "Negative. Genosha is not a part of the United Nations and as long as there are no witnesses, we have broken no laws." Sugarman gritted his teeth and said, "No witnesses? This is crazy. This is blasphemy. This is madness." A gleam of light shined in each of the goblins' eyes. The commander stepped forward and said, "Madness." He raised his weapon and shouted, "This is Gringotts." The goblin leapt forward and kicked the weakened Sugarman back where he fell directly into the massive pit in the center of the room. He fell screaming all the way to the bottom. Everyone on the couch looked at Harry who shrugged and said, "What? They love that movie." 3 goblins took out what appeared to be explosives and tossed them down the hole. A few moments later, the bottom of the hole brightened and the TV screens widened out for a few seconds. Harry smiled at that. The goblins have seen his guns and it didn't take too long and too many dead experimenters to figure out the trick to magic bombs. Sugarman's flesh and even his skeleton wouldn't have survived that. Harry made a portal for them to return through and the 3 commanders returned to the couch where they directed the remaining goblin forces. From the Thunderbreaker War Party's dispatch to the final resistance being taken out, the Battle of Genosha lasted about an hour. After that was 2 hours of hunting down guards that slipped through the cracks and when that was over, the goblins located the bodies of all of their dead along with any fallen or discarded goblin weapons and returned through the portals back home. Harry then took out a vial of swooping evil venom and charged it with magic before tossing it into a portal above some clouds. He then took out a dozen more vials and did the same. After a few minutes, the heavy rain clouds contained a light saturation of swooping evil venom and over the course of 10 minutes, the venom would spread to every inch of the island and ensure everyone who witnessed what happened and survived would lose their memories of anything involving magic. Even if they stayed indoor, the humidity in the very air would contain the venom and affect all those who breathed it in. Harry said, "The rain will dissipate in an hour. Once it does, you can land the ship, take credit for what happened, and take over. Call me or Charles if you need anything." Harry then made a portal and along with the girls, left the ship and returned home. Just to be safe, he then wrapped everyone with the timer turner and went back 3 hours. Harry then took the girls out shopping and to get a nice dinner in a few places he'd been seen to ensure he had an alibi. The fact that he just so happened to have an alibi for the moment Genosha was attacked when he was usually impossible to find would probably raise some suspicions, but that wouldn't matter. Muggle governments did not work with magical ones. They were aware of the latter's existence, but magical governments would not willingly disclose information if it was not needed. That meant that uncommon information, like the existence of time turners, was not something any Muggle government knew about. Not too surprising since their creation was dangerous and their use heavily restricted. Telling Muggles about the ability to travel backwards in time was a terrible idea no matter how you consider it. The following week was mostly boring. Every single one of the Genoshan civilians agreed to have their undiscovered X-gene awakened so they could become citizens of Magneto's mutant-only Genosha. Turns out that living as a powerless human under a corrupt government instilled a thirst for the power to protect yourself, which was why they agreed so easily. Harry already prepared a gene therapy solution that would give and awaken the X gene in humans without it, and Magneto's ship was full of it. The solution would expire in a week and had a spell on it that would render it inert if taken off the island after it got close. That would prevent someone from stealing any and using it to turn random non-mutants into mutants. Of course, that wouldn't stop it from being used on people visiting the island, but Harry and Magneto agreed that the island should go into a 1-week lockdown after the invasion to ensure a proper change of regimes. It would take less time than that to turn the citizens into mutants, and in a week, any remaining solution would be useless. Harry couldn't do much himself during that week. The students had their finals, so Harry just sat at his desk during those classes and watched to make sure no one cheated. Once everyone was seated, Harry wrote on the board, "To prevent cheating, the room will be shielded from outside signals. Without raising her hand, Leah immediately asked, "What if there is an emergency and someone needs to contact us?" Already prepared for that, Harry opened a window and tied a basket to it. He said, "Then turn your cell phone's ringer to the max and place it in the basket. If you hear your cell phone ring, you can turn in your final and leave the classroom with your phone. To prevent cheating, no one is allowed to leave the classroom and return to continue their finals. Any other questions?" Leah looked furious, and from the other end of the room, Polly looked amused. The mic and camera in her glasses wouldn't work and she had no real way to cheat besides trying to copy the answers off the people next to her. Not that copying would work either, as every test was different. Harry wondered if S.H.I.E.L.D. or anyone else would try to send in more spies, since they wouldn't be able to get to the advanced classes without actually learning the material. Once the class was over, Harry put the papers into his inventory and paused so he could go over each of them. He suppressed a chuckle when he saw that Polly's paper was filled with doodles of accurately drawn mockingbirds. He was tempted to pass her since he didn't mind her just being there to protect Fitz and Simmons. He'd see how many applied for his advanced metaphysics class in the fall and contact her about it then. If he didn't get a full class, then he'd ask if she wanted to be invited back. Once the week was over, Harry took a plane over to California to attend the gala. He'd made a large donation to get an invite, which was how such functions worked. He asked if any of his girls wanted to come, of course, but the lot blatantly refused due to the boring nature of such a function, and Jean had already returned to space to burn more planets. She'd gotten 3 so far and would hopefully finish off the last 2 within a year. Harry had no idea how long his business with Stark would take, so he booked a week at a fancy hotel. He wouldn't stay, of course. He'd portal home each night, but at least on paper it would look like he spent a week in California. For some reason, Harry didn't think his stay would be as boring as his girls said it would be. * author's note. Sorry for the delay. Turns out, massive battles between fully armed goblins and super-powered parties are not as common as one would think in the realm of fanfiction, so I didn't have much to reference from and had to make up this stuff from scratch. The tricky part wasn't the battle, it was figuring out how to describe the best parts of the battle. Eventually I settle on the entertainment room idea, and though perhaps not the best, I'm happy with it. Oh, that this is Gringotts thing literally just came to me the other day and I cackled like a mad person when I thought of it. Chapter 75. Chapter 75. A normal day in LA. Random not evil Jin shows up. So many wishes for a new chapter. Very well. But be careful what you wish for. Chapter 75. A normal day in LA. The evening of May 19th, Harry watched the TV in the LA hotel room with a moderate amount of amusement. The local news included things which would never appear on the news if he watched it in New York, so the story of a silver missile being seen flying through the streets of LA was something he could only enjoy on the local news networks. The images of the missile were blurry and captured from a very long distance away. Harry recognized it though and could only smile. It seemed that Stark was having fun. Yinsen had visited his family's grave for a few days and left shortly afterwards to return to Europe after Tony made the arrangements to get his suit back. There were a lot of things Yinsen wanted to do, and with Tony's help, he'd be able to make his family proud until he reunited with them in the future. Once the time was set, Harry put on a formal tuxedo that was neither gaudy nor ostentatious. Harry wasn't a big fan of formal events, but he couldn't just wear a t-shirt or he'd stand out too much. According to the news, Tony Stark's 3rd annual benefit for the Firefighters Family Fund was a gathering place of the biggest celebrities in this half of the country, which was ridiculous to Harry. He chose this event as a meeting place because it sounded formal and low-key. Apparently common sense isn't what it used to be, or that was just how common sense worked in LA. After dressing for the occasion, Harry left the hotel and called for a cab to take him to the Disney concert hall where the event was being held. LA traffic being what it was, Harry called the cab a half hour before the event, which was about 3 miles away. He figured he should be able to just barely make it in time. Unsurprisingly, the cab seemed to just park in the middle of traffic and stay there a few hundred feet from the destination at some point, so Harry paid the fare and got out of the cab to walk the remaining distance. At least where he got out was close enough to the concert hall for the saturation of stars to be high enough to draw attention away from Harry. Harry's TV special was mostly shown on the East Coast, and unless someone watched his educational videos, it wasn't likely they would recognize him. Even if they did watch those videos, Harry in a tuxedo looked very different from Harry's professor robes, so he wouldn't stand out too much. The only other thing Harry might be recognized from was that UN Maleman thing, and if someone recognized him from that, there was nothing he could say. Or so he thought. Not only did someone pick him out of the crowd and recognize him, it was someone Harry actually recognized. Someone who tried to kill him the last time they met. "Harry Potter," said the finely dressed man of Asian descent with sharp eyebrows, long hair tied into a ponytail, and well-trimmed facial hair as he approached Harry with clear murderous intent. Harry saw that the man was of course wearing his rings, but they were not emitting the powerful energies they were the last time Harry encountered this man, meaning they were dormant at the moment. With a challenging smirk, Harry replied, "Jean Khan. Were you waiting here for me?" Harry couldn't think of any other reason for the CEO of Khan Industries to meet him here of all places. The Mandarin sneered and said, "I let you live last time, child, but now there is nothing that can save you. Unless you want you and everyone you care for to die, you will cooperate." Harry raised an eyebrow with clear amusement. "Let me live? Have the years caused your brain to rot? You didn't let me anything. And everyone I care for can handle themselves just fine, thank you very much." Both Wanda and Rogue could teleport, Jade was immortal, could go out of phase and fly, and if this arrogant jerk ever tried to hurt Jean, his regret would only last for about 5 seconds before he was turned to dust. The man who was clearly used to being an overlord of his era saw no deception nor fear from the 16-year-old genius. This was unacceptable to him. Harry had already paused to go over the possibilities and unpaused. While Khan was thinking of a retort that would likely start with the words, "You dare," Harry first said, "So you really were the one behind the 10 rings. When your company started behaving so erratically after Stark got out of the cave, I had my suspicions, but seeing you in person really does confirm it. What did you want with Stark anyways?" Seeing that his involvement was guessed so easily, Jean calmed down and steadied himself. He was a martial artist first and foremost, and allowing his emotions to show so easily did not become him. Unfortunately, Harry was just getting started. "Oh, I see. You want the shares I got of Stark's company. I thought Stane was the only one looking for those, but it seems I was mistaken. Was Stark's kidnapping just a prelude to Khan Industries' expansion towards the west?" Khan's face didn't twitch a single muscle, he only continued to glare at Harry. After a moment of silence he said, "Your company is not as well protected as you think. Destroying it from within would take but a single word from me." Harry didn't bother to hide the emotion that threat caused him, but much to the Mandarin's consternation, Harry's only emotions were direct amusement mixed with contempt. In fact, it looked like Harry had to fight to suppress the urge to burst into laughter. After shaking his head, Harry just said, "You are making a lot of assumptions, Mr. Khan." Khan's sheer arrogance completely outweighed his martial discipline and he was unable to prevent the sneer that formed on his face. With bone-deep arrogance, the warlord said, "Nothing can defy the Mandarin. You will hand over those shares or you will suffer pain worse than anything dash." Harry couldn't take it anymore and started laughing. The best he could do to keep himself from making a scene was to clench his jaw and keep his lips together, but the fact that he had to put visible effort into stopping himself from laughing in the Mandarin's face clearly displayed to the aged martial artist what Harry thought of his threat. The Mandarin had to grit his own teeth at Harry's clear mockery. The Mandarin was not a fool. He knew that a wizard training in commatage, especially one of Harry's age, clearly would not grow weaker over time. Discovering that Harry had gotten an invitation after making a donation was simple, and finding Harry's hotel room and even the number of the cab sending Harry so he could track it to the gala was just as easy. The reason Khan decided to meet Harry here was to limit the possible options in case Harry really had grown more powerful. After a few seconds, Harry took a moment to calm himself and said, "I cannot be compared to my previous self who was still in training. When I last saw you, I was but a learner, now I am a master." Still trying to intimidate him, Khan said, "You think a few years of training? Wait. Did you just quote Vader at me?" That realization actually caught the warlord off guard. Harry looked up and gave a light, harmless smile. The corner of Khan's eyes saw the knife appear in Harry's hand, which had clearly been empty before. This entire time Khan had been menacing Harry with his intent to kill him, but in the instant the knife appeared, he sensed Harry's intent to kill Khan. The fact that Harry was clearly willing to strike him in public and the fact that Harry's killing intent surpassed Khan's own was not something he predicted. Still, his instincts had been honed through hundreds of life and death battles, which caused him to move to grab and disarm the blade, and his mastery of martial arts granted him the speed to grab Harry's wrist before the knife could be thrust into Khan's abdomen. Little good it did. The Harry now really could not be compared to the Harry from when he first met the Mandarin. Red energy from Sidorak's realm flowed through Harry's body, preventing his momentum from being halted by anything, and no matter how much chi Khan had, his rings had obviously been deactivated, meaning he was vulnerable at the moment. Sure, Harry was certain the Mandarin could reactivate them with a thought, but there was a very large difference between instantaneous and a delay. The only ring which could save Khan at this distance was the intangibility ring, but that one was the most difficult to use and he had not expected to be attacked. Harry was supposed to be a good guy. The moment Khan caught Harry's wrist, he realized that he was unable to prevent Harry's thrust. Khan moved to the side, but it was too late and the blade sliced through Khan's tailored suit and drew blood. The moment the attack was made, the blade in Harry's hand returned to his inventory. Khan took a few steps back and realized that even though they were in the middle of a crowded sidewalk, no one was looking at them. Harry had already set up a notice me not. As if he was speaking of something as mundane as the weather, Harry said, "I told you that you were making a lot of assumptions, Mr. Khan. The first was that I wouldn't kill you here and now. In case you're wondering, you've just taken a dose of venom from the King of Snakes. I'd get that looked at if I were you." Although the notice me not field was strong, it wouldn't prevent people from ignoring a murder, so Harry couldn't kill him within the field. Murdering someone while using magic had an adverse reaction with the magic and would definitely cause the field to fail and draw attention to himself. Slicing him with a basilisk and venomed goblin blade when the man let his guard down from the Star Wars quote on the other hand was doable. Khan felt the venom from the wound and looked at Harry with both confusion and fear. He was used to being the bad guy and dealing with naive good guys and wannabe heroes. They were in the middle of a large group of camera-carrying civilians, and Harry Potter had no record of criminal misdeeds to give evidence that he would actually try something. Even if he did, the Mandarin was confident enough in his strength to prevent it. Under these circumstances, the Mandarin was absolutely certain he could approach, threaten the child into giving him what he wanted, and kill him later. Harry's killing intent shocked him further. The Mandarin had certainly killed more humans than Harry had, but the outright number of kills was probably much less. That and the fact that nearly everything Harry killed nearly matched him in strength during battle meditation, and with the add-on of the immortal dragon chi which far outstripped Khan's own mortal chi, Harry's killing intent completely suppressed Khan's own. Khan felt his organs start to fail, and though his body was trained to the point that mundane poisons and illnesses had no effect, he could still feel death's approaching footsteps and knew he was in trouble. His rings could allow himself to defeat any mortal, but none included the ability to heal. Fear turned into panic as he began to realize how badly he'd fucked up and how limited his options were. Khan ran away while holding his wound. The wound itself barely bled from the thinnest of the knife, so there was no pool of blood nor great red stain on Khan's shirt. Harry really wanted to kill him, but now was not the time. Harry claimed to have killed everyone who'd ever tried to kill him, but there were exceptions, and the Mandarin was one of them. Harry would be satisfied if the basilisk venom killed him, but he wouldn't count on that type of cockroach dying so easily. Not that it mattered. Harry's knife was still stained with Khan's blood. If Khan was still alive in a week, he'd use his blood to send him off in a way that would make the noble and most ancient house of Black proud. On his way to the concert hall, Harry saw Stane giving an interview and did his best to walk around the man and the media. Something that stood out though was the Watcher informant hanging out with a pair of beautiful girls. Harry hadn't seen one before, but the records of Camartage described them as mortals the Watchers used to observe things without the need to interact with them. The Watchers wouldn't be able to see Harry, but this informant could tell them about him, so Harry decided it was best to avoid the man. Watcher informants were gifted an aura which allowed them to blend in and prevent people from questioning their presence wherever they were. Without the ability to sense energy, a mind guarded through advanced Phoenix, and the protection of the Phoenix, sensing the aura would not have been possible for Harry, and without the records of Camartage, he wouldn't be able to recognize it for what it was anyway. The aura was ridiculously subtle. Upon reaching the door, Harry showed the guard his invitation and was allowed through without issue. Harry noticed that Stark wasn't at the bar, which meant the playboy hadn't shown up yet. Since he was guaranteed to go to the bar first, Harry decided to head over and take a seat. What he didn't expect was the man already sitting at the bar to turn and give Harry a double take. He not only recognized Harry, but clearly didn't expect him to be there. "Professor Potter," he said, trying to get Harry's attention. Harry sighed and asked, "How did you recognize me? The internet? The TV thing? I'm pretty sure I've never been on a magazine cover." The man gave an amused smile and said, "I'm Agent Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement Logistics Division." Harry gave the man a deadpan expression and flatly said, "That's quite a mouthful. I hear that a lot. We're working on it." "Sure you are. So what can I do for you?" Agent Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement Logistics Division. "I was hoping we could debrief you about your involvement in Stark's rescue. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and time can be a factor with these things." Harry rolled his eyes and said, "I met someone else outside the concert hall who also insisted on having a chat with me. Gene Khan. Heard of him?" Coulson was unable to prevent himself from tensing up for just a moment before he said, "I have. Can I ask what Mr. Khan wanted with you?" Harry smiled at how polite the man was and answered, "Well, since you ask so nicely, he demanded I hand over the 11% of Stark International stock I bought and threatened bodily harm to myself and everyone I care about if I did not acquiesce." Coulson's pause clearly showed that he was not expecting such an answer. "What did you say?" "We can protect Dash." Harry held up a hand and said, "I don't require protection." Agent Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement Logistics Division. Harry then looked Coulson in the eye and said with a smile that was not a smile, "As for how I responded, I suspect Mr. Khan is on his way to receive medical care at the moment. I registered myself as a lethal weapon for a reason after all, and don't take threats to myself and those I care about very well." Coulson's shock was evident. Harry shrugged and said, "Yeah, he wasn't expecting that response either. Have I answered your questions about Stark's case to your liking?" Coulson's initial confused look turned into a calculating frown. Harry hadn't said anything about Stark, but Khan's presence and his demanding of Harry's acquired shares of Stark International were both very big clues about pieces of the puzzle. Shield had clearly been missing, and Coulson was a very intelligent man. Of course Harry was also trolling them. He gave them the information they needed, but not the information they wanted. Coulson tried to change the subject. "I was hoping for information on the asset used to rescue Stark." Harry answered, "I pay him in metagems. That's probably the only useful thing I can really tell you about him that you didn't already know. Anything else would be less than useful." From behind, the pair heard someone shout, "Kid." Harry turned around to see Stark with a freckled redhead Harry recognized as Virginia Pepper Potts. "Mr. Stark," Harry replied. Tony walked past Harry to the counter and ordered 3 drinks. Coulson showed how much fun he would be at a party by stating, "Professor Potter is 16, Mr. Stark." Tony looked at the killjoy the same way he'd look at someone who kicked his favorite car and then turned to Pepper. "This is Harry, the guy who paid the guy who drove me out of the desert and gave me ice cream." He then turned to Harry and said, "And this is my lovely assistant Pepper, who is uncomfortable dancing alone with her boss due to my reputation, so I'd like to invite you over." Harry asked, "You want me to dance with Miss Potts for you? All right, but you should know I'm married." All 3 adults looked at Harry with surprise. Tony was the first to speak up. "Already? At 16? Why?" Harry shrugged, "If you could control who you fell in love with, and when you fell in love, it wouldn't be love." Coulson smiled at that and Pepper gave a light blush. Tony actually looked pensive as if he'd just been given a complex puzzle that looked interesting to solve. After a moment he said, "No, you can't have her." Harry said, "Really? I pay really well." Pepper immediately answered, "No, I saw that UN thing and could hardly keep myself from yelling when I saw you post kick me signs all over those creatures." Tony gasped, "Oh, I remember that. That was you? That was genius." Harry smiled proudly and Pepper rolled her eyes at the man-child. Tony noticed the 3 drinks arrive and downed one quickly before picking up the other and passing it to Pepper and holding the third for himself to the eye roll of the collective group. Coulson said, "I was hoping I could debrief you both actually about what happened. Can we put something on the books?" Harry shrugged and said, "I'll be in California for a week." Stark said, "Sure, no problem. Then the 25th, say 7 p.m., Stark International." Harry nodded and Stark said, "Sure, why not," and then grabbed Harry and tried to pull him. Harry considered staying put, but decided to go along with it and allow himself to get dragged away. Harry took a final look at Coulson who had just pulled out a cell phone. It seemed like his day wasn't going to get any better with the stuff Harry had sprung on him. Stark led them to a balcony and said, "So, where can I buy some of those metagems?" Pepper sighed and said, "I think he means, thank you for saving my life." "And really, thank you," she said with all honesty. She then said with a bit of humor, "I hate job hunting and I haven't updated my resume in years." Stark interrupted and said, "Actually, he only saved Jensen. I was fully capable of rescuing myself." Harry said, "So I've heard. Speaking of saving yourself, I saw some footage of you on the news earlier today." Pepper looked at Tony and asked with a frown, "What did you do?" Tony said, "Nothing, I swear, I've been busy for the last 3 weeks." He turned to Harry and asked, "What did the news say?" "Something about a silver missile rocketing through the city." Tony scoffed and said, "Oh, those tabloids really will print anything these days. A missile, really?" Pepper recognized Harry's knowing smile and gave Stark a suspicion-filled look. Stark tried his best to pretend to ignore by finishing his drink and saying, "I seem to be out so I think I'll get some more." Pepper shook her head and said, "You're a genius too, right? Can you check on Tony to make sure he's okay?" Harry considered it and said, "I wouldn't say okay, but Tony is coping. The only thing though is if he is coping using unhealthy means or really unhealthy means." Pepper sighed at the fact that Harry didn't bother to assume Tony had a healthy coping mechanism. Pepper then asked, "Are you considering letting Stark International use those metagems?" Harry recognized that Pepper had shifted into business mode and answered, "Maybe. I own 11% of Stark International right now and Tony owns 40%. Together we hold a majority, so as long as Stark agrees to a few limits, we can certainly partner up on a few things and make some interesting products." Pepper nodded. Tony doesn't have anyone he can bounce ideas off, so even if you didn't give him anything, just being there to chat with would certainly help not only him, but Stark Industries. If he's serious about the no weapons thing, I have no problem with that. Pepper gave a relieved sigh at that. Harry was considered the world's #1 genius, and with him helping Tony invent new things, Stark International would be fine even if they stopped producing weapons entirely. Harry looked out and said, "I think something must have gotten Stark's attention because I don't think he's coming back." Pepper shook her head and said, "That man has the attention span of a goldfish sometimes." Harry presented Pepper a hand and said, "Well then, it was very nice to meet you, Miss Potts." She gave him her hand and he took it and bent down to give it a light kiss. He was British after all and would always be a gentleman in such a formal setting. Pepper rolled her eyes and said, "Just call me Pepper. Then next we meet you can call me Harry." Harry left the balcony and didn't spot Tony at the bar or anywhere else, so he headed for a side exit and left the building. Shortly after hitting the sidewalk, Harry got a call and the ID showed it was Stark. Harry answered it and said, "You coming back with that drink anytime soon?" Harry heard a hiss from the other side, "Yeah, sorry. Forgot about that. Something came up and I had to head out. Is Pepper all right?" She wasn't surprised, which means you'll need to make it up to her, which means you'll need to ask Jarvis to remind you to make it up to her when you forget to do it yourself. Good call. Anyways, has Stane contacted you yet? He certainly tried, but my number isn't so easy to get. Why? He was confident he'd have your share soon and vote to kick me off the board. I was sure there was no way you'd sell to him, so I had to ask. Harry laughed and said, "It seems he's working with Gene Con then, because before arriving he showed up and tried to muscle me out of my shares. I guess Stane assumed he'd succeed. That maniac? I'm guessing he didn't succeed then." Harry figured Stark knew that Con was a cutthroat businessman but probably didn't know about the Mandarin. No, he did not. Why does Stane want you off the board? The bastard is double dealing under the table. He's probably working directly with Con then. There's no solid evidence, but I have my suspicions that the 10 rings work for Con. Wait, you don't think that he sold you out to Con for the promise of a deal of some sort? No idea, but the possibility isn't low. Selling to both sides isn't easy after all. You need to sell to someone who can legally purchase the goods and secretly sell them to the other side. Con Industries certainly fits the bill for that kind of partner, don't you think? Son of a bitch. Language, Mr. Stark. Did you just, really? Yup. So what are you gonna do about it? I'm going to find and dismantle my property. With extreme prejudice, I assume. Obscurus told me about that suit and I'm guessing you've made some minor improvements. You could say that. Alright. I'll be in LA all week, so if you need something, feel free to call. Can you call Obscurus and invite him over for drinks? I'll think about it. Tony hung up and Harry could only wearily shake his head and return to the hotel room. He'd made an attempt to murder in cold blood a CEO of a powerful corporation. He'd seen an intergalactic peeper. He'd pranked a spy he met at a bar with the truth. He met and made friends with the CEO of another powerful corporation who was trying to turn the day into a date with his assistant, and he'd uncovered a global weapons smuggling scheme with said CEO who was likely going to address it by equipping a suit of flying armor and blowing up all the weapons he found. Was this normal for LA or was it just him? Notes from a not evil Jin. Your wish for a new chapter has been granted, but now you must face an even worse cliffhanger, for everyone can guess what could happen next chapter, but can you guess how different it will be from the movies? Insert diabolical Jin laughter here. Chapter 76. Chapter 76 Plot is the strongest armor. Random not evil Jin returns. Oh, you want another chapter? Well, I would be delighted to grant you such a wish. I'm sure you won't regret it in any way. Chapter 76 Plot is the strongest armor. Harry wasn't sure if he should be surprised or not, but Tony didn't call him that weak. Link however informed him of the training exercise fiasco where a fighter jet was destroyed while pursuing an unknown object. On the TV, Harry saw a few bits on the news of the 10 rings directly taking over Gulmara and wondered if they did it for convenience or as a taunt. Though it could only be considered a taunt if they knew Stark would come after them, and considering Stark's previous psyche profile, there is no way anyone would have been able to guess that, so it was probably just for convenience. There was no footage of what happened, but that ballsy reporter who somehow got a lot of footage most people would be shot at for trying to get showed a large number of destroyed machines and even a wrecked tank. Harry parked his rental car at the Stark International parking lot and headed inside. Sitting in the lobby was Agent Coulson, who turned and seemed happy to see Harry. Professor Potter, glad you could make it. Have you heard any word from Mr. Stark? Harry shook his head and said, he has my number but seems to have been quite busy over the last week. Harry sat 2 seats away from Coulson and took out a cell phone and started looking through stuff on the internet. It was 7 p.m. on the dot and Harry had no idea if or when Tony would actually show up. Coulson looked over and asked, have you heard anything from Khan? Harry shrugged, if he is still alive? No. Coulson asked, if? What exactly did you do to him? Harry nonchalantly answered, nicked him with a poisoned blade. Why? And you just happen to carry poisoned blades around. Is that any different from carrying a gun around? Besides, we have something of a history. You've met him before. Yeah. Before I started teaching there was no university class for metaphysics, so my research required more esoteric sources. While I was studying at a temple, that dickhead showed up and tried to steal a rather valuable book. Don't ask what book, you'll have nightmares. Anyways, I got in his way and tricked him into destroying the book before I ran away. We were never going to be friends after that. Coulson seemed rather stunned at the short story. He was beginning to realize that they had probably been trying to handle Potter all wrong. He was remarkably open about a number of things Coulson didn't think he'd just casually reveal. I was hoping I could ask more about Obscurus. Ask what you want, but I don't tell other people's secrets. He can refuse to act even if I make a request and provide the payment, so I'm not inclined to give away any info you should really be getting from him. Then is there a way to meet him? I can't ask him to meet you if that's what you're requesting. I'd have to pay him to do so and he could easily refuse such a request. If I ask him to do something and he refuses, he may stop taking my requests altogether. So the only way to meet him is to find him yourself or for him to meet you? Coulson considered it and found it reasonable. Harry had been willing to give private information about himself and his past with the Mandarin, which Coulson could extrapolate a lot from, but was not willing to give details about Obscurus. There may have been conditions to working with him and Harry wasn't willing to break them lest he lose access to such a powerful asset. Harry didn't have to use the slightest bit of telepathy of Shinix to make Agent Coulson think what he wanted him to. Nothing from Harry's past could be used against him, so giving away those details only made it look like Harry was willing to cooperate when he was just making them drive around in circles. Before Coulson could ask anything else, the pair noticed Pepper rapidly walking down the stairs into the lobby. Coulson got up and said, Miss Potts, we had an appointment. Did you forget about our appointment? Pepper looked both grateful and relieved once she noticed both Harry and Coulson there. She immediately answered, nope, right now, come with me. Coulson followed her. Right now? Pepper replied while walking towards the exit. We're going to have it right now. Coulson asked almost unbelievably. Now? Yeah, walk with me. Harry got up as well and followed the pair. Pepper, looking almost out of breath, said, I'm going to give you the meeting of your life. Your office. Harry felt a glare from behind and looked back to see Stane looking at Pepper from the second floor with murderous intent. Since Harry knew he was working with the Mandarin, Harry decided to play a small prank on him. He didn't have the time for something fancy, so Harry got out the apple of discord from his inventory, turned it into a crumple-horned snorkack, and tossed the mini purple-horned pig hippo directly to the upper floor where it smacked into and then grabbed onto Stane's face. The bald boss shouted in terror when it grabbed his face and wrapped its tail around his neck. Ah, get it off? Get it off me. He then ran to the side in terror and slammed directly into a wall. Pepper and Coulson both turned back to see Stane screaming and saw the fuzzy purple thing on his face. Both also simultaneously looked at Harry, who shrugged and said, You said meeting of your life, right? Let's go. Will someone get this damn thing off me? Security guards were running upstairs, so Pepper and Coulson decided to get out when Harry walked with them out the door. Harry took his car and followed Pepper's car, which followed Coulson's car. By the time they reached S.H.I.E.L.D.'s LA office, both Pepper and Coulson only remembered seeing Stane have a panic attack of some kind that was completely unrelated to Harry. The security cameras would show the same, and the footage of Harry throwing nothing had already been altered through a technopathy spell. Once they got to the office, Pepper started rambling about what happened. She was asked by Tony to get the shipping manifests of every shipment made overseas. The method he gave her to download those files opened a secret hidden file Pepper looked into and saw a translated video of the terrorists who kidnapped Tony, directly addressing Stane and demanding more money in order to kill Stark. Harry could only shake his head. He thought that Stane was working with the Mandarin from the beginning, but it was more likely now that the Mandarin's involvement only happened after Tony escaped and all the goons who were keeping him captive were killed. Pepper then explained the plans she saw on the file. They looked like plans to build a metal suit. Harry considered what happened and realized how the Mandarin got involved. He must have excavated the destroyed cave himself using his transfiguration magic ring and found the original plans for Tony's suit. The Mandarin probably then approached Stane for a partnership in this. If it was someone else, Stane probably would not have agreed, but saying no to the Mandarin was not nearly as easy. Coulson asked the slightly hysterical Pepper, "Can you call Mr. Stark and tell him to come over? If Obadiah paid to have him killed, his life is in danger." "Oh, okay. Just give me a second." He nearly fumbled when she got out her phone and set the speed dial. After a few rings, the phone was answered, but after another moment, Harry heard a high-pitched sound coming from the end of the phone. Pepper frowned and asked, "Tony, are you there?" "Hello." The line went dead. In the next moment, Harry got a text message from Link. Harry opened it and said aloud for those in the room, "Jarvis was just disabled. Something is going on at Stark's place." Link chatted with Jarvis pretty often, and according to Link, Jarvis had just been turned off. There was no reason for that to happen, and since Link was pretty smart, he thought to inform Harry. Pepper said, "My god. I'll call Rhodey." Ding. New quest, Sword and Shield. Defend Virginia Potts, Philip Coulson, and Anthony Stark. Eliminate threat targeting them. Harry sighed and said, "I'll call Obscurus and ask him to protect Stark." Coulson looked surprised while Harry was pulling out his cell and asked, how long would it take for him to get there? Harry sent out a few texts and answered, "Not long." Coulson said, "All right. We need to arrest Obadiah." Pepper said, "Whatever he's building is in Section 16 of Stark International. I have clearance and can get you in." Harry shook his head and asked, "Pepper, do you plan on assisting in the approach and arrest of a criminal with access to advanced weaponry while you are wearing high heels?" All eyes looked down and noticed Pepper's strikingly high heels. Pepper blushed and said, "I have some sneakers in my car." Harry nodded and said, "I'll come too then. I also have some goodies in my car." Coulson said, "I don't think that's a good dash." Pepper interrupted, "It's fine. Harry is shareholder of Stark International and should technically have clearance anyway." Coulson looked like he wanted to say that clearance was not the issue, but he decided to drop it. Though Harry claimed and even showed evidence of his skill, he was still considered a potential asset for his mind, and Coulson would hear no end of it if Harry was killed. That being said, if Harry brought goodies and had the common sense to remind Pepper not to enter a combat zone wearing high heels, something Phil himself neglected to remind her of, then Harry should not prove to be a burden. Harry pretended to go over to the trunk of his rental car and pull out a bunch of things when he was, in reality, just taking nice things from his inventory. Harry's tech company and prowess in metaphysics had reached a point that Harry didn't need to visibly hold back like he had in the past. Harry took out an advanced-looking gun which was in reality just a prop wand which funneled any spell cast using it through the muzzle. Thanks to the background Harry had built up over the years, Harry could use a prop like this to fire all the spells he wanted to write in front of muggles without anyone questioning it. He still wouldn't use portals in front of anyone, but he could do pretty much anything else using tech as the excuse. Once Harry was loaded up on goodies, he got into his car and followed the group back to Stark International along with half a dozen agents from the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters who were there for muscle. Harry wondered if it was a coincidence or not that the S.H.I.E.L.D. office was 10 minutes from Stark International. The fact that Harry's quest icon didn't show Stark dying on the way meant Harry had successfully used a time turner to go back and protect him. A self-fulfilling prophecy isn't straightforward to set up though. Harry had to text a system which confirmed that another Harry existed in the time stream, which confirmed Harry had already gone back in the past. If that system showed Harry had not gone back in the past, then the current him would have had to knock out Pepper and Phil and modify their memories and then portal to Stark's place to save him to complete the quest. Harry didn't like touching memories if the situation did not absolutely require it. Harry also wondered why this section of Stark International had tanks parked out front. Were they going to be used? Were they display models? Do some people who work here actually drive to work in a tank? After passing by the highly inefficient muon generator in the main space, Pepper led them to a side hall and a door with a heavy-duty lock on it. Pepper set her badge on the lock, but a negative-sounding beep occurred the 3 times she tried. Pepper said, "It's not working." Without looking back, Coulson put his hand behind him and someone handed him a small device he then walked up to and placed on the metal lock. Pepper asked, "Oh, wow, what's that?" "It's like a little device. It's like a thing that's going to pick the lock." Harry shook his head and said, "You need to get out of California. You are saying it's like far too much in your sentences." Pepper gave Harry a slight glare and Coulson said, "You might want to take a few steps back." Recognizing a white phosphorus charge when he saw one, Harry took a few steps back and turned around just like all the other agents in the room. "You don't look in the direction of white phosphorus going off." After a small sizzle sound and a light bang, the sound of the door opening was heard and everyone turned around to head inside. After a few moments, Coulson spotted Stane at a computer station looking over several monitors. "Don't move." Stane turned around without the slightest bit of fear. He saw Pepper and said, "Ah, Pepper, I'm sorry about Tony. Terrible tragedy." Pepper frowned and asked, "What are you talking about?" More than willing to comply, Stane continued, "Oh, you haven't heard yet? Tony's dead. Some man broke into his house and ripped his arc reactor out of his chest. I was just on the phone with him a few minutes ago and was able to say my goodbyes. I wish I could have been there for his last moments as his heart slowly gave out and his body grew colder and eventually stopped moving. Seeing the light vanish from his eye would have been a sight to see." Pepper was already in tears and looking at Stane like he was a monster. Harry asked, seemingly uninterested, "And why didn't you?" Harry knew Stark wasn't dead, so he looked like he didn't care about Stark's supposed fate. Stane looked over at Harry with some recognition and said, "Ah, that would be because of you. Khan never did tell me what you did to him, but he's been on life support all week. Many of his organs had to be replaced and he's still fighting to stay alive. I've had to watch over him to make sure he stayed alive, of course." Stane then looked over to Coulson and said, "Since Stark is dead, I'm the current CEO of Stark International and you are trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Coulson stated, "Mr. Stane, you are under arrest for suspected treason and murder in the first degree." Stane smiled at that and said, "You don't have the slightest bit of evidence, and even if you did, I can't leave." Stane pushed a button on the keyboard before anyone could do anything, but all the button did was bring up a monitor of an extremely sickly, skeletal-looking man covered in numerous tubes and wires and metal plates. Stane said, "Someone needs to watch over Khan. Potter really did a number on him." Coulson said, "I'll leave a few men to keep watch, but you're coming with me." Stane said, "No need for that. I have just the thing. You see, Khan showed me these drawings of a rather well-designed suit he found in a cave. He brought over a lot of his men. We've been working together to build it. The suit will act as a mobile life support system, so all that is needed is to get him in the suit and he'll be up and ready to go." Pepper said in horror, "He built a suit like Tony's. They're gonna put that Khan guy into it." Coulson lifted his hand and was now directly pointing his gun at Stane. He knew who the Mandarin was and knew what that suit could do from the reports he'd gotten from the military encounter with it. He said, "You know we can't let you do that." Stane smirked. "Do that? I'm not a comic book villain. Do you think I'd stand here explaining everything to you if there were even the slightest possibility you could affect the outcome?" He pointed at the monitor of Khan and zoomed into the timestamp. "This feed is from 35 minutes ago." Harry felt the surge of energy behind him and grabbed Coulson and Pepper before jumping out of the way of the great metal arm that swatted through where they had been standing. Two of the other agents were broken like twigs when the arm passed through where they were standing and the pair were sent to the opposite wall. Harry slapped a bracelet with a red gem on Coulson and a bracelet with a green gem on Pepper during the confusion. A 16-foot-tall sleek metal mech slowly stepped forward out of the shadow. A heavy rasping voice Harry somewhat recognized shouted through the speakers, "Potter." The agents who survived the initial SWAT because they were standing away from Coulson started shooting at the Mecha Mandarin, but other than the sparks that shined off the silver hull, no damage was shown. Harry took out his gun and fired 3 stunner spells, but the red blasts harmlessly washed over the shell, much to Harry's disappointment. Tech that was powered by magic did not simply break like other forms of tech did in the presence of wizard magic, so no one hit KO. That unfortunately implied that this mech was likely powered by Khan's rings. Harry figured they couldn't guess how Tony's arc reactor worked, so they used a readily available alternative. Harry then fired a half-dozen bombata spells which each caused the Mecha Mandarin to take a step back from the force, but once it braced itself it started charging forward. Coulson stood his ground and continued shooting at it, but the massive metal monstrosity, but with a wave of its arm, Coulson was thrown directly through a nearby wall. Harry shot the ground with a transfiguration spell to make it weaker, and with the Mecha Mandarin's next step, it fell through the ground into the floor below. From the other end of the room, Harry heard a gunshot and saw Stane pointing a smoking gun at Pepper saying, "Your services are no longer required." His pleased expression changed to confusion as he noticed Pepper didn't have a gunshot hole. Harry shot him with a stunner and ran over to a different wall where Pepper was actually hiding. Pepper asked, "What happened?" Harry tapped on the bracelet which he slapped on her wrist, prototype hologram doppelganger. Only one use. It was actually a single-use illusion spell that activated when the target's heart was beating really fast. Harry then ran over to see Phil walking out of the wall he had been thrown through and dusting himself off. He saw Harry, and while holding up his wrist where he noticed the bracelet, Harry slapped on him and said, "Thanks for that." He'd seen the video interview and recognized the Metagem Ruby's effect which protected him. Harry said, "It's single use and I don't have any more. Let's get out of here." "Potter? You will die for me, Potter? Nothing will stop the Mandarin." The mech jumped up from the lower floor back into this floor and started charging again. He pointed a metal hand forward and shot a missile. Harry threw a small device forward which generated a red shield which blocked the explosion before vanishing. At the moment the explosion hid them from view, Harry took out an amethyst and a moment later, the entire room was filled with a heavy layer of mist. Harry grabbed Pepper and Phil and used his map to run back out the way they came in. He wanted to get them out of there before he tried to fight this thing. Thankfully, the rings seemed to be only powering the suit and they weren't being used directly. The trio ran back through the main room and out into the parking lot. Harry noticed a motorcycle there which wasn't there before, meaning someone else entered the facility after they did. Coulson asked, "Is there anything you have which can take that suit down? If it was made solely by Stane, then easily. But that thing was definitely designed using alien tech and was powered by those rings of his." Coulson asked, "Alien? What? You didn't know? I heard those rings and his tech were scavenged from an alien spaceship he found decades ago. What about your hard light system? Only works in enclosed spaces and I didn't bring the portable version with me because I wasn't planning on pranking anyone this week." Coulson rolled his eyes that what could be the most advanced system he'd ever heard of was only useful to Harry as a pranking aid. The ground split open and the Mecha Mandarin jumped out. However, Harry felt a distinct difference. Pepper saw the glow on the Mecha Mandarin's chest and said, "Tony's reactor." Harry frowned and said, "Leave, he's after me." From the speaker, Khan said with absolute venom, "No, Potter. I will kill everything you care about. If you protect them, then they will die." The mech pointed a hand forward and blindingly bright sunfire shot out. Harry quickly took out another gizmo, but it was just a prop. He cast his most powerful shield while trying to prevent the strain from showing on his face as the parking lot, the cars, the pavement, and even the tanks behind them liquefied. From the speakers, Khan said, "Impressive, but how long can you keep up? With the arc reactor as the main power source, I am now free to use my rings as I please." He then lifted his other hand and lightning shot forward at the shield. Harry couldn't cast a different spell or use any toys while maintaining the shield to protect against the sunfire and keep Pepper and Coulson alive. He wanted the Mandarin to stop the flames and use his disintegration beam. At this point, Harry was willing to modify memories and his silver portals could be released much faster than a sorcerer portal. If the Mandarin fired his disintegration beam, Harry could make a silver portal which caused the beam to shoot the Mandarin himself. Unfortunately, the Mandarin was playing it safe. Well, the fact that playing it safe allowed him to slowly torment Harry until he was burned to death probably had something to do with that. Suddenly, a metal suit of red and gold flew down from the sky and right into the Mecha Mandarin. The weight of the impact shot the pair through the ground, down 3 floors, back 4 walls and to the highway below. Everyone looked up and also saw a speeder bike-looking vehicle hovering in the air where a demon mask-wearing individual wearing a basilisk hide long coat was sitting down. From the bike, the mask-wearing Obscurus shouted, "Potter, this is going to cost extra. Notes from Not an Evil Djinn. Your wish has once again been granted. Oh look, a alien tech Iron Man suit powered by an arc reactor, piloted by the Mandarin, and has the power of the Mandarin's rings? For the curious, here is a list of the power of the Mandarin's 10 rings. Absolute Zero Ice Blasts. Affect Mind. Lightning Generation. Sunfire Blast. Intense Laser. Light Absorbing Darkness Shroud. Disintegration Beam / Intangibility. Whirlwind and Vortex Generation. Concussion Force Beam. Matter Rearranger. Of course, I'm sure you can patiently wait for the next chapter and don't mind the cliffhanger at all. Insert diabolical evil Djinn laughter here. Chapter 77. Chapter 77, Metal and Magic. Harry felt a large headache hit him and found himself in an abandoned warehouse looking at a watch. The time display on the watch showed it was 5 p.m., 2 hours before he was supposed to meet up with Agent Coulson at Stark International's main building. His last memory was of seeing himself in his Obscurus getup showing up and saying, "This is going to cost extra." Harry sighed at the headache and knew he had no choice but to deal with it. That line was one of several he had prepared to deal with possible time travel incited paradoxes. One of the main things that must be avoided when time traveling is having the past self observe the future self. The few times Harry used this trick to be in the same place as his past self, he had to make sure his past self observed the actions of his future self as little as possible. Why? If his past self saw his future self make a mistake, he might not make it when it was his turn to act and create a paradox. In the event Harry had no choice but to observe his future actions, he had to seal his memories once he returned to the past and could only unseal them once he caught up to the present. This was much harder than it sounded and was impossible in many different circumstances. Also, Harry's mind would always try to fix itself, so he had to devote a part of his mind to keep his memories consciously locked up. Thus, the headache. In any case, this wasn't a bad thing. All he had to do was keep to the script until he caught up to the point he told his past self the signal, and then he could do what he needed. The first thing Harry did, of course, was get out the Goblin silver knife coated in the Mandarin's blood and use it to create a blood gem. Harry would have done this anyway once he got home, but he hadn't expected Obadiah to build Khan a suit using Tony's initial plans. No, Harry could tell it was far more advanced than that. The Ancient One told Harry that the Mandarin's rings were originally sources of power for a spaceship. Harry had seen advanced, otherworldly tech from the Mandarin before, and that suit looked like it had a few of the same principles. Harry first used the blood gem to determine if the Mandarin had any children or family. Surprisingly, he did not. That would simplify a number of things since his board of directors had already been informed of the CEO of Khan Industries' soon-to-come untimely death and had positioned themselves around the company like sharks circling a wounded prey. Harry spent a full hour preparing the kin-killing curse that would attack Khan through his DNA. To avoid a paradox, he couldn't use it now, but he could set it for a delay and have it activate 5 seconds after he showed up at Stark Industries. Anticlimactic? Sure. But Harry preferred to end the fight showing off as little as possible. Even under the guise of it being tech, what he already showed off while protecting Pepper and Coulson would certainly have S.H.I.E.L.D. knocking at his door in a week. The summer had just started and Harry wanted to get stronger and explore Xandar and the Andromeda Galaxy to his heart's content and learn more tech. Harry pulled up his stats and could only look on with anticipation. Harry Potter. Level 265 age 16. STR 350 AGI 350. Int 570 WIS 525. Luck 50. Warrior Path rank 37. Scholar Path rank 47. Magic Path rank 45. Tech Path rank 40. Business Path rank 36. Crafting Path rank 33. Dragon Path rank 29. Chinook Path rank 31. Sex Path rank 25. After rank 35, the speed at which the paths rose was barely a crawl. The only reason his tech path had gotten so high was because he was researching different types of energy using tech and he'd gotten 2 more ranks from his quest to rescue Stark. Once his tech path reached 41 though, Harry had some confidence he could make actual magic amplification tech. Currently he was unable to make any tech that surpassed what an artifact could do, which was why his prop gun was just a prop. It didn't strengthen or speed up his spells. Of course, getting the Mandarin suit and checking the alien tech inside it would be useful as well. Taking over his company didn't guarantee access to the advanced tech the Mandarin had access to. Overall, Harry had 4 ways to beat the Mandarin without fuss. Curse him to death, use Dragon Phoenix Fire Breath, portal him to the sun, and attack him in Harry's Obscurus form and overload the tech in the same way he did with Apocalypse. Harry refused to believe the Mandarin's tech was superior to Apocalypse's. That being said, the latter 3 options would destroy the tech in the suit and portaling into space might not even work since it had built-in life support and the Mandarin's rings were spaceship power sources to begin with. For that and many other reasons, Harry would shamelessly curse him to death. That being said, it was fine to think up a few backup plans as well. The curse should cause an agonizing, horrifically painful death within a minute of being cast, but the Mandarin might luck out somehow. Harry wasn't sure how he was even alive with basilisk venom running through his veins. Wizards were not, thankfully, omniscient, so the existence of something which can prevent or slow down death due to basilisk venom was not impossible of course. Some rare herb found only in the desolate mountains that bloomed once every 5,000 years blah blah blah, might exist. After preparing everything, Harry morphed into his Obscurus adult form and equipped his demon mask and a lot of artifacts. Beneath his basilisk long coat was a set of enchanted vibranium armor saturated with red energy from Sidorak's realm. The armor's enchantment basically gave Harry a knockoff version of the Juggernaut's power. Harry wouldn't be confident in facing the actual chosen of Sidorak in blow-for-blow combat, but he was confident in being able to put a few dents in the Mandarin's armor. The last time Harry fought using this setup was against the immortal Black Dragon and the Mandarin would be a good punching sparring partner. Once fully equipped, Harry got his speeder bike out of his inventory. It was of course his Ultra Broom, but it looked like a speeder bike out of Star Wars which Harry was fine with. Broom handles and bristles on the back had gone out of fashion in the 17th century anyways. After some waiting, Harry got the text from his past self and Harry replied to inform his past self that the time loop had been established. Harry could never guarantee the successful establishment of a time loop, so if he hadn't texted his past self back, his past self would not have made the time loop to begin with. Though thinking about it made Harry's headache worse. Harry flew his speeder to Stark's place at a leisurely pace of only a few hundred kilometers an hour, and when he arrived, the front yard was filled with motorcycles. Harry recognized them as the same type he saw had parked at Stark International's lab after he got there. The yard was covered with men of Asian descent wearing sunglasses and looking like gang members. Harry wondered if they had cleavers under their shirts, but decided not to profile. From his speeder, Harry jumped off from the air and landed in the yard. Harry's dimensional energy and immortal dragon chi saturated body erupted in a show of light and quickly moved to strike each of the goons with a stun magic fist. None of them would be getting up. The goons left the door open and Harry sped inside to knock out the 3 goons standing around Stark, who seemed incapacitated on the couch with a hole in his chest where the arc reactor had been. Harry figured he probably just missed the guy who took it as he drove away, but since Harry knew that Khan would get it later, Harry couldn't proactively go out to get it back. Instead, Harry walked over to Stark and touched him with the hand wearing the ring of recovery Harry got from his Save the Time Lord quest a few years back. It could automatically remove one status effect from himself or someone he touched once a day. A moment after Harry touched Stark, the blue veins around Stark's ears returned to normal color. Stark then coughed out, "They took my reactor." Stark's heart was slowly stopping and coughing was a way to force blood to the brain through the use of other muscles. Harry asked, "Got a spare?" "Workshop, downstairs, garage." Stark looked over to the side where there was a massive hole in the floor around what Harry remembered used to be a piano. Harry ran over and jumped down, landing on an already partially crushed Shelby Cobra. Harry winced at that. He wasn't a car person, but he could appreciate a classic. Harry detected the arc reactor in a display case with a plaque that read, "Proof Tony Stark has a heart." Harry decided then and there if Tony didn't treat Pepper right, Harry would prank him until he did. Harry removed the case and put the reactor in his inventory and paused. He sensed a few problems with it, including the fact that it was only partially charged. Harry unpaused, took it out, and used a light reparo charm to reverse the degradation of the palladium while also using some transfiguration and a tiny bit of alchemy to ensure the thing would hold up. After finishing, Harry put it back in his inventory and sighed. He then took it back out and did an even lighter bit of alchemy to fix the damage to it that the repairing magic had just done. Wizard magic didn't always work the way you wanted it. For example, while repairing a copper wire, it could change a tiny bit of the copper from 99.99% purity to 99.9% purity. What a lot of people don't know is that copper wires only conduct electricity when it is at least 99.99% pure. Thankfully, this cave-built arc reactor was built in a crude way and did not need to be perfect for it to work. It only took 3 tries and 5 unpaused seconds to fix up the reactor to as good as Harry could make it, so once done he ran over to the Cobra and jumped up to the main floor and ran back to Tony. Harry used a light bit of telekinesis to pull the connection wire from Tony's chest and expertly attach it to the connection plate under Tony's extremely focused stare. Once Harry had it installed, Tony let out a deep sigh of relief. Tony's body had been in a state with barely a heartbeat for a few minutes, so it needed a few more minutes to move. Harry asked, "What happened to Jarvis?" Stark answered while taking deep, labored breaths, "Stane disabled him." Harry walked over to the panel he put the Brilliance phone into and opened it again. He typed in a few commands into the phone and sent a text message to Link informing him of the situation. The lights turned on and the British voice came from the room. "System restored?" Harry asked. "How did Stane turn you off?" "Mr. Stark used his company to build this house and all its security measures. Using his clearance, Obadiah would have access to those plans, which included the security override codes to disable me." Harry turned to give Stark an incredulous look that Stark could easily make out even though Harry was wearing a mask. After taking a few more breaths, Stark said, "So sue me, I forgot he had access to those, all right. Can I ask what you're doing here, demon dude?" "Potter is with Pepper and Link told him Jarvis went offline. He called me and offered payment to keep you safe when your call with Pepper dropped. Is Pepper okay?" Harry smirked and answered, "Well, she went with Harry and some agent to arrest Obadiah." Stark's pale face turned, if possible, even paler. He said, "I need to get to her." He slowly got up and staggered over to the stairs heading to the garage. Harry rolled his eyes and wondered why the man didn't just call her and tell her Stane was going to kill her and to keep as far away as possible, but he couldn't remind him since that didn't happen in the timeline. He'd tease him relentlessly about it later. Halfway down the stairs, Tony's brain seemed to have realized he hadn't spoken enough in the last few minutes, so he turned to Harry and asked, "What's you do to me? I should have been paralyzed for another 7 minutes. Is that a superpower of yours or something you got from the kid?" "Don't be ridiculous, Tony. Potter can't make stuff that looks like it came out of Dungeons and Dragons. It is just an effect of the Ring of Recovery, which allows me to remove a status effect once per day. I got it as a reward for a quest to return a Time Lord to his home dimension and defeat a group of evil space witches that were plotting to spread madness throughout the world." Tony rolled his eyes and replied, "If you don't want to tell me, just say so." Harry chuckled as they reached the garage and Tony pulled up to a computer and started typing in various coding changes. Harry peeked over and recognized he was changing the settings of an operating system to use less energy. Harry asked, "Why didn't they just kill you?" "Obi wanted it to look like an accident. Like my heart stopped on its own, and as long as he found my body and recovered Stark technology first, no one would be able to say my reactor wasn't in my chest all along. He said he wanted me to die cold and powerless." Harry asked, "He just wanted you alive so he could gloat, didn't he? The bastard. Can't believe I looked up to him." Harry shrugged. "No one is the villain of their own story. He probably thinks his reasons are good enough. Before your mountain retreat getaway with Yinsen, you certainly weren't a saint either." Stark froze just for a moment before he continued typing, "You're right. But I'm trying to fix it." Harry had no doubt that Stark's definition of fix it meant reducing the amount of damage his existence has done to the world to a minimum. Harry asked, "Have you ever heard of kintsugi?" "Can't say that I have. It's a Japanese thing where when some pottery breaks in an accident, the pieces are put back together using lacquer and gold dust. When the pottery is repaired, it has beautiful veins of gold which give the piece character and a history." "Well, I'm not exactly an artsy person. Does the story have a point, demon dude?" "Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to fix something. If you're creative enough and have the resources to do so, it's even possible to fix things in a way which makes them better than how they were before they were broken." To emphasize the point, Harry reached over and tapped on the arc reactor in Tony's chest. Tony stopped typing again just for a moment. He wasn't thick enough to ignore the obvious symbolism and Harry's point. Tony felt his prior actions had broken a lot of things and he'd spent the last week trying to fix as many of them as he could. But perhaps his methods had been a bit crude. After a few more minutes, Stark finished typing and said aloud, "Jarvis, suit me up?" The garage floor opened up and multiple robotic arms appeared and placed piece after piece of equipment onto Stark and assembled it into a red and gold metal suit. Tony moved around for a bit and then partially staggered and said through a speaker, "Wait, did you do something to the arc reactor?" Harry answered, "I took it to Radio Shack and had them tune it up for you." "You know what, never mind. You're getting paid to keep me safe, right?" He then used some muon emission palladium repulsors on his feet and hands to hover and asked, "Think you can keep up?" Harry snapped and used some technopathy to command his speeder to fly into the garage, where he jumped on it and said, "Got another stupid question." Stark shot out of the hole next to the Cobra, and Harry launched himself through the garage entrance and saw Stark already flying away. Harry easily caught up to him and the pair flew in the direction of Stark International. It had been about 30 minutes since Harry saved Stark, and it took another 4 minutes for Stark's slow suit to fly to the Stark Industries lab. Harry was timing it and knew they were on schedule. Soon they arrived at the parking lot that was completely glowing molten red from the heat of the sunfire blasting out the Mandarin's armored fist. Stark upped his speed to the max and dive-bombed the Mecha Mandarin through the parking lot, a few walls, and into an adjacent highway. Harry flew his speeder over to where past Harry and the gang was and shouted, "Potter, this is going to cost extra." The past Potter seemed to sigh with resignation, which the current Harry completely understood. Pepper and Coulson saw this and probably assumed he was sighing about the increased expense. Nope, it was because time travel is a massive headache when the unexpected happens while using it. Harry took his speeder over to the freeway where he saw Mecha Mandarin lifting a van to smash Tony with. Harry jumped off his speeder and delivered a golden dragon axe kick to the arm carrying the van, causing it to be smashed out of the way, releasing the vehicle, which Harry had to jump out of the way from to avoid it running him over. Harry sensed Tony overcharged his arc reactor with muons in an accelerated decay reaction, which produced vastly more muons than usual for a moment. In that moment, they were directed out the front of the arc reactor at the Mandarin. The massive muon beam successfully knocked the Mandarin to the side, and Harry used the opening to rush up and deliver an uppercut to the Mandarin's torso. The force of the impact caused the illusion of a rising dragon, which blasted the Mandarin into the air and over to an access road near the freeway. Harry jumped over and Tony flew up while saying, "Damn demon dude, you must eat a lot of spinach." Harry landed and asked, "Popeye, really? Are you sure you're not an old man?" The Mandarin got up and moved to smash Harry, who knocked away the blow. The air around the Mandarin suddenly started spinning rapidly as if a tornado had just formed. The metal suit used the wind to spin itself and deliver a haymaker that suddenly accelerated to 5 times faster halfway through the movement. The speed up and the wind caused Harry's parry to miss the timing, and Harry got a metal fist to the face that sent him through 3 ways and into a meter-deep crater on the other side of the building next to the access road. Harry paused and realized that the Mandarin was probably still getting used to the suit's controls. That may have been why Stane was stalling with a monologue when Harry and the rest first got there. The Mandarin was a very skilled martial artist and he knew tech, so his skill at using the suit would only improve as the fight continued. The kin-killing curse should have started killing Khan already, so hopefully the battle wouldn't take much longer. Harry unpaused and jumped back in the fight to see the Mandarin firing a laser that Tony was meeting with the repulsor beam on his hand. Harry landed on the Mandarin's back and tried direct transfiguration to change the suit or disable it. The Mandarin's speed abrupt jumped again and Harry was shaken off and hurled to the ground. Tony yelled, "You alright?" "I'm fine." Harry realized what the Mandarin was doing and shouted, "He's using a built-in matter rearrangement system to speed up the movement of his molecules. That's how he's moving so fast and recovering from damage." The Mandarin's suit was undergoing active transfiguration using the same ring Harry recognized could transfigure matter. That was why the dents and damage Harry had done to it weren't visible, and how the massive suit, clearly not built for speed, was outspeeding Harry at times. The speakers on the Mandarin's suit sounded out, "Very good. Now how will you deal with this?" He shot a bolt of lightning at Tony and a concussive blast at Harry. Harry had experienced those blasts before and stood his ground to endure it. Tony staggered, and for a moment and Harry sensed the lightning bolt was directed through his suit into the arc reactor, making it glow with a blinding brilliance. Tony shouted, "You can have it back? Unibeam." He fired his chest laser, Unibeam apparently, but this time the Mandarin dodged it using a sped-up motion. Harry launched himself forward to deliver an unstoppable punch, but the mighty mech moved in a fluid motion to catch the telegraphed punch and spin around to slam Harry back into the ground using his own unstoppable momentum. A massive crater 10 feet in diameter formed and the building next to it collapsed into the crater. Harry jumped out before he got buried and saw Khan fire a concussive shot at Tony, which blasted Stark back 100 meters. Harry dashed forward and moved to strike Khan once more, but Khan parried the strike this time and countered with a blast of close-quarters sunfire. Harry spun to the side and knocked the mech's arm up, sending the flames into the air where they torched and liquefied a nearby overpass sign. Harry pressed forward and delivered another set of body blows which each shook the armor and pushed the mech off balance. The Mandarin was already using proper footwork to dispel the strength of the strikes and started matching Harry blow for blow. If it wasn't for the relatively excessive level of collateral damage, Harry would want to keep up the fight to grind his warrior path, but that would be a tad bit selfish, all things considered. The fact that the Mandarin wasn't dead already was also a mystery. The only thing Harry could think of was that the Mandarin predicted Harry would use his blood for something and figured a way to protect himself. Technically there was no way to block the kin-killing curse if someone had your blood, but there was also no way to block the killing curse, so that wasn't a possibility Harry could rule out. European wizards thinking that muggles were ignorant of them was completely delusional. The Mandarin recognized Harry as a wizard when he first saw him, even though Harry wasn't using a wand. That kind of insight proved the Mandarin knew a lot about wizards. The Mandarin shot a laser beam, but Harry covered his hands in red energy and deflected it. Sidorac's Chosen was considered immune to magic because red energy was overbearing enough to protect the Juggernaut from spells. Harry already confirmed when he was protecting Pepper and Coulson that a red energy shield could stop the magic of the Mandarin's rings. He couldn't reflect it back at the Mandarin, but deflecting it away from him and others was doable. Tony returned and maintained a distance from Khan and simply pelted him with repulsor fire. The muon concussive force was strong enough to stagger the Mandarin, which gave Harry the openings needed to deliver stronger strikes. The Mandarin hadn't gone intangible, meaning the suit probably couldn't incorporate that power, but Harry was still keeping his senses open for that disintegration beam. The Mandarin sped up and did a backflip and landed facing Tony. He fired an enormous wave of sunfire at Tony, who shot up into the air to dodge. The sunfire wave tracked the flying Stark overhead, and Harry launched himself forward once more, this time shining with golden lightning and giving onlookers the illusion of a raging dragon. Khan sped up again, but this time Harry twisted in the air to prevent himself from getting grabbed and struck Khan with the force of a titanic battering ram. The Mecha Mandarin shot backwards with a massive foot-shaped dent on the chest piece and skidded hundreds of feet back. Stark landed next to Harry and said, "Got any ideas, because I'm almost out of juice here?" Harry sighed, placed his hand on Stark's arc reactor, and cast another reparo while reversing the palladium degradation. Harry said, "Don't tell anyone I did that." He didn't want S.H.I.E.L.D. to think he was anything but muscle, otherwise he'd be bothered too much. Stark replied, "Okay, that works. Oh, he's coming back." Harry also noticed the now rocket-powered charge of the metal missile coming at him. Harry decided to trade damage and charged forward as well. Harry's glowing red arm covered in golden lighting struck the Mandarin's arm, causing the latter to partially cave in. The Mandarin's form sped up, however, and twisted, changing the attack from a punch into a tackle by sacrificing an arm. Harry was shot back through 6 blocks and 7 full buildings. His only solace was that he hadn't hit anyone. Harry's arm was trashed, but it recovered quickly. Harry's health had in fact been reduced in that exchange by about 10%. Harry pulled out a potion from his inventory and gulped it down before returning outside and seeing Stark flying higher and higher and the Mecha Mandarin following him into the air using his rockets. Harry called over his speeder and followed the pair up. Khan shot concussive blasts and lasers at Stark, but the latter was nimble and the attacks had become predictable enough to dodge at this point. The air was getting thin and cold, so Harry cast a few warming spells on himself to prevent any issues while he continued to follow them higher and higher. Harry could guess what Stark was thinking, but it was too bad he was wrong. Khan's rings were spaceship power sources. It became obvious from using his energy sense that Khan was using his Sunfire ring to maintain the heat of his suit to use it without difficulty. Harry pulled out his magic gun artifacts and shot a few rounds which exploded off the mech's armor. Stark shouted, "You've been holding out on me." Harry rebutted, "These rounds are expensive." They were too. The gunpowder was made with crushed magic gems and the bullets were made of ancient jade which held the best spells. Khan's speakers shouted back, "You want cold? I'll give you cold." From the Mecha Mandarin's non-damaged hand came beam after beam of absolute zero energy. Harry and Stark were getting better at predicting the shots, but the Mandarin was also getting better at using the suit. Stark's suit shouted, "That's not good." Harry looked where he was pointing and saw a pair of jets approaching at a few times the speed of sound. And they just fired their missiles. Stark flew behind the Mandarin and Harry just stood still. The missile passed him by, of course. His speeder bike looked like something from Star Wars, but it was a broom and didn't emit heat. Technically, Harry's use of warming charms in this frigid airspace should be hot enough to track, but Harry's heat signature was as invisible as every other energy signature from him, and there was no way those missiles would be able to lock onto him. All fired missiles struck the Mandarin with a massive explosion. Harry had to expand the strength of his red energy shield to endure. From the smoke, a laser beam shot out and was followed by an ice beam. Both accurately struck the jets, with the last removing one of the wings and the ice beam freezing the other jet. The first jet pilot ejected out safely, but the iced jet did not. Stark shouted, "I'll get that guy, you play with magic, Mike." Harry shouted as Stark flew off, "Never use that reference again. I don't need that imagine in my head." The Mandarin rocketed forward at Harry, who nimbly rolled over to dodge. Trying to match acrobatics with Harry while he was on his Ultra Broom prototype was not going to end well for the Mandarin. Harry shot another round of exploding ammo at the Mandarin, who fired off lasers and ice beams and lightning and even the occasional close quarters sunfire. Harry figured the Mandarin's remaining undamaged hand had those 4 rings and the matter rearranger ring. His damaged hand was almost fixed though. Tony returned and while flying close to Harry said, "I got an idea to take him down, but I need you to keep him still." Harry said, "For how long?" 5 seconds. "No problem." Harry flew over Khan and jumped off his speeder to land on Khan and stick himself to Khan's back. Without the whirlwind ring and without something to smash his back against, this was a big weak spot for the mech. Khan shouted, "Get off me," and tried to twist back and forth, but Harry wasn't budging. After a moment, Harry felt something and smiled. Harry whispered, "Through these words I cast you back, 7 rings top to bottom. Bind the magic casted out, finite incantatum." 7 rings, invisible to normal humans, formed around Harry and the Mandarin. This was the ultimate spell in anti-magic Harry had made, but it would have no effect against the Mandarin's rings because they were closer to technology than magic. However, those rings were not the only magics the Mandarin wore. Obscurus? Now, Harry jumped off the Mandarin's back and landed onto the speeder, which had already aligned itself for Harry to land on. Tony fired an extremely bright unibeam at the Mecha Mandarin's ass. A moment later, the rocket thrusters keeping the Mandarin in flight failed and it fell back to Earth. The speakers on the suit turned on one last time as the Mandarin shouted, "Ah!" Harry shook his head. He didn't really feel schadenfreude and he knew that the Mandarin was not screaming because he was falling. He was screaming in pain because the magic amulet Harry sensed on him which had been holding back the kin-killing curse had been broken by Harry's anti-magic spell. A little help here. The lights on Tony's suit turned off and he started falling too. Harry flew over and caught him. Though the speakers weren't on, Harry still heard Tony say, "Can you recharge me again? I'd rather not ride back, bitch." Harry considered it and remembered that he hadn't taken his girls flying yet, so if Tony was the first person to fly on a broom with Harry, they would not be pleased. Harry lifted Tony up and set his hand on the arc reactor and cast Reparo once more. Tony started flying under his own power again and Harry asked, "How do you think of that?" "Well, since he didn't ice up, I needed another way to bring him down. His hand was healing slowly so I figured the damaged thrusters wouldn't fix themselves before he hit the ground." Ping. Quest completed, Sword and Shield. Reward, Loyalty of the Mandarin's Rings. Harry smiled and said, "Time to get a trophy." One thing Harry noticed when he time traveled during a quest was that he wouldn't get the reward until the second playthrough. Harry flew down at speeds far faster than Tony's descent and found the crater where the Mandarin landed. For some reason, it just so happened to be in the very parking lot that past Harry and Co were watching the fight from. The trio were slow to approach the fallen giant which seemed mostly intact. Harry actually figured that the suit was built with enough support to allow the occupant to survive such a fall, but the fall wasn't what killed him, it was the kin-killing curse. Once Harry approached, he felt the Mandarin's rings. Those were artifacts the Mandarin had synced to his very life force which was why he could use them despite not being a sorcerer. Now Harry could feel them as they had been suddenly synchronized to his life force. Harry jumped into the crater and met the look of past Harry and could tell his prior self could feel it too. Coulson asked, "Is he dead?" Obscurus answered, 100% dead. "You know he was in his late 70s, right? Accidental falls kill the elderly all the time. Tragic really." Harry's speeder flew down and he pulled a net from the thing and placed it on the ground. Without visible effort, he lifted the entire motionless mech and set it on the net before he wrapped it up and attached it to his speeder. Harry then got on the speeder and used telekinesis to lift the mech while his speeder rose, making it look like his frail flying bike was capable of lifting all that weight. Harry's weak Shinix couldn't do anything to the mentally acute Mandarin while he was in the mech and the mech resisted anything he tried thanks to the active matter rearranger, but now that the thing was dormant, he could use Shinix on it as he pleased. Coulson suddenly realized what Harry was doing and shouted, "Mr. Obscurus, I'd like to take that suit into custody." Tony arrived and Obscurus said, "I'm taking it as a hunting trophy in lieu of payment. With this, Harry doesn't need to pay me." Coulson quickly added, "It was built by Stark International so it is his property." Tony picked up on this and said, "Yeah, if it's a trophy, I should get my half too right." Harry said, "It's just like Gulmara Stark. How about this, let me have the whole thing and I'll owe you a few favors and come over for a drink." Stark immediately replied, "Deal." He only replied for Coulson's sake. He recognized Obscurus's hint about Gulmara, when Tony asked Yinsen to hide his armor to prevent it from falling into the hands of others. Tony really didn't want that suit to fall into the wrong hands and having Obscurus take it meant the agents couldn't ask him for it. Plus, if Obscurus owed Tony a few favors, he could just ask to examine the suit himself. Coulson frowned at that. Obscurus noticed this and asked, "What's your name?" "Agent Phil Coulson," he answered. "Well, Agent Coulson, how about this? Let this one go and I'll agree to a meeting later. Neither this suit nor the powers within should be used by humans." I'm not being figurative either. The Harry of the past who had been keeping quiet until now asked, "Corruption." Now that he was linked with the rings, he realized the problem they had. Obscurus nodded and said, "As bad as the One Ring. No one should wear them." Harry realized that these things contained Dragonkeen life force, meaning they had of course been forged using the lives of extremely powerful alien Dragonkeen and a lot of treasures and precious materials. Harry was fine because Immortal Dragon trumped Dragonkeen, but any other human who bound them would end up wicked, cruel, and hungry for power and be unable to see other humans as anything but insects. Coulson gave a thoughtful look at the suit and said, "All right." Obscurus nodded back and lifted the suit into the air and flew off. He knew he was being tracked via satellite, so he accelerated into the air over the Pacific and simply kept getting faster and faster. After breaking the sound barrier multiple times over, Harry turned himself and his cargo invisible and slowed to a stop. He used some telekinesis to create a pocket of air in the water and flew into the pocket and submerged it. Once below the surface, he made a portal and took the suit through it to his basement before returning to his normal form and going upstairs. He could immediately return and take over the place of his past self and do all those interviews with S.H.I.E.L.D. Instead, Harry sat on the couch and turned on the TV. A time turner can go back 5 hours after all and he'd only woken up about 3 hours in the past. That meant he could let the past Harry do all the boring stuff and replace him in an hour and a half once the boring interviews were over. Was he throwing his past self under the bus? Sure, but he figured he'd forgive himself for it. Author's note. My original idea was to have Ironmonger and Mandarin team up against Harry and Stark, but that had a lot of problems. I wanted Iron Man to fight the Mandarin to introduce Tony to magic, but the Mandarin would kick his ass and Stane wasn't a challenge for Harry, making that unappealing to write. Then I go and accidentally mostly kill the Mandarin because I needed them to meet beforehand, but I hate the trope of the hero not killing the villain when he has a chance. I have this terrible habit of writing myself into a corner like that. I figure if the Mandarin wasn't dead after that, he'd need to be on life support, but then I thought of that Goblin suit from the second Spider-Man 2 movie and the pieces fell together into this hodgepodge, which somehow ended with me letting Harry fight using both the Professor style, which I had to make up, and Obscurus style, which was unintentional because I didn't think I'd be able to do that, though that caused its own problems I had to resolve. Still had to figure out how the curse wouldn't kill him, but if the Mandarin knows about wizards, he probably knows about blood magic and how to prevent it from being used if an enemy has his blood. And for those complaining that Mecha Mandarin didn't have enough other weapons, please justify it as either the Mandarin didn't want them or the suit wasn't finished. Even in canon it was built in less than a week. Achievement unlocked, 400,000 words reached. Bad news, my work schedule is changing for the next month, so my release rate may slow down for a while. That's why this chapter is longer than normal, to not have a cliffhanger when I'm not sure when the next chapter will come out. Chapter 78. Chapter 78 Messing with the Script. Chapter 78 Messing with the Script. It had been 3 days since the event the media dubbed The Clash of Iron, and Harry was extremely grateful for Link's online intervention. Videos of Harry punching the Mandarin while shining with the silhouette of a golden dragon around him had nearly gotten him tagged with the name Dragon Fist, but through the use of direct hacking and thousands of fake online profiles, Harry's chosen identity of Obscurus was properly portrayed with the rationality it was because he was obscure and mysterious. Harry spent a lot of time afterwards properly praising Link for his good work. Tony did not receive the same treatment, of course, and was given the unimaginative title of Iron Man, while the martial arts-wielding mech they faced together was unceremoniously dubbed the Martial Mech. Harry actually didn't have a problem with being called Dragon Fist, but he was worried they'd change it to something else when he displayed his non-Dragon Chi-related capabilities, and he was moderately concerned with leaving his fate to the mercy of the internet, even if he pretty much owned it at this point. Somehow or another, there were over 150 videos of the battle from various people, and even more impressive, no one had died. Even the agents that the Mandarin sucker slammed into a wall were only grievously injured, not dead. This wasn't entirely a coincidence, as Harry had been generating a muggle-repelling field from the moment the fight started, and everyone in the area suddenly decided they had to be somewhere else when they were a certain distance from him. Of course, the field was not foolproof, and the camera on the Brilliance phones that a lot of the witnesses had were quite good at long range. During the S.H.I.E.L.D. interview that followed, Harry gave a lot of details mixed with lies about what he did and how the tech he used did it. Harry also shut down every attempt to request a sample of said tech and had been asked at least a dozen times for a sample of the poison he used on the Mandarin. The request wasn't surprising, as the records recovered from the site of what the poison did to Khan and what Stane had to do to keep him alive were as thorough as they were terrifying. When Harry finally had a chance to check the man's corpse, tech, and rings, he found a couple of things he hadn't expected. The first was that Khan was using his matter rearranger ring to solidify the poison in his blood, which was then filtered out by machines built into him. That would have solved the issue for most poisons, but basilisk venom is magic in nature and was impossible to solve using such means. Rather than saving his life, it would be more accurate to describe it as a method to indefinitely prolong his death until they found a better method or cure. Because the matter rearranger ring was used in such a manner, it was limited in what else he could do during the fight, which was why he only used it to fix the damage and speed himself up in short bursts at times. Besides the corpse, Harry learned several things about the magic rings when he played with them for the first time. The first was that they allowed for teleportation. The Mandarin never used this against Harry in their first match, and he couldn't use it in the mech fight because the teleportation would not bring the mech, thus using it would rip him out of his life support system. The mech itself was also only about a fifth of the way finished, which was why the only combat capabilities it had were physical attacks and the use of the rings. Harry returned to New York by plane the following day since he couldn't, visibly, stay in LA for so long. After scheduling a dozen or so meetings, he left the West Coast and returned home in time to watch Tony's press conference on TV the following morning. Stark stood at a podium with a set of cue cards obviously given by S.H.I.E.L.D. as to what happened, and Stark followed the script as well as can be expected by tossing the cards and saying on live TV, "I am Iron Man." Harry certainly had no intention to give a repeat performance of that little reveal. In fact, Harry's involvement had been kept out of the event entirely, so the media had no idea he was anywhere near the area during the fight, and was even more clueless that the martial mech's main goal was to kill him first and that everyone else was simply getting in the way. Obscurus kindly gave Khan's corpse to S.H.I.E.L.D. shortly afterwards so they could waste their time playing with it. The basilisk venom was useless if removed from the body when Khan was alive or dead, so no one would be able to dip their knives in Khan's blood and poison people with basilisk blood through second-hand exposure. Magic poisons don't work like that. One thing of interest, however, was that Khan wore gloves under his rings, making his hands look normal. When the human skin gloves were removed, it showed that Khan's hands were scaled, a sign of the corruption of the dragon aspect the rings had, and probably one of the reasons he lived so long. After spending some time studying the things, Harry could only lament at the fact that the rings were ridiculously crude. Of course, these were power sources from an alien ship that a man fashioned into wearable rings decades ago, so Harry's judgment might have been a bit harsh. In either case, the rings barely showed off a fraction of the power source's true capabilities, but even with that, the Mandarin was able to maintain his status as a titan of his era. Rather than use them himself, Harry had a much better idea for what to do with the rings. He'd start on that project next month. As for Khan's death, the story that the CEO of Khan Industries had died from an unfortunate fall would break later, delayed just to make sure it wasn't obvious that the Marshal Mech and Jean Khan weren't one and the same. There would be people who easily guessed, of course, but it would be less obvious to the public. However, it was not all good news. Someone had died that day while Harry was fighting the Mandarin with Tony while protecting Pepper and Coulson. Not in LA, but in New York. Harry found from Link about an hour after the fact that Peter Parker's uncle, Benjamin Parker, had been killed in a mugging. Because it happened while Harry was already using the time turner, there was nothing he could do about it. The same time turner couldn't be in 3 places at once, so he couldn't lend it to someone to do the job either. Thus Harry found himself on a dusty roof high above the glittering streets of New York. The lights from the city far outshined the cloudless sky, so only the brightest stars were visible to those who took the time to look up at them. On this roof, sitting on the edge dangling his feet, was Peter Parker. Without preamble, Harry strode over and sat down next to his friend. Peter was more than a little confused when someone sat next to him and then surprised to see who it was, but neither emotion were well represented on his face as he lacked the emotional energy to properly feel them, much less display them. Harry got straight to the point and said, "After Jade moved in, I started teaching her magic." This obviously caught Peter off guard. He was unable to stop himself from asking, "Magic? Like real magic? With spells and stuff?" "Yup. Turns out she's very talented." When she found out how talented she was really excited. Then I told her the trade-off. In this world, the more a person is capable of carrying, the more the weight of the world will naturally fall onto their shoulders. Other than living in a cave, there is no way around this. A big rock makes a bigger splash than a small rock. The only way a big rock can avoid making waves is to not move. Otherwise, every action will have far greater consequences compared to when they were weak. This is true at all levels. From a child growing into an adult, to a teen becoming a mutate and gaining superpowers. Peter immediately blurted out, "Wait, you know." Harry rolled his eyes and answered, "Wanda, Jean, and Rogue are all mutants and I literally invented metaphysics from scratch. You think I wouldn't recognize a mutate when I see one? Especially one with energy signatures like yours." Peter calmed down a bit after that. Wanda was on TV and outed herself as mutant and Harry's girlfriend, so he knew that one. Rogue and Jean were both nice and them being mutants wasn't a big deal either. Considering all the stuff Harry had done, Peter felt a little embarrassed that he thought he could hide it. After a few more moments of silence, Peter said, "Uncle Ben told me the same thing. With great power, comes great responsibility." Peter slumped down and muttered, "It's all my fault he died." Harry asked, "Because you didn't stop the dude before he did the deed or because you were in the area and didn't save him?" Peter slouched down even further and after a few moments, quietly answered, "Both." Harry shook his head and said, "You're not alone in this city. A lot of people were there and didn't stop him or save your uncle either. It's not your job to save people or stop criminals. You just feel this way because you have a lot more strength than a normal person." Peter got a little offensive and said with an ever-increasing volume of voice, "But you said it too. My actions have greater consequences? I could have stopped him. He walked right past me after robbing a store earlier. I did nothing to stop him when I could have and then he killed my Uncle Ben? It was me." "You're oversimplifying things. The police should have been called right after that store robbery and caught the guy. If they did, Benjamin Parker would still have been with us. Why didn't they stop him or save your uncle? Was it because the store clerk didn't call them? Was it because they were delayed? Was it because they decided not to come? Was it because they didn't have the manpower? Was it just because of bad luck?" Harry let that sink in for a bit and stated once more, "You feel responsible because you have more strength than a normal person. If that's the case, I'm responsible too. I'm older, richer, smarter, and more handsome than you are. With all the resources at my disposal, I'm one of the most powerful people in the world. With all that power, I didn't save your uncle. How am I not responsible?" Peter said, "You were on the other side of the country, how can it be your fault?" Harry said, "And you can't see into the future and are not responsible for catching robbers. How can it be your fault? Look, having more strength just means you have more options. The choices you make have greater consequences because you can reach further. It's not a nice thing to hear, but only the weak can stay ignorant and peaceful." Peter frowned at Harry's response and asked, "Why are you here, Harry? This isn't exactly a great pep talk." Harry stayed silent for a few more moments while looking up, trying to distinguish the stars hidden behind the glare of the city lights. "I want to give you a choice, Peter. Right now you don't have one. As long as you have this power, you'll find yourself naturally drawn into events with far-reaching consequences. You're too smart to claim ignorance on the consequences of what you do in those events, so you won't be able to avoid taking a certain path." Harry turned away from the sky and looked at Peter. "Consider this the crossroads. I've worked with Dr. Hank McCoy and know plenty about genetics. I once offered to remove the powers of the Fantastic Four, and eventually they declined and decided to keep their powers. I'm going to make you the same offer. If you want, I can return you to how you were before. You'll be a small rock once more. Your actions or lack of actions won't make any great difference in the grand scheme of things, so you won't hold any responsibility for it." Peter remained silent for about 5 minutes after that. Eventually he asked with a bit of hesitation, "You wouldn't look down at me for giving this up?" Harry asked, "Would you look down on a woman who gave her kid up for adoption because she didn't feel she could handle the responsibility?" "What? Of course not." Harry nodded, "Same thing. It is better to give up a responsibility if you are certain that things in general will be worse off if you have those responsibilities." Harry wasn't being entirely accurate, of course. If a good man gives up great responsibilities, the world would in fact be worse off for it. And someone with Peter's intellect would be a big rock regardless. However, Harry didn't want to see Peter end up in a situation where he believed he had no choice but to use his strength. Harry had spent centuries watching television and knew there was only one way for that to end, with the person doing a half-assed job with the responsibilities forced upon them probably getting a lot of people killed. So, by giving Peter a choice, it also meant that the responsibilities were no longer forced. By giving Peter the option of giving them up, it meant Peter was actively accepting the responsibilities if he decided to keep them. Actively accepting responsibilities was an entirely different mentality compared to being forced to accept them. Harry had nothing against Peter's Uncle Ben, but forcing responsibilities on those with strength is a recipe for drama and disaster. After a few more moments of silence, Harry said, "To change you back, I need some DNA from before whatever happened to you. I can even store some of your blood, right? So if you want to regain this strength later, when you're older and ready for it, that'd be an option too." Harry then got up and said, "In either case, drop by when you've made a decision. If you decide to keep your strength, you'll need training, and Jade and the rest could use a new punching sparring partner." Peter turned around quickly and asked, "Why are you offering this to me?" Without turning back, Harry answered, "Because we're friends, Peter. Don't worry about the future so much. If the sky falls, giants like me will be there to hold it up. Of course, if you want to become a giant too, I'd appreciate the help of a friend." With that, Harry left and returned home. He already knew what Peter would choose, but there were a lot of reasons Harry wanted to give him the choice. The biggest one was that he disliked when people were forced to follow a script that forced them to suffer. He'd seen it before with Reed, Susan, Johnny, and Ben. He'd seen it with Stark. Events beyond their control had altered their lives and shifted them to another path. If Harry hadn't helped, Ben would have been stuck in his rock form and Reed would have felt responsible. If he hadn't been there for Stark, Yinsen would have been killed by weapons manufactured by Stark International. And now there was Peter, the teen who got powers and was being bluntly forced by a conveniently placed code of conduct to use those powers lest he feel responsible for every tragedy that occurs from his lack of action. Harry remembered his own script. He was tossed into a cupboard and left to explode. His death had caused the return of the Triwizard Tournament, and the tournament had caused the return of Voldemort. Had Harry not returned, Voldemort's return would have likely caused the magical community to go too far and get exterminated or forced into a war. Was that a part of the script? Harry still didn't consider himself a hero, but he certainly didn't mind considering himself a meddler. Meddling with the scripts he finds and ripping up the pages which force people to suffer was something he would never grow tired of. He'd saved Jean, Rogue, and Wanda from their own scripts. Jean wouldn't become an unstable deity. Rogue could feel the warmth of another's touch. And Wanda wouldn't become Thawne's avatar. He'd saved Logan's daughter and that daughter's mother. He'd saved Forget-Me-Not and a lot of the X-Men from their scripts. There were scripts he couldn't do anything about, of course. Charles was in a way his own worst enemy, and one day he'd have to deal with the consequences of his choices. The best Harry could do was to get as many people out of the blast radius as possible when that occurred. And though Harry was able to save Yinsen, he wasn't able to save Uncle Ben. The Fate Weavers who killed Harry so long ago had taken another life to move their script along. If it was a good script, he wouldn't mind letting it play out, but if it was anything else, he'd take action. That's what tonight had been about. Though indirectly, Harry was showing Peter the script of what his life had been written to be and asking him if he still wanted to play the part. If so, then Harry would assist and do his best to edit out the shitty parts. If not, then he'd shred the script himself. Of course, ripping a script to shreds was not a simple thing to do from the outside. The easiest way to do so was from within. The plans he'd set up were coming together and soon he'd have the opening he needed. As the old saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them. Peter showed up a week later asking for training and Harry took him down to the basement. "All right, Peter, so what happened and what can you do?" I was bitten by a spider at Oscorp. I didn't even see it until it was already biting my hand. It ran off and I felt really bad. I left and took the bus. I almost passed out but made it home and to bed. Then I woke up like, well, this." He finished gesturing at his muscles and abs. Harry nodded and then placed something against Peter's arm which took some blood before Peter even noticed. "Hey, ow." Harry gave a teasing grin and took the sample over to a home-built analyzer and turned the thing on. It continued running for about 5 minutes while Harry made various adjustments to the system to get specific readouts on specific points. While doing so, Harry asked, "So what changes are there, besides the obvious?" Well, I can stick to walls with my fingertips, I'm a lot stronger and faster, I can even lift up a car and if I really try, I think I can outrun one. I can react really fast too, like really fast. And I get these weird vibes when something dangerous is about to happen near me before it happens. Anything else? Well, I can kinda turn invisible and shock people with a touch, like a taser. The machine finished displaying the results, though only in a way Harry could read. Harry said, "Well, according to these readings, you are still mutating and in less than a year, will turn into a 16-foot-tall, hairy 8-armed spider monster." "What? Oh my god. Just kidding." Peter collapsed and started breathing heavily. After a few moments he said, Don't do that." Harry chuckled. "Consider it punishment for being an idiot. People who think they've got cancer don't wait to go to the doctor's office, and if I hadn't pushed you, did you have any intention of checking your condition anytime soon? I'm only half joking, by the way. You won't turn into a spider monster, but from what I can see, it was a very near thing. You barely lucked out." Peter's hyperventilation certainly did not improve from Harry's admission. Harry let Peter calm down while going over more of the data, and once Peter was back to mostly normal, Harry said, "It looks like that spider somehow got a taste of Susan Storm's blood along with a cocktail of other things I'm not the slightest bit surprised Oscorp is playing with. These mixtures though don't fall under the parameters of any purpose I can think of, so it was probably just exposed to something by accident and surprisingly, didn't die." After a few more rounds of keyboard typing, Harry said, "The wall-crawling thing looks to be a supercharged version of static cling. You can stick to pretty much any solid surface, though if you got zapped with electricity it wouldn't work for a bit, and it definitely won't work on wet surfaces. The invisibility thing looks like a weaker version of Susan Storm's power, and the electric discharge you can emit from your fingertips comes from the same source as the static cling, but stronger. Your muscles have gained arachnid protein markers, which gives you a spider's relative strength and reflex speed, but those markers also make you vulnerable to pesticides, specifically ethyl chloride, which is harmless against humans." After a few more keystrokes Harry continued, "As for the danger precognition, that doesn't seem to come from your DNA, but something else." "How do you know?" "Because there isn't anything in your genes which can cause precognition. If it's not coming from you, then it's being given to you. As for the details, I'll need to look into it a bit more." Harry had a few ideas but nothing conclusive. Being bitten by a genetically altered spider should have resulted in either nothing happening, Peter getting sick and getting better, Peter dying, or Peter turning into a monster. Harry wasn't joking when he said how near of a miss it was. Threading the needle doesn't come close to describing it, and for Peter's sake, Harry wouldn't tell him. But instead, Peter had acquired a mostly stable set of enhanced superhuman abilities while being marked with the essence of the spider. Harry recognized outside interference when he saw it. It was similar to how when Harry himself died, others intervened to make what should have killed him into something that remade him. Something intervened with Peter to make him into what he was and guided the outcome with the lowest possible likelihood to the surface. That being said, it didn't matter too much. Peter had chosen this path willingly, so Harry wouldn't inhibit Peter's growth into a spider totem. In fact, it gave Harry a chance to study the web of destiny. The web connected all multiverses together and could be used to travel from one to another. It meant that others could use this web to find their way to this world, but it also meant Harry could use it to make a roadmap to other universes. After getting Peter's abilities checked, he needed to check his skill. Harry activated the hard light combat system and threw Peter at it. Since he could sense danger before it happened, he'd probably survive. Miles away, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. felt a chill down his spine. The last week had not been pleasant for a number of reasons. 2 reasons really. Harry Potter and Tony Stark. He tried to meet the billionaire at his home and even tried to be sneaky about it. Thanks to the investigation, S.H.I.E.L.D. had access to Stark International files, which included the override codes for Stark's home security, so Fury tried to disable it and walk in, wait for Stark, and make an entrance like the badass spy he was. That didn't work out. Jarvis's security was disabled for a moment, and then re-enabled in some kind of fail-safe program Fury knew wasn't there 2 days ago. With that, he lost his element of surprise and Tony simply called him an intruder. Fury ignored the remark and informed Tony of the Avengers initiative and that he'd stay in touch. If having to deal with Stark was bad enough, the news that broke the following day would have gotten Fury fired if it weren't for the fact that there was no one who could replace him. The world-class criminal known as Magneto had taken over a small island country and had applied for UN membership. All the paperwork was signed, dated, and filed in its proper place. And not a single person in a single intelligence agency on the entire planet saw it coming. Fury had to try very hard not to destroy his own office when he saw the details of Magneto's new nation. Every single citizen, more than 10,000 people, was an awakened mutant, and with the exception of authorized visitors, the island was for mutants only. Fury spent a total of 12 straight hours getting reamed by every member of the World Security Council for not having seen this coming. They had nothing. The island was insular, so when the entire internet in and out of the island stopped working last week, no one noticed or cared. Heavy cloud cover last week stopped any passing satellites from seeing anything. Fury wouldn't be surprised if that application had been viewed by a million lawyers at this point, and even the most creative of them could only conclude that it was completely legitimate. As long as the UN Charter was followed, there was no law preventing outsiders, or in this case, non-mutant outsiders. There was nothing illegal about it because no one had ever thought to pass a law to prevent such a thing. With a change in citizenship, as long as Magneto held the status of leader of this island, he could not be prosecuted for his past crimes and held diplomatic immunity. If he went to a country and committed terrible crimes, the best the country could do was bar him from entry. That however was not what ticked Fury off the most. No, it was the name of the island. He'd heard it before. Genosha. Fury had not been amused at Potter's prank of bringing armed goblins into a classroom. The footage of that class was corrupted, so Agent Morse had to submit some paperwork about what happened for Fury to review. He had in fact checked to see if Genosha was real, but found it was a tiny country no one cared about and passed it off as another prank. It was always a prank. And apparently, that was what Potter wanted them to think. If that wasn't enough, every agency wanted Potter's tech and access to that poison he used on the Mandarin. Potter nearly ended a world-class criminal with a small neck, and were it not for the combined resources of Khan Industries and Stane's personal accounts, Khan would have died long ago. The tech Potter used was heavily documented by Coulson, and the fact that Coulson could use it meant it really was tech, not a magic trick. At least that one piece was. If all of that wasn't enough, everyone wanted to find Obscurus and get that armor and those damn rings. Stane was in custody, but he wasn't exactly doing anything besides demanding a lawyer. Fury had mixed feelings about those rings. He knew that the right people could do a lot of good with tools like that, but also knew that the wrong people could do a lot of damage with them too. With Obscurus taking everything, both possibilities were off the table, and it didn't look like the demon mask-wearing martial artist needed them either. Fury was told what the man said about those things being as bad as the One Ring, and the pictures of the scaled hands of the Mandarin were clear evidence the man wasn't talking out of his ass, but that didn't stop everyone and their grandmother from salivating over the things. At this point Fury was running low on options. Coulson's interactions proved that Potter didn't have any problems with a direct approach, but it was also the weakest type of approach. I need you, not the other way around, and you know it. That's what a direct approach meant. However, Fury needed answers. He needed that tech. He needed to get in touch with Obscurus. It was time to pay the piper. It was time to meet Harry Potter. Author's note. For those who had no idea where this story is really going, this chapter should answer a couple of questions about Harry's motivations and aims. Sorry for not saving Uncle Ben, but there is a big difference between Tony not saving Yinsen and Ben Parker dying. Tony already has a lot of blood on his hands while Peter is an innocent. Best I can do is make sure he doesn't kill everyone he comes into contact with. Chapter 79. Chapter 79, Declaring War on S.H.I.E.L.D. The following Sunday morning, Harry felt a chill. He knew something was coming. Something horrible. The knock that resounded on the front door sent a shiver up his spine. Bracing for anything, Harry approached the door and opened it. He was greeted by a terrible sight and knew his worst fears had come true. A man wearing a bright red and black costume with twin katanas strapped to his back was at the door. In addition to the costume was a skirt, a beret, and a ribbon covered in badges. Hi, I'm selling Girl Scout cookies for Troop 69. Would you like to buy some? Harry narrowed his eyes and flatly asked, "What are you doing here, Deadpool?" "Well, besides congratulating you on your 1-year anniversary, I'm here to sell cookies for a good cause." Harry decided not to ask about the blatant breaking of the fourth wall and instead asked, "Got Thin Mints?" "I do not, but I have caramel delights and shortbread." Harry said, "No thank you," and closed the door. Harry pulled up a security panel and confirmed that a few minutes ago, the cameras watching his place had been turned off. Harry doubted Deadpool did it. He simply used the opportunity to mess with him. Harry returned to the breakfast table where Jade had just joined him and was loading up waffles. A few moments later, the door knocked once more. Harry sighed and asked, "Jade, can you see who it is?" "Huh? Oh sure, Harry." Jade got up and headed for the door and opened it without preamble. Jade took one look at the long coat wearing eye-patched stranger and asked, "Do you know Captain Black?" She got a similar feeling from this guy as her old babysitter. The man at the door stated, "Captain Augustus Black works under me." Jade seemed to be considering it and nodded, seeing that he did seem to be the same type. She asked, "All right, what can I do for you?" "I need to speak with Professor Potter." "'Kay, give me a second." She closed the door and headed back inside. Still waiting at the door, Fury could only sigh at what he had to deal with. Potter's place was impossible to break into. It had a single door, and the several attempts to pick the lock when no one was home had all failed. Fury had been informed the lock was likely a decoy and the door was opened using a different system they couldn't identify or hack. Not that they hadn't tried, but every attempt to hack Potter's personal computer either failed or brought back designs for coffee makers. Stark's house wasn't this hard to hack, or it didn't used to be. In the back of his mind he went over the report about Jade Chan. At a young age and without apparently training, she'd shown herself naturally capable of feats only matched by S.H.I.E.L.D's best when it came to infiltration and extraction. Captain Black, however, blacklisted her from the list of S.H.I.E.L.D. recruits because recruiting her would likely put strain on his partnership with the asset Jackie Chan, someone with a track record that matched Clint Barton's. The door opened once more, but Jade was now wearing an expensive-looking well-fitted G-Man suit complete with black sunglasses and an emotionless stare. She stepped to the side and invited him into the house, which Fury noticed did not look like a living room but a dark stone hallway. Fury entered, and with every other step, a set of torches to his side would illuminate the passage further and further. After a few rounds of torches lighting up, Harry Potter became visible at the end of the hall. He was sitting in a stone car with a very familiar-looking orange cat in his lap, petting it while staring him down. Harry then gave his best impersonation of a James Bond villain's English accent and said, "Hello, Director Fury." Rather than giving Harry any reaction, Fury pulled a small device out of his coat's inner pocket and pushed a button on it. The walls, torches, and Harry's chair started buzzing as if there were a picture on a TV with a bad reception. Harry smiled and got up with Goose in his arm and said, "Well, you're no fun." though you should give your tech boys a raise. Harry then snapped and the hard light vanished and the living room was back to normal. Harry walked over to the couch and sat down with Goose again. Hard light was ridiculously complex and as with anything complex, had a lot of weaknesses. Fury's toy emitted a pitch which messed with the system that determined a location's size which messed with where the hard light system tried to position the hard light, causing it to get fuzzy. Harry could easily compensate for it, but then the tech guys who designed it wouldn't get their raise. Harry asked, "Would you like some coffee? Normally I offer tea, but you seem like a coffee person." Rather than answer and give Harry the initiative, Fury took out a sleek laptop and opened it up to show a video. He hit play and the video started with 11-year-old Harry Potter sitting at a table drinking tea while on the other side of the picture, a group of Death Eaters was being monologued at by Voldemort. Fury asked, "This is you correct?" Harry nodded, "A home video. What of it?" Fury took a breath and said, "I think you're a wizard who can't do magic, a squib. But you can make tech that uses magic, and pass it off as metaphysics." Harry shrugged, "What of it? I want to offer you a position at S.H.I.E.L.D. In return, I'll make sure the Magical Congress of the United States of America stays off your back. I'm satisfied where I am. You'd be able to help a lot of people. I'm already helping a lot of people. Is that why you paid Obscurus to rescue Stark?" "No. You see, that was the first time in my life an AI had asked me to do something. That had my interest piqued enough to do something." Fury inwardly frowned at that though he maintained his stoic expression. He asked with a bit of pressure, "Are you sure you don't need any help with Makusa?" Harry returned a light smirk at the threat and answered, "Completely." 3 barks came from the kitchen. Fury turned and saw a floating golden corgi with a tray in its mouth slowly hover in the air over to the table and set down a tray that had a cup of tea and a mug of coffee with number 1 spy printed on the side of the mug. Harry nonchalantly picked up the teacup and took a sip before setting it down. Fury glared Harry down for a moment and decided to go straight for the point. "What can S.H.I.E.L.D. do to get access to your metagem tech?" "Well, first you'll need to answer a question. If I gave you a powerful weapon that granted you clear superiority over your enemies and it got stolen and used by the bad guys, what would you do? Ask me to give you something even better to counter it? Ask me to retrieve it for you? Or not inform me and keep the fact that you lost the weapon a secret while throwing lives away to recover it yourself?" Fury obviously didn't like the question. The only acceptable answer was that S.H.I.E.L.D. would not lose it, but he knew there was no way to guarantee that. Potter was basically pointing out that anything he gave them would eventually wind up in the hands of others who would not use it to protect others. Fury stated, "I agree that keeping your tech out of the hands of others is for the best, but can you protect it without help? A lot of people have been eyeing your company due your monopolization of the internet. If you can help me then I can help you keep the pressure off." Harry finished off more of his tea and said, "No thank you." Fury leaned back and then flatly asked, "Are you a mutant?" Harry didn't twitch. "Of course. Any form of testing shows I'm not." Which was true. Most tests take longer to run than Harry's blood actually existed for, meaning all tests were inconclusive. Fury asked in response, "Then why did you attend Xavier's school?" "My teacher who helped me lay the foundation of metaphysics recommended the school to me. There were a large amount of students who benefited from my research into metaphysics, such as Wanda Maximoff." "Just so? Is your relationship with her why you helped her father conquer Genosha?" "I've never been to Genosha and my relationship with his daughter has nothing to do with what I heard happened there." All true. Harry used a lot of portals and invisible drones, but he never actually stepped foot on Genosha, and the reason Harry gave it to Magneto was because Magneto sacrificed Asteroid M, not because of his relationship with Magneto's daughter. Fury did his best not to slam his fist on the table or show his anger. He took another look at Goose and said, "I used to know a cat that looked like that." Harry said, "I found her in a pet store that sold strange animals when I was 10. The store owner said they got tricked into buying her because there were some strange stories about her, but the owner never saw anything strange and offered to sell her to me at a discount. I liked her and it was close to my birthday so I bought her then." Goose meowed and Harry looked down at her and smirked. He said, "She doesn't like it when people pick her up and talk to her like a child. She's a lot older than she looks, you know." Fury couldn't stop his eye from visibly twitching at that. He asked, "What's her name?" Harry smiled, "Goose." Harry was 99% sure he heard Fury mutter under his breath, "Mother Flurkin," which had Harry wonder where the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. had met his familiar before, but decided not to press the issue. Everyone had their own stories and even Lockheed the Dragon King had met Goose before. Harry asked, "Why are you so dead set on me and my tech?" Jonathan Silvercloud accepts commissions and Reed Richards is always up for a challenging project. Why not go to them? Fury remained silent. S.H.I.E.L.D. had in fact made several requests for designs from Forge over the years, but he, ironically, charged an arm and a leg for each one, and the tech was always just barely at a level superior to what they already had. Reed was an option, but there were a number of parties who decided Reed's time was better spent on other projects, their projects, instead of doing anything useful for S.H.I.E.L.D. Deciding enough was enough, Fury said, "I won't be able to hold back the guys with designs on your tech and your company if I have nothing to show for it. S.H.I.E.L.D. itself may force the issue and it would be out of my hands." Harry's smile actually widened. He said, "If S.H.I.E.L.D., or anyone really, decides to declare war on me, I will respond in kind the only way I know how." Fury narrowed his eye, leaned forward and asked, "And what would that be?" "A prank war, of course." Fury was unable to prevent his eyebrow from visibly twitching at that one. Was this kid serious? Fury states, this isn't a joke, Potter. That's rather naive as from a certain point of view, everything is a joke to someone. Fury was getting more irritated, so Harry just said, look, I'm not going to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. since I already have a job and selling anything to S.H.I.E.L.D. would do more long-term damage than good. If you need something, you can hire me as a consultant. You don't even need to pay me, I just need one thing and I'll help if you call for something interesting. And what exactly would that be? I need a photo of you in an afro wig. Fury stood up, turned and headed for the door without a word. Potter was pushing his buttons, but he didn't intend to move against him for something like this. Fury walked a few blocks to where a van was waiting for him and opened the door. The moment he did, someone walked out, put a hand in Fury's pocket, and pulled out a piece of paper. Fury didn't move or stop him. This was standard protocol when dealing with possible magicals. The color of the paper showed that Fury had been in close contact with someone who had a trace amount of exotic energy, consistent with a squib. Of course, the main purpose of the paper was that should anyone cast a spell on Fury, the paper would clearly show it. Harry was not aware that Fury carried such a paper on him, but it would not have mattered if he did. Harry always kept his wizard magic within him using the same technique he taught Hermione. It was second nature at this point, and he only released it to use wizard magic when practicing while in the basement. Had Fury entered the basement, the residual magic from Harry's practice would have drastically changed the color of the paper. The paper confirmed that no spell had been covertly cast on Fury, which ensured he was not compromised. When Fury stepped onto the van, the agent then pulled something off Fury's back with a strange look and then handed it to Fury. It was a piece of paper that said, "Kick me." Fury almost growled. It was time for war. Several weeks later, a bill was introduced in DC that would heavily limit Brilliance Incorporated. A lot of companies had been trying to hold Harry's company down, but until this point they had not been able to move. But now, not only did the government stop holding them back, they started helping them. The following day, the bill failed with nearly every single congressman voting against it. When asked why, everyone had apparently been inundated and completely overwhelmed with calls, texts, and emails demanding them not to vote for it. Apparently, every Brilliance Inc. subscriber had been sent a message about the bill informing them what the bill did and that if it was passed, their monthly service charge would increase. Every subscriber was given a way to contact their local congressman and make their opinion about the matter known. Had any congressman voted yes, they knew they would never win re-election, so they had no choice despite what they had promised to do beforehand. This completely shocked everyone involved. There was no law against a service provider informing customers of something that was true, but such a tactic was usually used by companies to get customers to leave their competitors. This was the first time a cell phone company used this means to control the vote of the government. Fury was not pleased when he saw the report. Despite what others wanted them to think, the power of governments were given to them by the people, and if Brilliance Inc. could turn the people against the ones in power, those elected officials would not be able to make a move against Harry Potter unless he did something the public could be convinced was bad enough to allow such sanctions. Fury was currently on the helicarrier, which had only launched the prior week. It was the most advanced command center in the world and in times of crisis, could head over to wherever it was needed to directly enforce order and quell chaos. Had the helicarrier been operational during the Mole Man crisis, they would have had a lot more options than waiting for a bunch of super-powered individuals to make them look completely useless. Director Fury? You're going to need to come and see this. One of the men at a computer station in the main deck of the helicarrier nervously pointed at the security monitor. A more assertive tech looked over and saw the feed. He then pushed the new guy away, took control of the console, and directed the image of the security feed to the main screen. On the feed were two distinct figures. One was covered in sleek black armor with a black helmet and familiar black faceplate. The other was dressed in loose brown robes. The pair each had what were clearly lightsabers, one purple and one red, and were fighting each other in what appeared to be the mess hall of the helicarrier. The tech zoomed into the combating figures on the screen and a number of heads turned as the one with the purple lightsaber had an eye patch and clearly looked exactly like Fury, who was standing in the room with them. Suddenly the sound turned on. The eye-patched robed fighter shouted, "Curse you, Black Vader. You killed my father." The dark-armored foe answered back in a raspy but highly familiar voice, "No, Fury. I am your father." The purple lightsaber-wielding knight paused for a moment and shouted, "What?" Then he leapt forward and screamed, "You motherfucker! You said you were going out for a pack of cigarettes." The purple saber clashed violently with more and more force against the red lightsaber as the Fury on the screen shouted, "You're not dead. You never came back and you're not dead. You bastard. Just die. Die, you son of a bitch." Everyone on the command deck had done about a dozen double takes between the screen and the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. standing in front of them. The voice was the same, the shape and form were the same, and the way he shouted was the same. The screen flashed and then returned to a normal-looking mess hall just as the agents on their way entered and confirmed everything looked normal. Fury said, "Get me Widow and Hawkeye." Another 2 weeks later, Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton were standing before Fury with a report, and Fury was not amused. The few times they tried to tail Harry Potter or his girls, the intel they got was completely useless. Barton tried to break into the house of a member of the board of directors of Brilliance Inc. and Natasha tried to seduce another one into giving him some insider details she could use, but Barton found nothing that made it look like the member even had anything to do with Brilliance Inc. and Natasha seemed to think that the guy she was assigned to had no idea how the company actually worked because she got nothing from him. During those 2 weeks, the camera feed to various SHIELD sites had been hacked on nearly a daily basis. Usually the camera showed that the helicarrier or a secure site was being invaded or assaulted by stormtroopers. There was no protocol for hacking like this, so they had to treat each incident like a real incursion, which cost SHIELD a very large amount of money each time it occurred. Natasha asked while doing her best to hide her amusement, "Will that be all, Director?" At that moment, the computer monitors on the command deck, even the ones not on cameras, suddenly pulled up a camera feed of a dark room with a woman in a leather dominatrix outfit and a man in only shorts tied to a large X. The woman in the shiny leather bore an identical resemblance to Natasha, and the man bound to the X looked exactly like Barton, though he didn't have the scars Barton had. The Natasha on the video feed used a small lashing whip and struck the bound Clint and said, "What do we say?" He murmured something and she struck him again, and repeated, "What do we say?" The Clint on the video said, "More." Natasha struck him again and Clint groaned, "More." The shameless red-headed assassin in the command center gave the video an appreciative look before slowly turning to give a teasing glance at Clint, who had already looked away from the monitor with a bit of a blush. The video feed then cut to an image of the White House, which was then shot from above by an energy weapon which caused it to explode. The change caught everyone off guard and a few people screamed. Fury said, "Quiet. That's just a scene from Independence Day." The next day, Fury met with the liaison between the US government and Makusa. "Potter is one of you and he's displaying magic to everyone and their fucking cats. What are you doing about it?" The robbed man sneered and said, "No magic has been detected from Harry Potter since his arrival in the States. He does not own a wand, dropped out of school before the end of his first year, and is registered as a squib. Do not waste our time with nomage problems." That was all Fury could get out of him. The following day, the helicarrier was, somehow, filled with chickens. If that wasn't bad enough, over half of the SHIELD agents on long-term undercover missions received a fruit basket that contained produce from the region they grew up in. No one knew how the chickens got on board. No one knew how the breach occurred that allowed someone to find the SHIELD agents who were undercover and where they grew up. When a policy was issued that told people to ignore the stormtroopers on the security feeds, the hacked feeds changed to fiddling xenomorphs from the Alien movie franchise. As in, they were walking through the halls with actual fiddles and playing The Devil Went Down to Georgia with remarkable skill. Sometimes they would be followed by a line of chickens. It was a week after that which had the craziest incident. Hawkeye and Black Widow were assigned to lead Strike Team Delta to rescue an asset held by a crime syndicate in Budapest, Hungary. The syndicate had obtained outside assistance far greater than the details of the operation suggested they could, and the team was nearly wiped out while being outnumbered 20-1. The only plans they had to get themselves out of there alive involved actions which would get innocent civilians harmed, but they were running out of options. Then the chickens came. Over 300 chickens flew in or simply ran into the fight and started viciously pecking at and scratching the enemy forces. Barton and Widow used the chance to lead the injured members of Strike Team Delta and the asset out of harm's way while the chickens completely ignored them. It was the very next day that Agent Coulson was knocking at Harry Potter's door. Harry opened up and said, "Hello, Agent Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement Logistics Division." Coulson smiled and handed Harry a photograph. Harry took it with a smile. It was a picture of a scowling Fury wearing a large black afro wig. Coulson said, "Good evening, Professor. I've been instructed to ask you not to make or distribute any copies." Harry nodded and said, "Understood. Would you like your copy in wallet size, photo-sized, or a poster-sized?" "Poster-sized, please." Harry nodded and invited Coulson in for tea. Coulson asked, "What fields would you say you are best at when it comes to working as a consultant?" "A lot of them, to be honest. Tech, history, and the occult could be said to be my specialties. But I also learned chemistry, biology, and genetics from Dr. Hank McCoy, and I'm not weaker in that area than Professor Stearns or Professor Connors of NYU are. Is there anything you're not an expert in?" "Probably English literature, art, nursing, children, and a few other things. So I'm not a babysitter." "Can I ask how you hacked the video feeds?" Harry considered it and went over to a computer, typed a few things out, and got out a disk. He handed it to Coulson and said, "Holograms over small, silent drones which made them pretty much invisible and undetectable. The drones broke in and allowed for remote hacking. You can have this program for your troubles. It makes indivisible things easier to see on a security monitor, so if anyone tries to use hologram generating invisible drones to prank SHIELD in the future, this will let you match them." Coulson seemed visibly relieved at the offer and took the disk gratefully. "What about the chickens?" Harry smiled. "What chickens?" Coulson chuckled at that. "If nothing else, working with the professor wouldn't be boring. Chapter 80. Chapter 80 Harry Potter, Space Wizard. Within the 17th floor of a building on the alien world of Xandar, Harry sat in a chair waiting for the woman at the counter to finish entering the forms he finished filling out into a terminal pad. In his lap was Goose the Flurkin, who had a new collar. When Harry decided to take Goose on a walk through Xandar, he discovered a small problem which he hadn't expected. Apparently Flarekens really do look like orange cats, and a number of people recognized Goose for a Flurkin on sight. Of course, not everyone used eyes and visible light to see. Some aliens and species could tell Goose was a Flurkin on sight even if Goose was surrounded by normal orange tabby cats. Harry had to break out the old memory charm to prevent mass panic, as the universal form of recognition when most species met a Flurkin was to scream like a little girl. Goose was nonplussed about the whole thing, as if she was completely used to it. Harry made a collar that had a dozen or so spells imbued that either hide the visible signs or caused people to ignore the fact that she was a flurkin. Harry was, for the first time, able to find out what a flurkin was from some of those people. Flarekins were considered eldritch monsters with an internal pocket dimension that were capable of mass, indiscriminate slaughter which came in small, furry packages. Harry chuckled at that. On Earth the species, besides humans, who participated in indiscriminate slaughter more than any other was none other than the house cat. No other species killed for amusement like the house cat. Flarekins were also quite rare and could apparently teleport. Harry had never seen Goose teleport but he'd guessed she was capable of doing so since that time she appeared at the graveyard and ate Voldemort. At the desk, a woman who looked remarkably similar to human said, "All right Mr. Potter, your identity has been successfully entered. Please confirm the details and sign here." Harry walked over and confirmed on the computer screen the details were right. Harry was applying for an ID and the only thing missing was planet of origin. If Harry made enemies in space, he didn't want them to look for him on Earth. Thankfully planet of origin wasn't really a necessity. Some people were born on ships after all. After confirming everything and signing everything, Harry took Goose and headed a few floors up to a bank to create an account and deposit a trunk filled with gold. This had been a very busy week for him since his prank war with S.H.I.E.L.D. ended with Fury waving the Afro flag. Harry arranged for a meeting with Coulson and Obscurus where Obscurus listened to Coulson's sales pitch and politely rejected it. During the meeting, Coulson asked, "Is there something you don't like about S.H.I.E.L.D.?" In the American accent Harry used for Obscurus, Harry answered, "Just spy agencies in general. Tell me, hypothetically, if there was a foreign spy group in another country, would S.H.I.E.L.D. send someone to infiltrate it?" Coulson hesitated for a moment before he answered, "Hypothetically, I imagine so. And, hypothetically, this agent who infiltrated the group, in order to gain a higher position in order to gain more valuable intel, they would probably give up specific accurate tidbits of information. Basically giving information S.H.I.E.L.D. has to this group in exchange for information the group has that S.H.I.E.L.D. does not." Hypothetically, yes, that's how I imagine it would work. So, if that is true for other spy groups, then it is certainly true for S.H.I.E.L.D. Anything I tell another spy group will likely end up in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s hands, and anything I tell S.H.I.E.L.D. will likely end up in the hands of others. When you remove all the pointless details, that's all spy agencies really are, hubs for the exchange of secret information. So you don't want to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. because that would give your information to others. There are other reasons but that one is probably the most important. How do you know I'm not a spy from another country? Potter protected you, right? I trust his judgment. After that meeting Harry had to take a plane to California and meet with Stark about the cooperation between companies. First thing Stark asked of course was, "So where's Demon Dude and when do I get to meet him?" Harry rolled his eyes and said, "Obscurus is my bodyguard in the same way Iron Man is your bodyguard." The genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist did 3 double takes at that before he put together, "But I am Iron Man. And you were with Pepper." Harry tapped on the watch he wore 3 times and a hard light hologram appeared over him matching that of Obscurus's form. He said in Obscurus's voice, "Ever hear of life model decoys? Useful to prevent assassination attempts and to prank billionaires with ice cream trucks and fudge bars." Tony shook and shouted, "What? That was genius? You have to show me." Tony had suddenly turned into a 5-year-old at Christmas time and Harry could only turn off the hologram and chuckle. Tony regained clarity for a moment and asked, "But wait, why tell me your identity? Because if I didn't, you'd waste resources trying to find out. If you found out yourself, you'd probably tell others because you'd feel you earned the secret yourself. If I tell you though, you won't tell others because that would betray the trust I'm giving you in telling you the secret." Tony frowned for a moment before his eyebrows rose in minor astonishment at the fact that Harry apparently had his personality pegged. "All right, show me how these metagems work. I want to see if I can upgrade my armor." Harry nodded and spent the day showing him the metaphysics behind a few of them and explained how they'd react to muons. None of them could be used to power up the suit, but they could give a few upgrades to the existing systems and grant him a number of neat tricks. Later, Pepper came over and Harry went over the details of what the companies could do together with her. It seemed she was pretty much the CEO in everything but name already. For the Xandarian Bank, the only trouble Harry encountered was the scanner at the entrance. Harry had to use a bit of technopathy to disable, otherwise it would have recognized Goose for what she was. Harry's ability to manipulate alien technology with technopathy at the moment was limited to turning off and on scanning and monitoring devices. Manipulating and reading off data from computers was not an option yet though he could crash a system if needed. Currently the forms of alien technology Harry had studied were Makluan from the Mandarin, Time Lord and Sonic from the Doctor, and a tiny bit of Celestial from Mr. Sinister which he apparently got from Apocalypse. Surprisingly or not, nothing he learned from any of it was of any use understanding the tech of Xandar which seemed both advanced and primitive which was a confusing combination he needed to get his hands into first. The fact that Harry's ID was brand new did raise a few flags at the bank, but bars of pure gold were a magic of their own and any issues the bank had were squashed then and there. Gold was commonly hoarded so there was always a need for the pure metal and the unmarked ingots Harry deposited were 100% pure thanks to the alchemic magic of the Philosopher's Stone. After getting an ID and a bank account, Harry needed a taxi, or the equivalent of one, to take him off the planet. Sure, there were some decent things he could buy on Xandar, but he didn't want to waste his time wading through the kiddie pool. Xandar was not a place you could buy guns or combat-capable spacecrafts because it was just too damn peaceful and there were a lot of laws that came with living here. According to the info he lifted off a few seedy characters, the best place to head to was called the Hub. It was basically a space station built for and by ridiculously seedy individuals. Unfortunately, there was no bus from the peaceful and law-line Xandar to the dangerous and seedy Hub, so Harry had to find some characters to give him a ride. That was how Harry ended up walking into a bar that happened to be the main hangout of the local crime syndicate in the area. The Ravagers were the collective group of thieves and criminals throughout this and several other galaxies. Each clan was separate, but all followed the same, vague code of honor. This particular band was generally known for smuggling, so they were the best taxi service around. Harry scanned the surface thoughts of a couple of individuals who looked mostly normal. Shaniks are a universal form of communication, so even if they thought in a different language, a slightly deeper reading would allow him to get the gist of it. No one spared a second glance at Goose. Well, almost no one. A young man who looked remarkably human walked up to Harry and asked, "Hey, is that a cat or a flurkin?" Harry raised an eyebrow and smirked. "You've seen a cat before?" Well, yeah, they were everywhere on Terra. Terra was the somewhat accepted name for Earth since the planet couldn't be named after the word for dirt. Harry wasn't sure why they didn't just name it Midgard, since that's what Asgard called it and the planet was under their banner. Harry asked, "Wait, you've been to Terra?" The man laughed. "I was born on Terra." Harry smiled and said, "Then let me buy you a drink. My name's Harry Potter." Peter Quill. Harry used the apparent human to gauge what was good and what was not. Apparently none of it was really good for human palates, but it was an experience, so he got the best of what they had anyways. The spells Harry put on Goose's collar would not prevent people from recognizing her as a cat, simply because he didn't think anyone knew that flarekens apparently looked like cats. And if someone knew that flarekens looked like cats, they could guess that an orange cat might be a flurkin even under the effect of the spell. It wasn't something Harry had been expecting, though he couldn't be blamed for that because he wasn't even in the Milky Way and certainly had not expected to find a human, or as they were called, Terran. After paying for the drinks, Harry said, "I actually picked up Goose here on Terra a few years ago." "How'd you end up here from Terra?" "Got kidnapped by the Ravagers." "Wait, I thought the Ravagers didn't traffic kids. It's against their code, right?" "Well, I wasn't sold or anything. They kinda just raised me." "I see. Do you want to go back?" "It'll take a while, but I could probably figure out how to get you there." "Thanks but no thanks. My mom, well, she died of cancer right before I was taken. I don't have anything to go back for. Besides, they're not that bad." "I see. Well, probably for the best. Terra is really dangerous nowadays." "Really? Why?" Harry sighed and shook his head. "From what I understand, some crazy scientist caused all the animals to evolve into hyper-intelligent humanoids. They outnumbered and outgunned the humans and took over. Now humans are at the lowest tier of the social caste, just barely above slaves." "What? That's crazy." Peter looked outraged for a moment before he noticed Harry's smirk. Peter's eyes narrowed and he declared, "You're an asshole." Harry burst out laughing at the accurate observation and said, "Well, in any case, can I talk business with you? How much to take me and some cargo to the hub?" Peter rolled his eyes at the change of subject and asked, "What's the cargo?" "Large metal crate, 300 kilograms. I need to take it to someone at the hub." Peter considered it and asked, "How much?" 5,000 credits. 1,000 now. The rest once we get to the hub." Peter nodded and said, "I'll get Yondu." A credit, or unit as it was often called, was worth a decent chunk more than an American dollar or a British pound. 10,000 or so credits could get you a dinky ship that was probably stolen off a dead guy. For a taxi service to the well-known hub without needing to go through any dangerous territories, it was easy money. Of course, Harry fully expected to get ripped off. A blue-skinned man walked over to Harry's table and asked, "You here for business?" Harry nodded. "I need to get a box to the hub. 1,000 now. 4 more on delivery." The blue-skinned man smiled. "Where's it being delivered and how fast would we get the rest?" "Any port on the hub will do. I'll take care of matters once we arrive. As soon as the crate is on the hub, I'll pay you the rest." Yondu held out his hand and said, "Well, I think we've got ourselves a deal." Harry took it and gave it a firm shake. The crate itself was something Harry used transmutation to create, and Harry had it delivered to the hangar Yondu's ship was in. The reason that more than 24 other members of the Ravagers were coming along was because they also had business at the hub. After liftoff, Harry was tempted to ask for a tour as this was his first spaceship flight, but he didn't want to look like a rubbernecking hillbilly. Once he found the ship of someone who wasn't a part of a galaxy-spanning crime syndicate, he'd consider breaking pretenses and having a look around. Since he had time to kill, Harry went over the most recent stacks of paperwork the Goblins sent him, which had been stored in his inventory. It wasn't long ago that some of the Goblins found a rather interesting loophole when it came to magical and mundane law about goblins. To put it bluntly, the laws that forbid goblins from working with magicals or mundanes outside of most circumstances did not apply to Genosha. The island nation was composed entirely of mutants who, through a technicality, could be classified as neither magical nor mundane. The law did not prevent goblins from working with a country that did not have magical or mundane occupants, since such a place should have no one to work with. After this discovery, dozens and dozens of applications had been submitted to create an unholy union between Goblin and mutant kind. Harry had no problem signing most of it as long as it didn't allow the Goblins to harm the people of Genosha. Many of these papers would also require Eric's signature using his real name, Magnus. Harry could tell Eric that signing such a contract and breaking it would have terrible consequences for him, but he wouldn't. After giving Eric Genosha, Harry no longer owed anything to Eric and the pair really weren't friends. Some of the projects were rather interesting. Farms contained in collapsible spaces. The purchasing of materials some mutants were capable of creating. There was even a Goblin magic research team that requested access to the mutants to advance their knowledge. Goblins had purchased Harry's metaphysics textbooks as well of course and could use it better than anyone but Harry because they were the only species with access to metagems. Harry approved the research group but placed a number of restrictions to protect the mutants who agreed to assist. He also wrote up a few suggestions for projects he thought of such as space farms. A number of mutants could teleport or create portals so if distance was not an issue, space farms would become a ridiculously profitable venture. As for the actual setup, Goblins would form companies on Genosha the same way they did with Harry and Genosha would buy the materials and sell the products. The only problem Harry could see was that Goblins may end up hoarding the planet's wealth for themselves so Harry would have to make more things Goblins would be interested in buying to ensure they spent the money they made rather than hoarding it all. As for the unspeakable horrors Harry's signature would unleash upon the world, Harry truly didn't care. Besides going over the documents, Harry also spent the ride looking over the info of the Ravagers. The big thing going on in the galaxy right now was the Kree-Nova War which had gone on for nearly 1,000 years. That was both good and bad for Harry. Good because the weapons and combat-capable ships up for sale would be better than decent at the moment. Bad because they would also be either really expensive or sold out. War really did a number on supply and demand, especially long wars. Harry's wish list for this trip included a combat-capable ship, an assortment of advanced weaponry, a detailed star map, a powerful interstellar communications system, and a sample of a large variety of spices. Though most space food would not be tasty for humans, non-poisonous spices could be used to increase Harry's cooking repertoire and increase his craft skill to a better degree with each meal. From what Harry could tell though, he'd have a few problems. Space travel in the Andromeda Galaxy was not what Harry was hoping for. Around a majority of inhabited planets was a couple of space gates. Space gates connected through another dimension where distance was far shorter to another space gate, basically a shortcut through space. Most if not all trips were basically just hopping from one space gate to another. The Ravagers ship seemed capable of interstellar flight without a space gate, but Harry doubted he'd get a chance to see it in action. That meant even if Harry purchased a ship, it might not have anything useful for traveling through the Milky Way. Harry didn't really need to travel the Milky Way, but he still wanted an engine that would give him the option of doing so. The other problem was that interstellar communication seemed to just be connecting to the nearest space gate and using it as a telephone to the space gate of the planet you were calling. This meant Harry couldn't use a ship's communication platform to jury-rig an intergalactic communicator to give to Jean. The jump from Xandar to the hub required about 12 space gates and passing through them was a bit weird, but far more comfortable than apparition. Harry wasn't able to get the 6-dimensional coordinates of the planets near where those space gates were set up because the time between jumps wasn't long enough and he was being watched, so he couldn't portal there later, but Harry already had his own plans for that. Originally he intended to fill the metal crate with rats, porno mags, fireworks, or manure, but after seeing Peter here, Harry changed his mind and had another idea. It required making a portal to Earth and a time turner to set up, but it would be worth it. 12 jumps didn't take very long and soon the massive space station known as the hub was in sight from the ship's window. After docking at the station, Yondu walked Harry through the gate to the station and said, "This is where we part." Harry feigned ignorance and asked, "Where will you be unloading the crate?" Yondu smiled and said, "We're keeping it. So you can keep your 4,000 credits. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Potter." Harry pretended to frown as if upset and then turned and stormed off to hide his smile. The deal was 4,000 credits more once the crate was delivered to the hub. Didn't that mean if they didn't want the money, they could keep the crate? It went against the spirit of the agreement, but not the letter. If they could get 5,000 credits for delivering the crate, didn't that mean the contents were worth more than 5,000 credits? Of course, Harry implied that whoever was going to take it off his hands was at the hub, meaning they couldn't sell it to someone else unless they took him to the hub first. 1,000 credits to get Harry safely to the hub wasn't that bad of a deal all things considering. He even left them with a gift. After walking a short distance away from Yondu, Harry turned invisible and apparat back into the ship. The group excitedly gathered around the crate and using some fancy-looking space crowbars they ripped the front panel off. When the group looked inside, everyone had a look of confusion except for Peter. Peter looked like a kid on Christmas as he walked up to the classic arcade machine and pressed the start button which brought the machine to life. Within were the classic titles of Mortal Kombat, Pac-Man, Street Fighter, Metal Slug, Tetris, Pong, Tron, Frogger, Galaga, and Centipede. Peter then called over Yondu and showed him how it worked. Harry smiled. The machine's battery would last a few decades and included a tracking device that would mark the 6-dimensional coordinates of any planet the Ravagers visited. Harry would leave a black box on Xandar which the tracker would communicate with via the astral plane. The coordinates would not be sent in real time and would have a delay of a few hours to a few days depending on distance, but as long as Harry got the coordinates eventually, the time it took to get them wasn't relevant. They probably could still sell it, but Harry doubted it. Harry placed a number of compulsions on the thing which would make them want to keep it and set it somewhere in the ship, but the compulsions weren't very strong though, so they wouldn't affect the ship or the arcade machine itself. Harry couldn't be certain if the compulsion was working or if they were genuinely interested in the arcade machine, but once it was obvious they weren't going to toss it, Harry operated back into the hub and started exploring. Harry didn't look like he was carrying anything but his shirt, pants, and shoes, so even though he walked by a number of disreputable-looking aliens, he was ignored. Harry tried a few spells and concluded the space station's tech was not as flimsy as Earth tech, so nothing would explode if he cast a wizard spell. Once he determined that, he cast a notice me not on himself that would make people looking for someone who doesn't belong to not notice that he didn't belong. Of course, if someone was looking for someone to pick a fight with, they'd still be able to pick Harry out of a crowd, but Harry wasn't stopped when he passed through areas guarded by tough-looking alien bouncers. The hub itself had a dozen or so levels, each larger than an apartment complex on Earth. The top couple of levels were where high-end mob bosses set up shop, and the middle levels were where things were bought and sold. The higher the level, the better the stuff looked. Not that much of it was actually better, it just looked better. The lower levels were a nice place to disappear for idiots who tried buying or selling things without knowing what they were doing. Harry decided he might stop by later. Harry found that although a number of locations sold weapons, most of them were worse than things he'd seen on Earth. Pretty much the stuff that was so bad, even the Xandarian military wouldn't buy them, which of course was likely they ended up here in the first place. After a few hours of walking around, Harry found the equivalent of a space cafe where he ordered something that looked decent and found a table near a window. Well, convinced a person at a table near a window they were finished at the moment Harry happened to arrive. He really missed being able to use magic. I am Groot. Harry turned to see a walking humanoid tree talking to a walking raccoon. Though his words were clear, Harry felt the meaning was closer to, I want to sit at the window. There were a few empty seats at the table Harry chose and he gestured to them and said, feel free. Harry did his best not to rudely perform a double take at the walking raccoon, who took another seat and said, well, that's mighty neighborly of you. Harry smiled and asked, so what's a gentleman of your bearing doing at the hub? The raccoon laughed, oh, that's a good one. You're not a cop, are you? 'Cause it's a rule that if you are a cop and someone asks you, you can't lie. Harry said, nope. Not a cop. All right, not a cop, why you being so nosy? Harry shrugged. First time at the hub. I want to know what's there to do there and where can I get some weapons and tech. The raccoon chuckled and replied, you don't look like a first-timer. They get real jittery. And good luck getting any weapons that won't blow your hand off on these levels. Harry couldn't help but smile at what the raccoon was implying. Then you wouldn't happen to know any place I could find some, would you? Hehe. Depends what you're looking for and on how far you're willing to go. Harry held out a hand and said, Harry Potter, pleasure to meet you. Heh, name's Rocket. I am Groot. Harry held up Goose and drew their attention to her by saying, and this is Goose. Rocket immediately shouted, holy shit, kill it with fire. Harry laughed. For some reason he liked these guys.